Chapter 1 Sleeping. In a luxurious, brightly decorated hotel room, the floor is covered in clothes and in a state of chaos. Suddenly, a sweet, feminine voice breaks the silence. Oh. The voice seems to penetrate the soul and evoke feelings of compassion. Then came a low, magnetic response. Okay. Don't move around. Don't worry, baby, I'll take full responsibility for you. These firm words, like an oath, echoed in the air, giving a sense of inexplicable security. Ow. It hurts, it hurts. The sweet voice continued to beg for mercy with a hint of crying. A very handsome face kissed Xiaowan's mouth on a summer night, and after the kiss, he looked deeply at Xiaowan beneath him and said in a sexy voice, okay? Just like that, time passed by minute, and the two seemed to have fallen into an endless orgy, going crazy all night. It wasn't until midnight that Huo Siyuan finally stopped the stormy actions, and by then Xiaowan was already exhausted and fell asleep. Huo Siyuan carefully picked up Xiaowan, who was sound asleep, and slowly walked into the bathroom as if he were holding a precious treasure. He gently adjusted the water temperature to a comfortable temperature, and then used delicate techniques to wash every inch of Xiaowan's skin. His eyes were full of love and compassion, afraid of waking up the delicate woman in his arms. After the shower, he carefully dressed Xiaowan in brand new pajamas, moving with such care that he seemed afraid of waking a sleeping butterfly. Then, he gently placed Xiaowan back on the bed so that she could lie comfortably. Huo Siyuan sat quietly by the bed, gazing deeply at the beautiful woman beside him. Her peaceful sleeping face was like a beautiful painting, intoxicating him. He couldn't help reaching out and gently stroking Xiaowan's cheek, feeling the softness and warmth of her skin. Finally, he embraced Xiaowan tightly, closed his eyes, and soon fell into a sweet dream. The next morning, the sun shone through the gaps in the curtains and fell on the bed. Xiaowan slowly opened her big, round, lovely eyes and tried to move her body, but she felt unbearable soreness all over her body, as if she had experienced a tragic car accident and been mercilessly run over by a huge truck. The pain made her frown and groan in a low voice. Xiaowan did her best to barely turn her head around. Her originally confused eyes suddenly seemed to be attracted by a magnet, and they fixed firmly on the flawless, heroic face beside her. As a veteran face controller, Xiaowan felt that the face that came into view at this moment was simply a work of art carefully crafted by God. Its beauty had already surpassed the height that any male star in the current entertainment industry could reach. Just looking at this face is enough to make a person feel enchanted, as if they were in a dream. What's even more amazing is that even though the other person is currently in a state of sleep, just gazing at his quiet sleeping countenance makes it clear that a powerful and dignified aura is constantly spewing out from him. This invisible pressure is as heavy as Mount Tai crushing eggs, and even just silently watching from a distance makes a person feel timid and can't help but feel a sense of awe. Xiaowan knew very well that a person with such extraordinary temperament must be of a special status and no ordinary person. Recalling what happened yesterday, she realized that she had probably inadvertently offended a person who must not be easily offended. Filled with fear, Xiaowan knew that she must race against time to escape while the mysterious man was still asleep. So, she gritted her teeth, endured the severe pain in every part of her body, and did her best to struggle to sit up. However, at the moment she tried to get up, a wave of excruciating pain suddenly swept through her body, and Xiaowan involuntarily let out a cold breath. Whoosh! It hurts! She clenched her lips to try to suppress the moans of pain, but tears flowed down her cheeks like a burst dam. Each tear seemed to carry endless pain and grievances, quietly falling onto the cold ground. Xiaowan spent a lot of effort to finally get up from the bed and stand shakily. She looked around in confusion and saw her clothes scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. She bent down to pick them up, and when she looked closely, she saw that the clothes had already been torn to pieces, as if they had been torn apart by a fierce beast, and were obviously no longer wearable. Summer Night glared at the seemingly unintimidating handsome man in front of her, and cursed in a low voice, "You bad guy, are you a dog? You actually ruined my clothes, oh no! This is a new shirt she just bought. She already had a hard life, and now she doesn't even have a decent shirt." The more she thought about it, the more she felt aggrieved. Why does everyone bully her? As she thought about it, her tears flowed like a burst flood. While crying, she looked around for clothes and finally grabbed a white shirt off the floor. She thought to herself, this must be the man's shirt on the bed, so she took it as compensation for him tearing her clothes. So Xiaowan endured the pain and moved to the bathroom to change into his shirt. Xiaowan, who was 1.65 meters tall, instantly transformed into a white dress with a length just reaching the middle of her thighs when she wore the shirt of a 1.9 meter tall man. Xiaowan had read novels before and knew that this powerful man might seek revenge on her. So, like a frightened deer, she grabbed her hair with both hands and tried to cover her face, thinking to herself, this way, the man won't be able to find me through surveillance. He. I'm really clever. Xiaowan quickly covered her face with her hair, gently opened the door, kept her head down the whole time, and left as slowly as a snail. Xiaowan took a deep breath of relief as she stepped out of the hotel. She looked down at herself, wearing only a white shirt, and didn't even dare to take big steps when walking. Xiaowan felt her whole body and was surprised to find that she was penniless. It seemed that she could only go home on foot. In a luxurious room in a hotel. Huo Siyuan finally woke up with a start. He stretched out his strong and powerful arm and felt around, but he didn't touch what he wanted. So, he slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were sharp and deep, like two red lasers, burning and peeling everything in their path. Huo Siyuan glanced sideways, and the place around him was empty, like a barren land. His face instantly turned as dark as ink. He sat up abruptly, rolled out of bed, and scanned the area like lightning, but still couldn't find the figure of the person he longed for. Suddenly, a delicate red rose bloomed on the pure white bedsheet, like a ball of burning flames, instantly pulling his thoughts back to last night. As he thought about it, the corner of his mouth rose slightly, outlining a devilishly charming smile. He quickly picked up the phone and said in a deep voice, "Find out who the girl in my room last night was." Chapter 2 Poor Xiaowan. Xiaowan dragged her exhausted body along, taking each step as if it required all her strength. She didn't know how long she had been walking for, but she couldn't faint here. She had to persevere. Finally, after a long and arduous journey, Xiaowan arrived at the Liuguang Villa district. The villas here stood one after the other in front of her, and the people who lived here were all the rich and powerful in the city. She looked down at her disheveled appearance and a feeling of indescribable inferiority rose in her heart. If she just barged in like this, those people would definitely mock her mercilessly and might even lay hands on her. Thinking about this, Xiaowan couldn't help but shiver, and decided to choose a more hidden path to enter. So, she carefully went around to the back of the villa, looking for the so-called back door. When she successfully found and gently pushed open the small, dilapidated door, a loud noise came to her ears. It turned out that her adoptive mother, Lu Feng, and Xia Lianqing were sitting in the spacious and bright hall, chatting and laughing, sometimes whispering and sometimes laughing heartily. The close relationship between them was obvious at a glance. Xiaowan quietly closed the door behind her and tiptoed upstairs, trying not to make a sound. She climbed all the way to the attic on the top floor, and with each step she took, she could feel the slight creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet, as if reminding her of the age and dilapidation of the place. Finally arriving at her destination, Xiaowan took a deep breath and slowly pushed open the door. Instantly, a strong musty smell hit her face, choking her and making her cough repeatedly. Looking around, she saw that the room was full of all kinds of miscellaneous objects, placed in a disorganized manner. It was obvious that this place was originally just a utility room used to store idle objects. The only thing that attracted attention was the narrow cot in the corner, which was only 1 meter wide. Xiaowan quickly walked into the room, quickly took off the dirty coat she was wearing and changed into the clean clothes she had brought with her. Then she took out a box of foundation from her bag and carefully applied it to her neck to try to cover up the glaring kiss marks. Just as she was absorbed in her makeup, there was a sudden loud and urgent knock on the door. Knock, 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 knock. The sound was like a death knell, terrifying. Xiaowan's heart tightened, and she thought to herself, did someone find out I'm here? It looks like they're here to cause trouble? Xiaowan listened to a series of loud and urgent knocks on the door, and her heart tightened. She quickly jumped out of bed, walked quickly to the door, and opened it without hesitation. However, what greeted her was the familiar and disgusting face of the mean Lu Feng. Lu Feng had her arms folded, glaring at Xiaowan with dissatisfaction, as if she could spit fire. Then her shrill voice pierced the morning tranquility. Xiaowan, look at the time. You're still sleeping in bed. Get up and make breakfast. Do you really think of yourself as the Xia family's little princess? Xiaowan silently lowered her head, a flash of helplessness and grievance in her eyes. In fact, she was not really the Xia family's little princess. Back then, the Xia family's biological daughter had mysteriously disappeared, plunging the entire family into great grief. Subsequently, the company's performance plummeted, and with no way out, Tianfu listened to the superstitions of the feudal society and took Fang Lu to a fortune teller. According to the so-called fate, they adopted the current Xiaowan. Since Xiaowan came to this family, miracles seem to have happened. The Xia enterprise has even received a series of large orders, and the business has become more and more prosperous. As for Xiaowan, Xia Tianfu's attitude towards her can be described as indifferent. He neither dotes on her excessively nor does he harbor any hatred towards her. However, Lu Fang is completely different. She always believes that Xiao Wan has caused her own daughter to suffer outside the home, so she has always vented her anger on Xiao Wan. In her daily life, Lu Fang always finds excuses to abuse Xiao Wan, and sometimes even deliberately withholds her food. However, she has never arranged any heavy physical labor for her. It wasn't that Lu Fang had a conscience, but the fortune teller had said that she must be treated well until she came of age, and the more she was treated well, the more prosperous the Xia family would be. Although Xia's father kept saying that she must not be treated badly, he didn't really do much. He also never said that Xiao Wan should be treated specially, but she was given the opportunity to study and enough food to keep her alive. It so happened that yesterday was Xiao Wan's 18th birthday. According to the fortune teller, from today onwards, Xiao Wan could be bullied at will. So Lu Fang was already impatient to make her life difficult, and yesterday she couldn't wait to get Xiao Wan to move to the attic. As for Xiao Lianqing, she was only found a few months ago. When Lu Fang found her biological daughter, she not only had no intention of treating Xiao Wan well, but on the contrary, she grew more and more resentful of Xiao Wan after hearing about the various hardships her biological daughter had suffered. She was only forcibly suppressing her inner hatred. Xiao Wan nodded meekly in acknowledgement, then turned and went downstairs to prepare breakfast. When Xiao Wan reached Lu Fang's side, Lu Fang's sharp gaze was like that of a hawk, and she immediately caught sight of the clearly visible kiss mark on Xiao Wan's neck. Without hesitation, she reached out her hand and quickly parted Xiao Wan's long, thick, black hair. Her fingertips pointed precisely at the conspicuous kiss marks on her neck. A mocking smile curled the corners of her mouth as she relentlessly interrogated, "Where the hell have you been fooling around?" Xiao Wan blinked her big, watery eyes, her face showing an innocent expression. In a sweet voice, she responded softly, "Huh? What?" Lu Fang was so angry that her face turned red, and the veins on her neck bulged with rage. She shouted at him, "Look at these hickeys on your neck, so clearly visible. You just turned 18, and you couldn't hold back your temper, running off to fool around with those riffraff. Do you even have a face to save?" This deafening tirade of angry words was like a bolt of thunder, instantly attracting Xia Qinglian from downstairs. At the age of 25, Xia Qinglian was wearing a bright red strapless dress and walked up the stairs with a graceful posture. Her mean and nasty appearance was exactly a copy and paste from her mother. Then, a harsh and mean voice came, "Mom, what happened? Why are you so angry?" Lu Fang turned her head to look at her biological daughter and could not help but feel a surge of relief. She is indeed her precious baby, so pretty and charming. So, her tone immediately softened and she said slowly, "Xiao Lian, I really can't stand it when some people are so uninhibited, and at a young age, they can't wait to go out and get entangled with those unsavory characters." Xia Qinglian glanced at Xiao Wan, who was curled up in the corner. Her anger was like a volcano erupting inside her. Every time she saw Xiao Wan, her face was as delicate as a water lily, and she burned with jealousy. Why was it that a foundling could be so charming? The more she looked at her, the angrier she became. She examined Xiao Wan from top to bottom like an object, and her gaze finally rested on Xiao Wan's fair neck, which was covered in densely packed kiss marks. It seemed that her plot from yesterday had succeeded. A mocking smile curled the corner of her mouth as she said, Xiao Wan, look at you, you're absolutely disgusting." Xiao Wan glared at the instigator in front of her, shaking with anger, "Xia Qinglian, you actually used underhanded tricks to harm me. Yesterday at the hotel, you pretended to hand me a drink, and I thought you were being so nice all of a sudden. I never expected that you would have drugged my drink. It's all my own fault for being stupid. If she can change for the better, a pig can climb a tree." Xia Qinglian not only felt no remorse, but instead crossed her arms and hugged them to her chest, crowing arrogantly like a cockfighting rooster. "So what if I did? I just don't like the way you look, and I did it on purpose. What are you going to do about it?" Pop. Xiao Wan couldn't stand it anymore, raised her hand, and gave her a hard slap like the wind. Xia Qinglian never imagined that the skinny Xiao Wan could hit so hard and dare to hit his former self, but he dared not resist his own. Xia Qinglian was so angry that he turned around and slapped Xiao Wan, but Xiao Wan easily caught it. Xiao Wan said indifferently, "Don't you dare bully me again. Don't push me, I'm poor anyway, I'm not afraid of you." Xia Qing even trembled with anger, stammering and shouting, You. Chapter 3 Playing Dirty. In that spacious and incredibly luxurious, huge office, there was complete silence, as if even the air had frozen. Huo Siyuan sat quietly like a statue in the leather chair. His already cold face was even more gloomy, like a sky covered in dark clouds, sending shivers down people's spines. He stared at Feng Qi, who was standing next to him, with cold, ice-cold eyes, and squeezed out a sentence between his teeth. Feng Qi, how is the investigation into the matter I told you to investigate? Feng Qi knew the temper and character of the second master in front of him, and dared not be the least bit negligent. He quickly handed the tablet computer he had prepared long ago to the second master carefully. He said respectfully, Second Master, I have carefully checked all the relevant surveillance footage, but because the girl kept her head down the whole time and deliberately covered her face with her long hair, it is difficult to ascertain her identity for the time being. Huo Siyuan stared intently at the video playing on the screen while listening to Feng Qi's report. As the video continued to progress, his face became increasingly gloomy, like the oppressive atmosphere before a storm. However, in the midst of this endless darkness, there was a hint of imperceptible tenderness. It turned out that his gaze had always been fixed on the person in the tablet. He saw the person wearing his slightly oversized shirt, his footsteps seemed a little flustered and hurriedly leaving. At this moment, Huo Siyuan's heart could not help but swell with an inexplicable feeling of worry and concern. He secretly wondered if the other party had already returned home safely or if he was in a safe place. Feng Qi keenly sensed the subtle changes in the mood of the second young master, and his heart could not help but tremble. He kept his head bowed, afraid to make eye contact with the second young master, but continued to maintain a respectful posture as he said, Second young master, please give me some more time. I will definitely do my best and make sure this matter is thoroughly investigated. His words were full of firmness and determination. Huo Siyuan stared intently at the video playing in front of him, as if he wanted to imprint every detail in his mind. His gaze was focused and determined, and he held the mouse in his hand, clicking the replay button over and over again. However, in the face of such an intriguing scene, he only responded with a single word, The sound was as light as the breeze blowing through the leaves, and it seemed to have caused no waves. Meanwhile, in Xia's house, the atmosphere was unusually tense. Xia Tianfu sat quietly at the spacious and bright dining table. His face, which was usually full of confidence and authority, was now covered with a layer of gloom, which made people feel worried. Lu Fang, who was sitting next to him, keenly sensed her husband's change in mood. She looked at Xia Tianfu anxiously, and asked with concern, Honey, what's wrong? Did the company encounter some kind of difficult problem? Her words revealed her endless worries. Xia Qinglian heard this and her heart tightened. She anxiously interrupted, Dad, what's going on? Tell us quickly, we can work together to find a solution. Her eyes revealed her deep concern for the future of the family, fearing that any slight change in the situation would bring an unbearable burden to this happy and contented family. In the face of his family's concerned inquiries, Xia Tianfu let out a heavy sigh, as if a 1,000-pound weight was weighing on his heart. Then, he said slowly, Last night, I went to negotiate a crucial business cooperation, but today, something unexpected happened, causing the deal to fall through. Not only have we lost the business opportunity, but we have also incurred a huge debt of 300 million yuan. If we cannot raise the funds in time to cover the shortfall, I'm afraid we will face the doom of bankruptcy. At this point, Xia Tianfu's voice trembled slightly, and it was obvious that he had been crushed by the immense pressure within. Lu Fang and Xia Qinglian were stunned like they had been struck by lightning when they heard the word bankruptcy. Their eyes widened in shock, as if the whole world had collapsed in an instant. For the mother and daughter, who were used to a life of luxury, bankruptcy meant losing everything. Those gorgeous clothes, the comfortable mansion, and the credit cards that allowed them to spend as they pleased would all become a distant pipe dream. Panic and despair quickly spread, plunging them into an unprecedented predicament. Lu Fang instantly fell into a state of extreme panic. Her voice trembled as she shouted, Hubby, what are we going to do? We can't go bankrupt. Xia Qinglian, on the other side, was full of worry and urgency, her eyes fixed on her father as if she wanted to find a glimmer of hope and comfort from him. Xian Tianfu's face was gloomy, but his tone was still relatively calm as he said, There is still a solution. Upon hearing this, Lu Fang's heart suddenly lit up with a glimmer of hope, and her originally restless heart settled down a little. However, she couldn't wait to ask, What exactly is the solution? Hurry up and tell me. Her words revealed both her impatience and some joy. As long as there was a way to solve the problem, it meant that things might not be as desperate as they seemed. Xia Tianfu tilted his head slightly, glanced at Xia Qinglian sitting next to him, and then said slowly, Our family once arranged a marriage between our daughters. It was agreed that if we married our daughter to the man, he would invest 500 million in our company as a dowry. As soon as Lu Fang heard this astonishing figure, her eyes immediately sparkled with greed, and she impatiently asked, So, who is this relative? Xia Tianfu's expressionless face gave a bland reply, Deng Jin. Upon hearing this, Lu Fang's face immediately showed undisguised contempt, and she snorted in disdain. Could it be that Deng Jin from the Deng group? Although it is true that his family is wealthy, he was in a car accident a few days ago and became disabled. Furthermore, this person has always been known for his lechery and extremely bad character, and I absolutely cannot let my precious daughter marry someone like this. If I did, I would be destroying my daughter's happiness for life. In the end, her emotions became more and more agitated, and her voice unconsciously raised an octave. Xia Qinglian had once seen the man's figure in a gossip magazine and knew a little about him. It was said that the man was uninhibited and promiscuous, and his appearance was even more ugly. If it weren't for the huge wealth accumulated by his ancestors, he would probably have become a worthless cripple. What's more, this person has now become disabled. Thinking about this, Xia Qinglian secretly thought to herself, in any case, she absolutely cannot devote herself to such an incompetent person. After all, she has always dreamed of being able to become the partner of a business magnate, not spend the rest of her life with a good-for-nothing. Suddenly, Xia Qing's eyes welled up with tears, and she looked at her mother, Lu Fang, with reddened eyes and cried in a heartbreaking tone, "Mom, I really don't want to marry him." She hoped that her miserable expression would evoke Lu Fang's meager maternal love, so that Lu Fang could strongly persuade her not to marry for the 500 million. Seeing her own daughter crying so miserably, Lu Fang felt heartbroken. She hurriedly went up to her and hugged her tightly, soothingly whispering, "My little treasure, don't cry. I'm here, and I'll never let anything happen to you. My daughter is so outstanding, she deserves to marry a business magnate like Huo Siyuan." Hearing that her mother also had the idea of marrying her off to the second young master, Xia Qinglian couldn't help but smile happily, her face blooming with a bright smile. At that moment, Xia Tianfu heard both the mother and daughter express their unwillingness to marry into the family, and his brows furrowed. He was full of sorrow, and he gazed at the two women before him, sighing helplessly. He said slowly, "Since neither of you is willing, do you want to force me to declare bankruptcy?" Before he finished speaking, Xiaowan slowly walked down the stairs and stopped at the corner. Lu Fang's sinister eyes twinkled as she raised the corner of her mouth into a sly smile, then said with joy, "Hey, is it our daughter that the Deng family wants?" But they didn't specify which one. Xia Qinglian immediately understood what Lu Fang was getting at, and responded in a sweet, affected, and whiny tone, "Oh. Mom, I understand. Isn't that what you mean? We can totally marry Xiaowan to them, and in this way, not only will we be able to successfully get our hands on the huge sum of 500 million, we will also be rid of Xiaowan, that nuisance, from hanging around the house all the time." What a stroke of genius! Lu Fang stroked Xia Qinglian's delicate face with love and affection, and praised her softly, "Ah, you are truly my smart daughter." At this moment, Xia Tianfu, who had just successfully solved the company's problems, was in an exceptionally good mood. He couldn't contain his joy and nodded repeatedly in approval. "Yes, yes, yes, that's great. Let's settle on that. After all, we have worked hard to raise her and now it is time for her to repay us for all the years of nurturing." However, just then, Xiaowan, who had been standing quietly at the top of the stairs, was so scared that her face turned pale, and her already pale cheeks turned a miserable green. It turned out that she had heard of Deng Jin. He was notorious for his womanizing and promiscuity, and was also a person of extremely bad character. She never imagined that her adoptive father would be so heartless as to push her into the fire and marry her off to such an unbearable man. Even if he wasn't her biological father, they had lived together for 20 years. The more she thought about it, the sadder she became. Xiaowan, it's time to wake up. Chapter 4 The old lady's plot is here. Xiaowan, who was at the top of the stairs, was already in tears. She forced herself to hold back her pain and sadness, and quietly returned to the attic. In the attic, she sat alone by the window, looking out at the scenery outside, her heart filled with loss and helplessness. It was as if she were in an endless dark abyss, surrounded by loneliness and helplessness. She realized that she could no longer stay here, that she had to leave this place and find her own life. After all, she was an adult and could face the challenges of life independently. In the afternoon, after the family had gone out, Xiaowan began to pack her suitcase. She found that she didn't have much stuff, and a small suitcase could hold everything. She sorted out her clothes, books, and some necessary daily necessities, then sat quietly by the bed, waiting for the right time to leave. She looked at the clock, it was only about 3 o'clock, and her family had all gone out to work or shopping. Xiaowan gently lifted her suitcase and slowly walked out of the room, afraid of making the slightest noise. She walked carefully down the corridor, and finally gently closed the door. Xiaowan was pulling a small suitcase and walking aimlessly on the road, her mood heavy and confused. It was as if she were a lonely boat on the rough sea, lost and not knowing where she was going. She didn't know where she should go, or what the future held. She just walked silently, hoping to find a direction, a place where she could start again. At that moment, a luxurious business car drove very slowly past her. This car caught Xiaowan's attention, but what surprised her even more was that the car was driving unusually slowly, at a speed of less than 30 miles per hour. Xiaowan looked at the car curiously and saw the window roll down, revealing a kind face. Inside the car sat an old grandmother with a charming presence. Her face was filled with a kind smile, and she also smiled kindly. The old grandmother gazed at Xiaowan, and her eyes revealed affection, as if she had seen a crystal-clear gemstone. "Lang Yan, go and check the background of this little girl pulling a suitcase for me," the old grandmother said softly to the driver. Her gaze remained fixed on Xiaowan, as if she had a special interest in her, as if she were admiring a precious work of art. Xiaowan did not realize that someone was observing her. She continued to drag her suitcase along, still feeling confused and uneasy. She had no idea what to do next, and could only rely on her own courage and determination to explore the unknown world. Sometimes it's amazing how fate works. You just know when you like someone. At first glance, the little girl looked very sad, so she must have encountered some kind of difficulty. At such a sad moment, when she saw the old lady next to her in trouble, she also went up to help. "You see such a kind-hearted girl, she is practically a natural pair with your grandson." Lang Yan, who was sitting in the driver's seat, spoke in a flat tone, "Madam, this is already the 36th girl you have investigated this month. After your investigation, there were only 2 girls who met the conditions of a clean background, but after they were sent to Second Master's Cloud Top Villa, they were both beaten all over their bodies by Second Master. You'd better give up." The old lady in the back seat glared at Lang Yan and said in a grumpy tone, "I don't care. Just help me check this girl out. I have a strong feeling that she is my grandson's destined partner." Lang Yan shook his head helplessly. He really had no way to deal with this stubborn old lady, so he had to agree. "Okay, old lady, I'll check it out now. Give me 20 minutes. Lang Yan parked the car by the roadside and began to investigate Xiaowan in the car. Meanwhile, Xiaowan also felt a little exhausted, so she found a stone wall surrounded by greenery to sit and rest. The old lady in the back seat kept staring at Xiaowan, her gaze full of affection. After the investigation, Lang Yan had a smile on his face, but still respectfully said to the old lady in the back seat, "Madam, it seems that your judgment is really good. This young lady is Xiaowan, the adopted daughter of the Xia family. The Xia couple has not been good to Xiaowan. Just now, the latest news is that Xia Tianfu has agreed to marry Xiaowan to Deng Jin." The older woman's face turned redder and redder as she listened, and she was furious. "This is too much, these animals." Lang Yan continued, "Madam, there's more, something even more shocking." The older woman glared at him. "So why don't you just tell me already? What's the point of teasing me like this, trying to make an old woman like me die of impatience?" Lang Yan's mouth curled up slightly, revealing an imperceptible smile, but his eyes remained cold. He spoke slowly. 2 weeks ago, the Xia family finally found their long-lost biological daughter. And yesterday happened to be her 20th birthday. However, on this special day, Miss Xia was defiled by another person. Upon hearing this, the old lady's eyes widened in disbelief as she looked at Lang Yan. Her body trembled slightly, and she almost fainted. She murmured softly, "Oh dear. This is terrible. The granddaughter-in-law I've finally found has suffered such misfortune. But it only happened once, so maybe Ai Yuan won't care too much." Lang Yan was shocked by the old lady's words, and a layer of fine sweat appeared on his forehead. He hurriedly replied, "Old lady, you can't think like that. But you don't have to worry too much, because in fact, it was the second young master himself who defiled Miss Xia." "What? Say that again," the old lady exclaimed in surprise. "Pop." With a crisp sound, the old lady slowly came back to her senses, her face showing an ecstatic expression, and she couldn't stop smiling. She stepped forward and gave Lang Yan a hard slap on the back of the head, scolding him, "You little brat, how dare you tease your grandmother? Just say what you mean, and don't stop talking in the middle of things in the future." Lang Yan said indifferently, "Yes, I will pay attention next time. So what do we do now? Just carry on as before? Take her to the second master's villa?" The old lady looked at Lang Yan with a smile on her face. How could it be the same? Every night, she was defiled by that brat, and maybe in a few minutes, she will have my great-great-grandchild in her belly. So we need to get a marriage license for them right away. After hearing this, Lang Yan couldn't help but wipe the sweat from his forehead. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart, thinking that it seems that the only person in the world who dares to scheme against second master like this is the old lady. He silently lit a candle in the little girl's heart, hoping that this little girl named Siyuan could safely ride out this storm. After all, facing a powerful man like second master, she would probably not have an easy time in the future. But at the same time, he knew that second master's character and abilities meant that once he had made a decision, it would be difficult to change it. And now, the old lady had obviously succeeded in getting second master into this situation. Next, it would depend on the little girl's own fate. Chapter 5 Huo Siyuan was rejected. Siyuan sat under the tree with a vacant expression in her eyes, not knowing where to go next. She remembered that she was still in school, but the school wouldn't start until September, and she didn't even have a place to stay. Thinking about this, Siyuan couldn't help but sigh. At that moment, she suddenly felt a dark shadow at her feet. She looked up and saw an elderly woman dressed in gorgeous clothes standing there. The old lady had a kind smile on her face, and her eyes were fixed on Siyuan. Siyuan looked up, met the old lady's gaze, and then smiled brightly. She said warmly to the old lady, "Granny, is there anything I can do for you? It's so hot here, come and sit over here in the shade." She then stood up and carefully helped the old lady to sit on a chair in the shade. After the old lady was sitting comfortably, Siyuan sat down again next to her. Grandma Huo smiled kindly and kept her eyes on Siyuan, full of love. She said with a smile, good. You are really a good girl, young lady." Hearing this, Siyuan felt warm in her heart. Looking at the old lady, she felt that this elderly person was very kind, as if she were her own relative. She smiled and replied, "Grandma, it's so hot, why did you come out? You could easily get heat stroke." Grandma Huo looked at the pretty and cute Siyuan. This little girl is really well behaved. Looking at such a sweet and obedient girl, she didn't want to bully her. She thought that her grandson would also not want to bully her. Grandma Huo suddenly shook Siyuan's hand. She looked at it and said, "Your hands are so tender and soft. You really are the granddaughter-in-law I like." She said gently, "Wan. It's okay, I just got off the bus, I'm not hot." Siyuan was startled by the old lady's sudden move, but quickly regained her composure. She smiled and said to the old lady, "That's good, you have to take care of your health." Although Siyuan felt that it was a bit strange for the old lady to hold her hand, she did not shake it off. After all, this old lady was very kind, and Siyuan felt exceptionally close to her. Siyuan, who had lacked care since childhood, really couldn't bear to push away such a kind old lady. Siyuan was very puzzled about the old lady knowing her name, and sweetly asked, "That's good, Grandma, how do you know my name?" Grandma was smiled and replied, "Because Grandma is very amazing. Wan, let me ask you something else. Can Grandma ask you some more personal questions?" Although Siyuan didn't understand, she nodded. "What kind of person do you like, Wan?" Although Siyuan didn't understand why her grandmother was asking her this, she looked at the kind-looking woman in front of her and thought about it carefully. Then she answered obediently, "I like people my age, so that there isn't a big generation gap between us." Hearing this, Grandma Huo couldn't help but be shocked. According to the survey data just now, Siyuan is only 18 years old, while her precious grandson is already 25 years old. She began to worry about Siyuan, wondering if he would think his grandson was too old. No, she must continue to find out more, so she asked again, "Wan, apart from age, are there any other requirements?" Siyuan thought for a moment, then replied, "Well, I also hope that he can be a bit gentler. This is really the end. My grandson is not gentle at all. I know my own grandson well, he is a fearsome ice machine. After spending so much time with him, I feel like I'm going to freeze." Grandma Huo is a bit unsure of herself and asks in a last-ditch attempt, "Knight, do you mind if you're a bit older than me?" Siyuan thinks about it for a while and obediently replies, "Actually, there's no problem if we're 2 or 3 years apart, but he has to be good-looking. I'm a bit of a face person. If there's too big a difference in age, I'm afraid we won't have much to talk about and it'll be awkward being together." Grandma Huo doesn't give up and continues to ask, "What about someone with a cold personality, someone who you can't have a conversation with for a whole day? Do you mind that?" Siyuan thinks and thinks, her eyebrows furrowed. Finally, she shakes her little head and sweetly replies, "It's best not to, because then there'd be nothing to talk about." Grandma Huo cries out inside, "What do I do? Ah! She never expected these two questions to stump her. It seems that she still needs to think of another way. Grandma Hua doesn't give up and looks at Xiaowan tenderly. Wan, would you mind if you were a little older? Xiaowan thinks carefully and says tenderly, actually, I'm still afraid that we won't have anything to talk about. Isn't it said that there's a generation gap every 3 years? Grandma Hua is lost in thought and mutters to herself, if there's a generation gap every 3 years, then Wan and my rotten grandson will soon have a gap of 3 generations, which should be quite a big one. My grandson is old, has a bad temper, and is cold. This is the end. My grandson is a disappointment, he doesn't meet the requirements at all. When Grandma Hua thought about this, the wrinkles on her face drooped to the ground from worry. Thinking about it suddenly made her think of her grandson's only good point, and a hint of a smile finally appeared on her worried face. Grandma Hua looked at Xiaowan with love in her eyes and said softly, Wan, what if that person is very handsome and charming? As for issues such as the age gap and cold personality, can we ignore them for now? Hearing this, Xiaowan couldn't help but frown and ask doubtfully, by handsome, do you mean very, very handsome? Grandma Hua nodded with a smile and said, of course, he is absolutely a super handsome guy, and he mainly inherited my excellent genes. Upon hearing that there is a handsome guy, Xiaowan naturally felt a little happy, but she still acted calmly and said slowly, well, I'm not sure, I still need to get to know him for a while. In fact, a person's inner beauty is also very, very important. Grandma Hua didn't know what to say for a moment, and thought to herself, inner beauty? Well, her own grandson is really ruthless when dealing with his competitors or people who have betrayed him. Could this be considered inner beauty? Is it good or bad? She had originally thought that after the two got married, they would have plenty of time to get to know each other and nurture their relationship. After all, as they say, time heals all wounds. However, it seems that this method is completely ineffective for her own family's troublesome brat. Grandma Hua really likes Xiaowan more and more as she looks at her. She really is so cute and well behaved. She is really a natural match for her own unworthy brat. So she has decided to try a drastic measure. Grandma Hua thinks to herself, Xiaowan, trust Grandma, you won't regret marrying my brat. Chapter 6 Getting Married. Xiaowan, who was standing nearby, looked at Grandma Hua and suddenly her face turned very ugly. She began to wonder if she had just said something she shouldn't have. Now she was sitting on pins and needles, her hands clasped together tightly, looking very nervous. After a while, Grandma Hua looked at the lovely Xiaowan carefully, then smiled and decided to come right out and say it, Xiaowan, I won't beat around the bush. Were you defiled by a man last night? Xiaowan was embarrassed and shy to be suddenly reminded of last night by a stranger. Her face flushed. Yes, Grandma, how did you know? I was framed. As she spoke, her eyes gradually reddened. Grandma Hua looked at Xiaowan, who was scared and had red eyes from being shocked by her, and her heart was full of pity. She quickly comforted her, Wan, don't cry, I'm the grandmother of the bastard who defiled you. A roar suddenly sounded in Xiaowan's mind. She couldn't believe what she had heard and asked softly, what? Grandma Hua still smiled and said, Grandma doesn't mean anything else, she just wants to take responsibility for this matter. Xiaowan thought back to what happened between her and the man last night, and felt that the man was not someone to be trifled with, so it would be better not to see him again. So, with a sweet voice, she said, Grandma, really, you don't need to take responsibility. I am also responsible. After all, I am not very familiar with your grandson, and he probably won't agree either. Grandma Hua smiled kindly, it's fine, my grandson is very obedient, with a good character and a good temper. Grandma wants you to marry my grandson. Lang Yan, who was secretly observing from the side, thought to himself, old lady, who would believe you if you said that? I might even believe you if you said a tiger had a good temper and didn't bite people. But no one would believe you when you say that second master has a good temper. Miss Xia is so unlucky to have been set upon by a fox like grandmother. Xiaowan still felt a little resistant, feeling that she couldn't handle such a powerful man. She pursed her lips, shook her head, and whispered her refusal, Grandma, I don't want to marry your grandson. After all, I don't know him well, so how can I get married? It's over. Having come this far, my dear granddaughter still dislikes her grandson so much. It's all the grandson's fault, he usually does evil deeds. Oh my God. Why am I so unlucky? Grandma Hua continued with a smile, it doesn't matter if you don't know each other, you did such intimate things last night. Xiaowan's face turned red again when the subject of the summer night was brought up. She kept stirring with her hands, and slowly even her ears turned red. She looked up at her grandmother and said, Grandma, actually that night, I don't care, so I can pretend it never happened. That night, after seeing the man's appearance, I could also tell that his identity was definitely not ordinary. It would definitely not be appropriate to be with him, and I can't force it. Grandma Huo was anxious. If it's not going to happen, then it definitely won't work. Grandma Huo watched as Xiaowan didn't waver at all. It seems that I can only use my trump card, Grandma Huo thought to herself. So she took Xiaowan's hand, gave it a gentle pat, and said with great earnestness, "My child, Grandma knows that you may have some misunderstandings about our boy, but he really is a good boy. What happened last night was just an accident. If you are willing, give him a chance, let him take good care of you, and maybe you will discover the good in each other. Besides, this incident has already happened, and if you just let it go, it will not be good for you." After listening to her grandmother's words, Xiaowan felt a little hesitant. She knew her grandmother was right, but she really could not accept that man. But if she really let it go, she felt like she had lost something. Seeing that Xiaowan was still hesitant, Grandma Hua decided to try harder. She sighed and said, "My dear, I'm getting old, and my greatest wish is to see my grandson find someone who truly loves and accompanies him. If you're willing to give our boy a chance, you'll not only fulfill my wish, but also give yourself a chance to find happiness." Xiaowan looked at her grandmother's sincere eyes and couldn't help but soften. She knew that her grandmother truly hoped that she and the man could be together, and she herself longed for a true love. Maybe they really should give each other a chance? Grandma Hua looked at the cute and simple Xiaowan, her eyes full of love and warmth. She said slowly, "Wan, my grandson is really a good boy. He is kind-hearted, honest, and reliable. If you marry him, I guarantee that you will be cared for and loved by him for the rest of your life. And, Wan, you may already have our great-great-grandchild in your belly." Grandma Hua said, reaching out her hand and gently pointing at Xiaowan's stomach. Her eyes shone with anticipation and joy. Hearing Grandma Hua's words, Xiaowan subconsciously touched her stomach, and a complex emotion welled up in her heart. She muttered, "A baby? Will there be a baby here? But I'm only 18 years old. I can't even take care of myself, so how can I take care of a baby? If I really have a baby, what am I going to do?" She muttered to herself as she fell into deep thought. She thought about herself as a student, living an unstable life, often facing financial difficulties, and struggling to provide for her own needs, let alone raise a new life. However, when she thought about how she had also been an orphan and felt the loneliness of growing up without family, she couldn't help but feel sad. She didn't want her child to repeat her mistakes and become the next lonely person. After some thought, Xiaowan finally made up her mind. She nodded and said she was willing to take on this responsibility. Although the future is full of uncertainty, she believes that with love and courage, everything will slowly get better. Grandma Hua saw Xiaowan's decision and nodded with relief, encouraging her, "Wan, don't be afraid, Grandma will always be by your side to support you. No matter what difficulties we encounter, we will face them together." Xiaowan thought to herself, "Let's see what happens in a while. If I really get pregnant, I'll have the baby and then leave this place. If after a while, after going to the hospital for a checkup, I find out that I'm not pregnant, that would be even better, and I can leave here immediately." Grandma Hua was overjoyed when she heard this. She had heard about Xiaowan for a long time, and she really is kind-hearted. Grandma Hua's face was filled with a smile as she said to Xiaowan, "Wan, give me your household registration book for a moment." Xiaowan asked with a puzzled expression, "Why do you want my household registration?" Grandma Hua still couldn't stop smiling and said, "Of course, to get a marriage certificate." Xiaowan never expected things to develop so quickly, and she couldn't help but be surprised, her mouth wide open. Ah! Chapter 7 Moving into the big villa. Xiaowan has always been a loner, and she was silent as she took out the slightly outdated household register, which contained important information, from the exquisite handbag she carried with her. Grandma Hua, who was standing nearby, was quick and nimble, quickly took over the household register, and said with a smile, "Lang Yan, hurry up and go get their marriage certificate done." Lang Yan responded respectfully, "Okay, old lady, I'll go do it right away." Before the words had finished leaving his mouth, he rushed out the door like an arrow. Grandma Hua took Xiaowan's small, delicate hand in hers, looked at her with loving kindness and gentleness, and said softly, "My child, come with me. Let's go home." Xiaowan's eyes widened suddenly, and she looked confused and at a loss. She stuttered and retorted, "Go home? No, I don't want to go home." Grandma Hua is very astute and can see through Xiaowan's thoughts at a glance. She gently pats Xiaowan's back a few times and patiently explains, "Don't worry, Wan, I'm not taking you back to the Xia family, where you're sad and unhappy. I'm taking you to the villa where my precious grandson lives." Upon hearing this, Xiaowan's heart, which had been hanging in the balance, finally settled. She let out a long sigh of relief, and a bright smile blossomed on the corners of her mouth. As long as she didn't have to go back to that place full of painful memories, she was fine. She nodded with joy and replied, "Yes, yes. Grandma, thank you so much." With just a few simple words, the simple and kind Xiaowan had unwittingly sold herself. Meanwhile, in a spacious, brightly lit office with luxurious decor, Huo Siyuan sat at his huge desk with a gloomy face, buried in work. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the urgent ringing of a phone. This phone was one of Huo Siyuan's personal items, and it was extremely private. Normally, only a few people had his number, and it was difficult for others to get in touch with him. At this moment, Feng Qi, the special assistant, carefully took the phone and quickly walked over to Huo Siyuan's side. Lowering his voice so that only the two of them could hear, he reported softly, "Second Master, the caller is Madame Hua. Madame says it's very important and urgent that she speaks with you." However, Huo Siyuan's face was ashen and he responded coldly, "Grandma?" His cold face seemed to be frozen with a layer of frost, sending shivers down people's spines. Feng Qi stared at the call history on the phone screen, pondering in his heart, and then respectfully advised Huo Siyuan, "Second Master, the old lady has called 68 times in a row, so I think it must be really important." His words revealed a trace of worry and respect. Facing such a persistent grandmother, Huo Siyuan finally, helplessly picked up the phone and answered in a flat tone, "Hello, Grandma. It seems that there is no one else but Mrs. Huo for this person who dares to bombard her with phone calls." His cold and indifferent tone did not reveal the kind of intimacy that one should have when talking to a loved one. Instead, it was like a gust of cold wind coming face on, which made people feel cold inside. Hearing her cold, unresponsive grandson's conversation, Grandma was suddenly felt an unknown fire rise in her heart. She snapped at him, "You little brat. Listen to the attitude and tone of your words when you speak to me. Are they appropriate? You owe it to me, your grandmother, who raised you with so much difficulty. You are nothing but a shameless, ungrateful brat." Seeing this, Huo Siyuan couldn't help but frown slightly and respond indifferently, "What is it, Grandma?" Upon hearing these words, Grandma Huo's angry expression instantly disappeared, replaced by a beaming smile. Hurriedly, she said, "Oh, my dear, sweet grandson, Grandma has done a great thing today." Upon hearing this, Huo Siyuan's heart sank. He secretly cursed his grandmother for meddling again. He suppressed his anger and asked calmly, "Oh? You found a wife for me?" Grandma Huo was completely unaware of her grandson's emotions and was still in a state of self-indulgence. She continued gleefully, "That's right. I guarantee you'll love your wife to be. You can rest assured. I'm a good judge of character. And I've already personally delivered her to your villa. You must treat her well and never bully her. Remember, she's a good and simple girl. If you dare mistreat her in the slightest, I'll deal with you." At this point, Huo Siyuan was dumbfounded, his face full of disbelief. He froze for a long time before coming back to his senses. He was a little unable to laugh or cry, and muttered to himself, "Grandma, you're not joking with me, are you?" Grandma Huo is now happy because she has solved the knot that she couldn't solve for so many years. She said with a smile, "Grandma, I've already sent your wife to your villa. You can see her when you go back. Your obedient wife, Grandma guarantees you'll like her. Do. Do. Then he hung up the phone. After listening to the phone call, Huo Siyuan's face was so gloomy that it looked as if it could drip water. His already cold face was even more chilling at the moment. He saw his lips part slightly and he spoke coldly, "Feng Qi, have you found anything out about the person I asked you to investigate?" At this time, Feng Qi was standing to the side. He was wearing exquisitely tailored designer trousers, but his legs were trembling involuntarily. He knew very well that the second master in front of him was not someone to be trifled with, and if he failed to complete the task, he might as well have his hands chopped off. In fact, it was not that Feng Qi was incompetent. It was just that the person he was investigating knew too little, and it was not easy to find out anything. If one knew the identity and background of the person in advance, it would naturally be easier to find out about his past. But now he was dealing with a complete stranger, which undoubtedly made the investigation more difficult. Feng Qi replied with trembling voice, "Please forgive me, second master, it is all my fault. Please punish me." Huo Siyuan slowly looked up, his eyes as sharp as an eagle's, staring at Feng Qi. Feng Qi felt an invisible pressure coming at him, making him tremble uncontrollably. Then, Huo Siyuan coldly said, "Return to Cloud Villa immediately. Inside the villa on the clouds, Xiaowan was lying quietly on the bed in her room. When her grandmother had dropped her off here, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The villa was enormous, more than 10 times the size of the Xia family villa, and the whole building was magnificent. Every brick and stone seemed to exude an air of understated luxury. And just now, Grandma had already applied for a marriage license, and she didn't even give it to me, saying that she wanted to take a closer look at your marriage license. I haven't even asked Grandma what her husband's name is, and I've already forgotten to ask. While I was thinking all sorts of things in the room, I suddenly heard an engine sound coming from downstairs. Xiaowan walked over to the window and looked down. Seeing the commotion, she knew it must be Grandma's grandson, her nominal husband, returning. She spoke sweetly in a low voice, "Honey." Although she had only met her husband once, he was her own husband, the only family member she had in the world, and she always wanted to be close to him. Thinking about this, she walked downstairs lightly. She heard her husband's voice at the top of the stairs, so she stopped and hid around the corner. All the servants in the villa were at the gate to welcome second master home, so no one noticed the young mistress standing at the top of the stairs. Chapter 8 The Indifferent Second Master. Xiaowan was like an inquisitive kitten, cautiously sticking her cute little head out from the corner, blinking her intelligent big eyes, full of anticipation, wanting to see her husband and get close to him. However, when she actually saw his face, she couldn't help but open her mouth in surprise, secretly marveling in her heart. Last time they only saw each other for a moment, and they only said goodbye in a hurry, so she didn't get a good look at him. Now that she looks more closely, she realizes that he is really handsome. The person in front of her has a pair of bushy eyebrows and starry eyes, a high and straight nose, and thin lips. His face has a clear outline, as if he had been carefully sculpted by a master, with every line just right, exuding a unique charm. Wow! So handsome! Xiaowan couldn't help but murmur in a low voice, her voice small but full of undisguised praise. Meanwhile, the atmosphere downstairs was unusually tense and solemn. Everyone in the entire villa keenly sensed that second master was in a very bad mood today. His handsome face was so gloomy that it seemed like it could drip with water, as if he had just swallowed a pile of disgusting excrement and it stank. The servants knew full well, how could second master's face look good? You see, the method that Madame Huo used this time was really too ruthless, and she even sent him a young mistress. In this way, naturally, the second master does not have a good impression of this sudden young mistress. Huo Siyuan was burning with rage at the moment, his eyes cold as frost, and he coldly spat out a sentence, "Where is that woman?" As soon as the words fell, all the servants in the villa trembled in fear, straightening their backs and not daring to breathe a single breath. They knew that the second master was in a bad mood and that the slightest mistake would get them into trouble. Xiaowan, who was standing at the top of the stairs, was also shocked by the roar. For a moment, she felt frozen. Her eyes widened in shock, and she inwardly lamented, "Oh my, how can this person have such a bad temper? He is practically a grumpy, irritable devil. This is really scary." Just as everyone was frozen in fear, Butler Shang quickly walked up and stopped firmly in front of Huo Siyuan. He bowed slightly and said in a very polite and courteous manner, "My lord, the young mistress is resting in your room." Huo Siyuan's eyes swept past Shang Guanzhou with indifference, his tone rising slightly with a hint of authority. "Who is this so-called young lady you are talking about? Has she been approved by me? Immediately drag her down for me, I want to see what she is capable of, and how dare she provoke me." At this moment, Xiaowan finally understood why he was so angry. It turned out that he had no good impression of her. This is terrible. If he catches me, I'm afraid I'll lose my life. Thinking back to his harsh tone, she could already foresee how things would develop and how out of control the situation would get. She couldn't help but mutter, "This is bad, I have to escape from here quickly." After saying this, Xiaowan didn't hesitate, she turned around and ran to her room, quickly locking the door, hoping that this would buy her some precious time. Xiaowan, who was anxious, looked left and right, but she still felt unsafe in every direction. She could only pace back and forth in her room, anxiously. Suddenly, there was a clear knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Then, a strange voice came into her ears, "Young madam, please open the door. Second master commands you to go downstairs." Hearing this sudden urging, Xiaowan trembled like a frightened bird. In the end, her gaze fell on the balcony, and she hurriedly walked over there. After arriving on the balcony, she looked down below and secretly lamented to herself, "It's the third floor, so high up, if she fell, she would be dead." After looking around again, his gaze was suddenly attracted by the stone slab protruding from the ground about 30 centimeters wide. In an instant, a wonderful idea came to mind. Meanwhile, on the other side. Knock, knock, knock. There was no response for a long time. The servants waiting outside the door could not help but conjure up the image of the gloomy second master in their minds when they saw that no one answered the door after knocking for a long time, and they became increasingly anxious. They knew that they could not delay any longer, so they quickly called the guards nearby and ordered them to force open the door. With a dull and loud crash, bang bang bang. Finally, the tightly closed door was broken open. The moment the door opened, Siyuan was also startled by the sound of the door being broken open. The maid in charge, without hesitation, rushed into the room and nervously looked around, but did not see anyone. She searched again, carefully checking the closet, bathroom and other places where people might be hiding, even under the bed. However, the result was still disappointing, and there was no sign of anyone at all. In an instant, she fell into a state of extreme panic, her steady pace becoming hurried, and she quickly ran downstairs in 3 quick steps. Then, respectfully, she came before Butler Shang and whispered a few words in his ear. After listening, Butler Shang's expression suddenly became grave, and even he, who was usually calm, could not hide his worry. Then he turned to Huo Siyuan and said respectfully, "Young master, I don't know where the young mistress has gone." Upon hearing this, Huo Siyuan's brows furrowed tightly, and he said in a low and serious voice, "Immediately gather all the staff in the villa and start a search, and be sure to find her." As soon as he finished speaking, all the members quickly got to work, scattering quickly like a group of well-trained soldiers, searching for the missing young mistress with all their strength. Butler Shang also went up to look for her, while the others searched the other rooms. Butler Shang went directly to the second master's room. As the villa's top manager, Butler Shang was able to remain calm in the face of trouble and was meticulous in his approach. In the end, he fixed his gaze on the balcony. Butler Shang walked to the balcony and, although he knew it was impossible, he looked left and right. Luckily, he didn't look, or he would have really found the young mistress. He exclaimed, "Young mistress, why did you come here? It's dangerous. Come here quickly." Siyuan had been standing outside for a long time and was feeling very tired. She whispered sweetly, "I'm not going over there." Butler Shang looked at the young mistress, who was half a meter away from the balcony, and really felt breathless. Butler Shang looked at the young mistress, who was standing in a dangerous place, and his heart was about to leave. Although the second young master did not like the young mistress was still brought here by the old mistress. As if he were a gust of wind, he quickly ran down the stairs, his eyes fixed on the gloomy-looking Huo Siyuan. He said respectfully, "Second master, I have found the young mistress." Huo Siyuan was sitting in the spacious hall on a luxurious sofa made of the finest leather. He didn't even raise his eyelids to look at Shang Guanjia in front of him. He only asked in a cold and indifferent tone that seemed to come from the depths of hell, "Where is she? Why hasn't she been brought down yet?" Upon hearing these words, Butler Shang felt a chill rise up his spine. It was as if he was in the middle of a snowstorm, and his body trembled involuntarily. Still, he forced down his fear and unease. He answered with trembling, "Please don't be angry, second master. It's not that I don't want to bring the young mistress down, it's just that there's nothing I can do about it." At that moment, Huo Siyuan, who had been silent until then, suddenly looked up and gave Shang Guanjia a fierce glare. His tone was extremely cold as he said, "Go on." The butler, who had been so shocked, dared not hesitate for even a moment and quickly went on to explain, "Second young master, the young mistress is, at the moment, clinging to the outside of the balcony and is refusing to come over no matter what." Upon hearing this, Huo Siyuan, who had previously looked as if he were made of ice, suddenly let his mouth curve up slightly, creating a charming smile that was also tinged with a hint of coldness that sent shivers down people's spines. Then, in a tone that was cold and ruthless to the extreme, he said, "If that's the case, let her stay there. Let's see how long she can hold out. If she can't handle it anymore, it will save a lot of trouble." Everyone secretly sighed, the second young master is really ruthless and indifferent to the extreme. Chapter 9 finally found. Huo Siyuan said these words expressionlessly, and then returned his gaze to the financial report in his hands, as if everything around him was of no concern to him. Butler Shang looked at the cold and ruthless second master and couldn't help but feel a surge of compassion. He sighed inwardly, lamenting the second master's ruthlessness, and at the same time feeling immense sorrow and pity for the young mistress. However, Butler Shang did not choose to silently leave, but gathered his courage and said in a very respectful tone, "Master, I'm afraid this is not appropriate." This sudden remark was like a bolt from the blue, and it left the servants present all stunned. They simply could not believe their ears. Butler Shang had actually dared to openly disobey master's wishes. You have to understand that normally, Butler Shang would do whatever second master says, without ever uttering a word of disobedience. At the moment, everyone couldn't help but feel very surprised at Butler Shang's unusual behavior today. Some even began to speculate whether he had eaten something that gave him such courage and boldness. For a moment, the entire room was filled with a tense atmosphere, as everyone held their breath and waited quietly for second master's response. Huo Siyuan slowly lowered the financial magazine in his hands, looked up slightly, and looked at Shang Guanjia with indifferent eyes. He asked calmly, "Oh? What's wrong?" Facing the frosty gaze of the second master, Shang Guanjia felt as if he were in an ice cellar, shivering all over, but he still forced himself to remain calm. He answered with trembling, "My lord, the young mistress was brought home by the old mistress herself. If the old mistress finds out that the young mistress met with an accident less than 2 hours after she arrived at the villa, and if she really fell downstairs, I'm afraid I won't be able to explain to the old mistress. And that's the 3rd floor. If something really does happen, the consequences are really unimaginable. My lord, you have to think twice. Huo Siyuan doesn't care about anyone's life or death, and the only person he cares about is his own grandmother." After some deep thought, Huo Siyuan slowly got up from his seat and walked towards the door with determined steps. He stood upright like a pine tree, with a determined air about him in every step. Shang, the butler, witnessed this scene and couldn't help but feel a complex emotion. He looked at Huo Siyuan's receding back and sighed inwardly. Second master is really cold and ruthless. Such an innocent, sweet young mistress has been bullied like this. Even I, an outsider, can't help but feel heartbroken when I see it. However, despite his heart being filled with helplessness and regret, Butler Shang followed Huo Siyuan's footsteps closely and asked cautiously, "Second master, are you really going to ignore the young mistress?" Huo Siyuan's pace did not slow down at all, not even for a moment. He continued walking expressionlessly, but his cold voice clearly reached Shang Guan's ears, "Go to the door and take a look at her." Upon hearing this, Shang Guan's heart trembled. It turned out that second master was not completely indifferent to the young mistress. Perhaps he had his own considerations and plans. Thinking about this, the butler's heart, which had been hanging in the balance, eased slightly. He gave a small smile of relief, quickened his pace, and followed closely behind the second young master as they walked out the door together. At the same time, the other servants in the villa, seeing this, also followed behind the second young master and exited in an orderly manner. After the second young master had stood firm in the center of the courtyard, several rows of well-trained servants quickly and neatly lined up on either side, like a well-disciplined army. The strong and able bodyguards, like a great wall of steel, guarded behind the second master, forming an impenetrable line of defense. Since Huo Siyuan's work involves various fields, sometimes he will use extraordinary means to deal with some things, so it is inevitable that some people who don't know death will come and make a last-ditch counterattack, sending assassins against the second master. Huo Siyuan himself is also bursting with strength, but he is also worried that these old, weak, sick, and disabled people around him will be accidentally injured. For other reasons, many bodyguards are arranged in the villa. Huo Siyuan turned around and tilted his head slightly to look at the top of the wall, where the stone slab was located. With his extraordinary eyesight, he saw the figure at a glance. He saw a petite girl standing there, dressed in a light pink dress. The breeze blew the skirt, which fluttered lightly, like a blooming peach blossom, so pretty and touching. Luckily, she was wearing a pair of underwear underneath, otherwise, if she wasn't careful, she might reveal her modesty. If you look closely, you can see those slender legs, like young lotus roots, trembling slightly there. It makes people feel pity. I'm afraid a gust of wind will blow her away like a fallen leaf. As I watched, I suddenly felt as if my heart had been grabbed by an invisible hand, causing it to ache. At that moment, a guard holding a loudspeaker walked quickly over and respectfully handed it to Huo Siyuan. Huo Siyuan took the loudspeaker, pressed the button, and looked up at someone upstairs with a blank expression before slowly saying, "What are you doing up there?" Xiaowan, who had been standing up there, feeling a little tired, was startled by the sudden sound and trembled all over. She stumbled and nearly fell. Quickly, Xiaowan grabbed onto the protruding stone next to her and inwardly congratulated herself for not wearing shoes. She took a deep breath slowly and tried to calm herself down. She muttered to herself, "That voice is so familiar. It's that husband of mine I've only met once. Listening to that cold and indifferent voice, I'm in trouble. He's here to arrest me." At that moment, Xiaowan was like under a spell, unable to respond aloud, and she didn't dare make the slightest extra move. She could only remain as still as a statue. Everyone downstairs, including Huo Siyuan, had their hearts in their throats at the moment she had just shaken, fearing that the young mistress would fall straight down and die. Xiaowan upstairs, trembling, turned her head sideways, and from this angle she could just see downstairs. If she didn't look, she would have been fine, but as soon as she looked, she almost had her soul scared away. There was a dark crowd below, like dark clouds pressing in, and she was finished. She must have offended someone she shouldn't have. Huo Siyuan, standing downstairs, saw Xiaowan at a glance. Although it was only half her face, he still remembered it vividly. This couldn't be anyone else but the little woman he had been looking for a long time. Really, the little woman he had been looking for all day and thinking about all day had actually run to his villa and even become his wife. Feng Qi also had a sharp gaze, catching Huo Siyuan's eyes. The look was very strange. Could it be that the young lady upstairs is? If so, then I can also breathe a sigh of relief. After all, I have been under pressure like a mountain to find someone, but I have found nothing. Now my job is considered to be saved. A ripple-like smile suddenly appeared on Huo Siyuan's cold face. It's her. At this moment, a scene from last night kept flashing through my mind over and over again. She murmured, "You've made me look for you." Huo Siyuan's eyes were fixed on Xiaowan upstairs as if they were attracted by a magnet. He said sternly, "Hurry up and spread the cushions here. If anything happens to her, you'll all have to die with her." Everyone looked confused. What was going on? Why had the second master's attitude towards the young mistress changed so drastically? Whatever the reason, everyone rushed like an arrow from about to the utility room, grabbed a cushion, and worked together to blow up the cushions. In the blink of an eye, several cushions were laid out, reaching a height of nearly 10 meters, greatly reducing the distance between the cushions and the young mistress. Chapter 10 No Divorce 1. With long strides, Huo Siyuan quickly ascended the stairs and arrived in his master bedroom in the blink of an eye. His eyes were firm and focused as he walked straight towards the balcony. Everywhere he went, it was like a gust of wind, causing slight fluctuations in the air. Every step seemed so urgent and decisive, as if his heart was calling out to him with an irresistible mission. Finally arriving at the balcony, Huo Siyuan suddenly turned his head and his gaze was instantly drawn to the person standing next to him outside. This person was the one he had been looking for all day and night. He couldn't believe it. The person he had thought about day and night, the person he had longed for, was actually in his villa and had become his wife. In all these decades, he had never felt so strongly that what his grandmother had done was exactly what he wanted. Huo Siyuan took a small step forward, his tone flat but full of endless tenderness, and whispered, "Come here." Xiaowan, who was lying on the wall with her head turned to the other side, suddenly heard an extremely cold voice coming from the balcony next to her ear. In an instant, she felt a sense of fear well up in her heart. However, at this moment, she was in a difficult situation and it was really difficult for her to make any large movements. Along with the cold voice echoing in her ears, Xiaowan's mind could not help but conjure up the stunning appearance of the handsome man she saw in the hotel yesterday. That face seemed to be deeply imprinted in the depths of her memory, and it would not go away. So slowly, she turned her head, and where her gaze fell, there appeared a frosty face. That face seemed to be full of indifference and alienation, just like a creditor who had been owed millions of dollars but had not been repaid, and it was awe-inspiring. This sudden sight scared Xiaowan, who was already timid, and she let out a startled cry, "Ah!" Her straight and slender legs trembled involuntarily, and then, as if triggering some kind of instinctive reaction, she quickly clasped the stone in her hands with both hands, afraid that it would fall. At the same time, Huo Siyuan, who had been silently watching all this, felt a sharp tug in his heart. Without hesitation, he reached out and firmly grasped Xiaowan's soft, delicate wrists with his broad, strong palms. Xiaowan was so frightened that tears welled up in her big, clear, intelligent eyes. She blinked, her watery eyes still welling up with tears as she continued to sob softly. She glanced at her husband again, who looked fierce but was holding her hand. She was filled with conflict and confusion. She was afraid of the unknown, but she also vaguely sensed a sense of security from him. Huo Siyuan stared at the girl in front of him, who suddenly couldn't stop crying. His hardened heart softened. He looked at the tears rolling down her face, one after the other, and was perplexed. He really couldn't understand why she had so many tears. Looking at this pitiful little cutie, crying like this, he thought of many comforting words, but after being single for more than 20 years, all the words he had to say were cold and cruel, and he had never comforted anyone. After racking his brain, in the end, the sweet words that came out of his mouth were just 3 words, "What are you crying for?" The tone was hard, but his voice was full of endless concern and compassion. Xiaowan didn't know why, but after hearing Huo Siyuan's words, she suddenly felt very aggrieved, and then she burst into tears. "Wow!" Huo Siyuan stood still, looking at the woman in front of him, crying so sadly, and an inexplicable ripple arose in his heart. He had never seen anyone cry so beautifully and movingly before, as if every tear had melted into the softest touch in his heart. Suddenly, he took a sharp step forward, so fast that it was astonishing. His figure was like a flash of lightning, and in the blink of an eye he was in front of Xiaowan. His large, strong hands, as hard as steel, grabbed Xiaowan under the armpits and, with a strong pull, he instantly embraced the little beauty, who had been crying like a baby. Only at this moment did Huo Siyuan hold Xiaowan tightly, and only then did his heart, which had been hanging in the balance, calm down. God knows, just now when I saw the little woman I thought about day and night standing there, I was so nervous that I forgot to breathe, for fear that she would accidentally fall. That's the third floor. If she fell, with her small frame, she would be paralyzed if she didn't die. Just thinking about it makes me feel scared. Xiaowan was taken aback by this sudden turn of events. She was just scolding herself, and she was in a position to beat herself up, so why had she suddenly become so gentle? She was stunned, as if she had been put under a spell, and stood there motionless. Her eyes were wide open, unable to believe what was happening before her eyes. Crying tears of joy, she looked exceptionally pitiful. Huo Siyuan was like an impregnable fortress, tightly embracing Xiaowan. He was tall and imposing, his head bowed slightly, his gaze full of adoration and tenderness. He was admiring a rare treasure, gazing at his petite wife in his arms, his eyes sparkling with endless love. At that moment, Huo Siyuan's heart was full of joy and contentment, because he had finally found her. He had searched for her for a day and a night, and her graceful figure kept popping up in his mind. He had held her in his arms countless times in his fantasies. He gently stroked Xiaowan's hair, feeling her breath and heartbeat, as if time had stopped. He wished to stay in this moment forever, to let this happiness continue. If he found her, he would spoil her rotten, so that she could not get out of bed for 3 days and 3 nights, to see how she could still escape from his grasp. His own delicate wife was like a fairy descending to earth, so pretty and lovely that one could not help but want to kiss her hard. Her body is so soft, like cotton candy. That night, he gazed at her with such burning passion and begged her. Xiaowan was tightly embraced by Huo Siyuan, and she looked up at him, never taking her eyes off him for a moment. She whispered, "Can you let go a little? My waist is a little sore." Huo Siyuan held her firmly, and her hands couldn't help but wrap around his waist, which had 8 abs. Seriously, this waist is as hard as iron and incredibly firm. Huo Siyuan listened as Xiaowan's soft, sweet, and almost crying voice sounded like heavenly music, enchanting him. This little treasure really made him unable to let go. The hands he had wrapped around her waist loosened slightly, and then he lowered his head and said to Xiaowan with a voice full of magnetic charm, as if the spring breeze was caressing her face, "Now? Does it still hurt?" This was the first time Xiaowan had listened to his voice so closely, and she felt as if she had been drawn in by an invisible magic spell, instantly becoming entranced. Moreover, he exuded a faint sandalwood fragrance that was refreshing and made people feel incredibly comfortable. After a while, Xiaowan shook her head violently and sweetly replied, "No more." Huo Siyuan's mouth curled up slightly, and a hint of tenderness shone in his eyes as he slowly said, "I heard that you are my wife." This sentence seemed to carry a special kind of magic that made people unable to help but be moved. Although Xiaowan felt Huo Siyuan's gentle tone, her heart was still full of unease. Xiaowan was only up to his chest, so she looked up carefully and looked at Huo Siyuan, and replied softly, that was arranged by my grandmother. If you don't like it, I can go with you right now to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get a divorce." However, Huo Siyuan's original happy mood instantly turned gloomy. He felt uncomfortable hearing that this little woman was eager to divorce him. He thought to himself, "Am I really that scary? That my wife is so eager to escape from this marriage? It seems that I need to be more gentle, so as not to scare my precious." If Fengqi knew what the second young master was thinking at this moment, he would definitely curse him. "Second young master, aren't you scary? Don't you have any sense? Just now, you even said to let the young mistress stand, and when she gets tired, let her fall downstairs by herself. Scary, so scary, I'm scared too." Despite his seething anger, Huo Siyuan tried hard to control his emotions, for fear of frightening the young wife in front of him. He tried to keep a gentle expression on his face, and said in a low but firm voice, "When did I say I wanted a divorce? I will never divorce you." Xiaowan stared at Huo Siyuan with wide eyes, completely taken aback by his refusal to divorce her. She had never expected that a man with Huo Siyuan's powerful aura and independence would be easily swayed by others. But now it seems that she has underestimated the importance he attaches to this marriage. Looking at Xiaowan, who was full of surprise, Huo Siyuan smiled slightly and said softly, "Baby, what's your name?" Staring at Huo Siyuan, Xiaowan felt incredibly amazing. It was only the second time they had met, but he had accepted her so quickly and even called her baby. She asked foolishly, "You called me baby?" Chapter 11 No Divorce 2. As Huo Siyuan listened to his wife's voice, his heart softened. His wife's voice was so beautiful, as if it could make a person fall into a trance. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a devilish smile. His eyes were full of adoration, and he spoke softly, tenderly, "What's the problem? However, you still haven't told me your name." Upon hearing this, Xiaowan felt that there seemed to be some truth to it, and she muttered softly. Then she raised her voice and replied in a clear and pleasant voice, "My name is Xiaowan, Xia as in summer and Wan as in evening." Then she looked at Huo Siyuan and asked curiously, "So what's your name?" Huo Siyuan smiled and replied softly, "Huo Siyuan." Xiaowan thought for a moment and then asked, "Huo Siyuan, how do you write your name?" "You can write it on the palm of my hand." With that, she raised one of her hands and placed it on his chest. Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan, whose big eyes were shining. A warm current welled up in his heart. He slowly let go, and although he was reluctant to do so, he let go of his wife's arms and taught her how to write her name. With one hand supporting the back of Xiaowan's hand, he slowly wrote each stroke in her palm. Huo Siyuan wrote very carefully, and Xiaowan watched very carefully. After writing each character, Huo Siyuan would ask gently, "Do you know how to write Hua?" Xiaowan nodded and said sweetly, "I understand." Huo Siyuan's gaze never left Xiaowan, and he playfully said, "Then show me." This time, Xiaowan took one small hand and held the back of Huo Siyuan's large hand, while the other hand wrote in Huo Siyuan's palm. It was the first time she had held a man's hand, and she found it so hot, so different from a woman's. The two leaned close together, the woman writing very seriously, the man looking at Xiaowan very seriously. Huo Siyuan freed one hand to write for Xiaowan, and with the other, he did not idle at all, directly holding with one hand Xiaowan's slender waist. After a while, Xiaowan looked up happily and said with a smile, "I know." As he watched, Huo Siyuan's heartless Xiaowan smiled at her, and he laughed along with her. His eyes revealed a kind of indulgence and tenderness, as if the whole world only had Xiaowan's existence. This scene happened to be fully visible to everyone downstairs, and they clearly saw the interaction between Huo Siyuan and Xiaowan, as well as the emotions that flowed across Huo Siyuan's face. Everyone originally thought that Xiaowan was just a young mistress in name only, but now they realize that Huo Siyuan's love for her is so deep. Everyone can't help but sigh, realizing that the rumored second young master is not as cold and heartless as the outside world thinks, but because he has never met the person who makes his heart flutter. Now, Xiaowan's appearance has changed everything. From this moment on, everyone realizes that Xiaowan has become the rightful young mistress, and she must be treated with care and caution in the future. After all, the woman who has won the deep love of the second master is naturally not to be underestimated. Just then, gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Huo Siyuan was closest to Xiaowan, so of course he was the first to know what the sound was and who was making it. The corner of his mouth rose slightly, revealing an imperceptible smile. Xiaowan heard the sound coming from her stomach and saw Huo Siyuan smiling there. Her face instantly turned red, and she was at a loss for words. She lowered her head, wishing she could bury her face in the ground, as if that would hide her inner shyness and embarrassment. Huo Siyuan gently took Xiaowan's hand and said calmly, "Hungry, right?" Xiaowan kept her head down and spoke in a small voice, "Well, I haven't eaten since this morning." Huo Siyuan glanced at the expensive watch on his wrist and saw that it was past noon. He couldn't help but frown, and a feeling of tenderness welled up in his heart. She must be starving after not eating for so long. He held Xiaowan's hand tightly, feeling the soft touch. Her hand was small and soft, like it had no bones, which made him feel affectionate. He sighed inwardly, his wife was truly charming in every way. Although he had a million thoughts in his heart, he didn't show them, but held Xiaowan's hand and slowly walked downstairs. As they walked, Huo Siyuan asked, "Night-night, what do you like to eat?" Hearing these words, Xiaowan's heart warmed. She looked up at Huo Siyuan, and a touch of emotion flashed in her eyes. She had never thought that someone would care so much about her preferences. She recalled the past, and it seemed that over the years, her family had never really paid attention to her preferences or needs. Everything had just been fine, as if she were in dispensable existence. And now, Huo Siyuan's concern made her feel incredibly warm. She tried to recall what her favorite food was, but found it difficult to come up with a specific answer. For a long time, she had been used to accepting the food that others gave her, rather than actively choosing what she liked. Perhaps it was precisely for this reason that she had become so easily satisfied, and as long as the food wasn't bad, she could accept it. As Xiaowan thought about this, she unconsciously tightened her grip on Huo Siyuan's hand. She was lost in her thoughts, feeling this rare care. Huo Siyuan keenly sensed Xiaowan's change, and subconsciously increased the strength of his hand, holding it tightly. He understood that at this moment Xiaowan needed more comfort and support, and he was willing to be her strong backing, giving her a sense of security. Xiaowan felt Huo Siyuan's response and a warmth welled up in her heart. She looked up at Huo Siyuan and said softly, "I'm actually not a picky eater." Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan, his eyes full of compassion. He knew that there were too many stories and experiences behind Xiaowan's answer. He was determined to learn more about her past and let her live a happy life. "Okay, then let's try all kinds of food," Huo Siyuan said with a smile. Xiaowan nodded, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She believed that the time spent tasting delicious food with Huo Siyuan would be wonderful, and this care would also be forever etched in her heart. Xiaowan looked up at the handsome man in front of her, as if he had been carved from stone. She thought to herself, the man who has just become my husband is really handsome and gentle. Her gaze was glued to Huo Siyuan's body, and she secretly sighed in her heart, if I really become the person at the top of his heart, I will definitely be very happy. I don't know who will be so lucky. He must really want a baby, and he will definitely be a good father. Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan next to him, lost in thought, wondering what she was thinking. He couldn't help but ask, his tone very gentle, "What are you thinking about, night-night?" Xiaowan looked up at Huo Siyuan and sweetly and obediently said, "Nothing? No one has ever daydreamed in front of me before. It seems that I am still not charming enough in my wife's eyes." As he thought about this, Huo Siyuan looked down at himself, and with his other hand, he touched his waist. Could it be that he has been working out less recently? It seems that the more he works out, the better it is to show his wife the most handsome version of himself. Chapter 12 Legs go weak. As soon as Xiaowan's feet touched the ground, her body, as if out of control, lurched forward and she fell straight into Huo Siyuan's broad, warm embrace. She came back to her senses in an instant and tried to stand up straight, but she was shocked to find that her legs, as if they had lost all feeling, were limp and numb and could not support her weight at all. She secretly lamented in her heart, "This is terrible, he can't possibly think that I threw myself at him on purpose, can he? Just look at the cold, distant look on his face." At this moment, Huo Siyuan, faced with this sudden situation, was first taken aback, but quickly recovered and smoothly embraced Xiaowan in his arms. Xiaowan looked up and saw the man who, without hesitation, had embraced her in the first instance, staring at her quietly. She couldn't help but lean closer to his solid chest and whispered, "Mr. Huo, I'm really very sorry. I definitely didn't do it on purpose. I was standing there for too long just now, so my legs have become a little numb and weak." Huo Siyuan couldn't help but feel a surge of compassion in his heart when he heard Xiaowan mention having weak legs. He asked in a soft voice, "Can I hug you?" Xiaowan was confused and asked back with a doubtful look on her face, "What?" Huo Siyuan took a deep breath and said softly, gathering his courage, "Can I hug you?" Xiaowan was instantly shocked and stood there in shock. Although they had only met twice, they were after all a legitimate couple. After some thought and deliberation, she finally nodded slightly in agreement. After getting Xiaowan's consent, Huo Siyuan slowly bent down. He moved with gentle, expert hands, his left hand carefully guiding Xiaowan's slender knee, as if it were a precious treasure, while his right hand rested lightly on her tiny waist. With a slight tightening of his arms, Xiaowan was lifted up firmly and without shaking. She rested her head lightly against Huo Siyuan's broad, sturdy chest, and at that moment, she could hear extremely clearly the strong, rhythmic heartbeat coming from the other person's chest. The steady and powerful beating seemed to have some kind of magic, and Xiaowan couldn't help but listen intently. Unconsciously, a blush of shyness crept up her fair and delicate cheeks. At this moment, Xiaowan's two hands, which should have been tightly wrapped around Huo Siyuan's neck, looked a little overwhelmed. They were curled up in front of her like frightened rabbits. For some reason, when her body rose and fell in Huo Siyuan's arms, an inexplicable fear and unease welled up in Xiaowan's heart. She always felt as if she would fall at any moment. Despite this, she still tried her best to restrain the embarrassment and awkwardness inside her, clenching her teeth and holding on for dear life, for fear that if she wasn't careful, she would really fall. Xiaowan curled her fingers tightly and murmured in a voice even smaller than a mosquito's, "Mr. Huo, can I hug your neck?" Before she finished speaking, her head had already dropped so low that it was almost buried in her chest. Huo Siyuan lowered his head at the sound, his gaze softly gazing at the person in his arms, this shy and lovely person, a smile of affectionate indulgence curling the corners of his mouth, he said softly, "Mm." After hearing this, Xiaowan felt as if she had received great encouragement, and immediately extended her hands and tightly embraced Huo Siyuan's neck. In an instant, a hot heat spread through her skin, causing her heart to tremble uncontrollably. Apart from that accident, this was actually the first time in her life that she had such intimate contact with the opposite sex while being in a clear state of mind. This strange and wonderful feeling made Xiaowan both nervous and excited, and her heart was pounding like a fawn. Somehow, at the moment, she just felt like her head had been scorched by fire, burning hot, and even her hands seemed to be on fire, burning up. Not only that, but the heart was like a runaway wild horse, beating wildly. The strong and rapid rhythm even made him clearly hear the sound of thumping. He secretly worried that this thunderous heartbeat would be noticed by the person next to him, Huo Siyuan. In a panic, he quickly gathered his hands back together and pressed them tightly against his chest with lightning speed, hoping that this would calm his restless heart and prevent it from being heard by Huo Siyuan, as he would be so embarrassed. He silently said to himself, "Okay, calm down, stop jumping around like this, or you'll give yourself away." However, Huo Siyuan had no idea why his petite young wife was blushing, but he was still very happy, and a faint smile involuntarily appeared at the corner of his mouth. In the blink of an eye, the two had reached the top of the stairs. Looking at his petite young wife in his arms, he saw that her slender hands were always pressing down on him, and she didn't seem to want to wrap her arms around him. Seeing this, Huo Siyuan had no choice but to gently remind her, "We're going downstairs, and it might get a little bumpy. Do you want to hold on to me a little tighter?" Hearing the pleasant sound coming from above her head, Xiaowan immediately obeyed and wrapped her arms around Huo Siyuan's neck. Seeing her own neck being embraced by a pair of soft hands again, she felt a sense of satisfaction. Huo Siyuan deliberately walked a little unsteadily. "Ah!" Xiaowan was startled by the feeling of weightlessness and let out a scream. The little hands in Xiaowan's embrace gripped tighter, and she looked up at Huo Siyuan with pitiful eyes and said, "Huo, sir, can you slow down a little?" Huo Siyuan spoke softly, as if he were coaxing an innocent child, saying, "Mm." Hearing this, Xiaowan suddenly felt as if she had become particularly foolish. Clearly, the pace of the stairs was already slow enough, but she had the impudence to make such a request, which was really rude. "Oh." As soon as the words fell, she hung her head in disappointment, and her hands, which had been holding Huo Siyuan's neck, unconsciously tightened a little more. Although Huo Siyuan was teasing Xiaowan with his words, his actions were actually full of affection for her. He was seen to have slowed down considerably when descending the stairs, and even the strength with which he held Xiaowan's arms was a little more than before, as if he was afraid that the person in his arms would be hurt in the slightest. This went on for quite a while. Finally, Huo Siyuan appeared in the sight of everyone, carrying Xiaowan in his arms, and they successfully reached the lobby on the first floor. He softly commanded, "Hurry and go prepare the meal." Butler Shang, standing nearby, dared not neglect his duties in the slightest, and immediately walked quickly up to Huo Siyuan to respond, "Second young master, don't worry, the meal has already been prepared. Please go to the dining room with the young mistress and we can start eating." Huo Siyuan nodded slightly in satisfaction. The surrounding servants looked on in disbelief, at their normally cold, ruthless, and merciless second young master. At this moment, he is so careful and tenderly caring for the delicate woman in his arms. They couldn't help but secretly sigh in their hearts, the young mistress is truly blessed. She has been able to make the normally cold and frosty second master show such a warm and affectionate side. It seems that the young mistress Xiaowan's status has just been solidified. Chapter 13 Call me Siyuan. Huo Siyuan embraced Xiaowan tightly and walked slowly towards the dining hall with firm and steady steps. As the distance gradually closed, a strong and tempting aroma of food wafted towards Xiaowan's nose. She couldn't help but tilt her head slightly and looked around curiously. The scene in front of her left Xiaowan speechless. She saw that the huge dining table stretched out like a long dragon, with each side able to seat more than 20 people at the same time. Near the wall, a row of well-trained maids and valiant guards stood in perfect formation. They were tall and straight, with solemn expressions on their faces. The scene was breathtaking. As Xiaowan continued to look around, he noticed that in the center of the dining table was a towering candelabra, the flickering candlelight emitting a soft, warm glow. Above it hung a low-key, luxurious, yet elegant chandelier, with dazzling crystal pendants shimmering with a charming radiance, illuminating the entire dining room. Then there was the table itself, overflowing with delicious food, a feast for the eyes and the palate. Not only were the dishes colorful and appetizing, but they also overflowed with aroma. Even from a distance, one could clearly smell the mouth-watering fragrance, which was a testament to the chef's superb skills and profound mastery. What was even more amazing was the sheer number of dishes on the table. A rough estimate would put the number at hundreds. Such a sumptuous spread filled the long table to the brim, leaving hardly any gaps. Meanwhile, Huo Siyuan had already walked up to the head of the table, and a maid standing next to him respectfully stepped forward and gently pulled back the dining chair that symbolized his noble status. Huo Siyuan sat down without a change of expression, as if he took all this for granted. Then he picked up Xiaowan, the little cutie standing next to him. At that moment, Xiaowan was sitting on Huo Siyuan's lap, and Xiaowan immediately reacted by putting her hands around Huo Siyuan's neck. Xiaowan's cheeks had already turned red like ripe apples, and she shyly lowered her head, her heart pounding like a fawn. After a while, she finally gathered her courage and looked up, her gaze fixed on Huo Siyuan, and she said in a soft voice, "Mr. Huo, can you put me down first?" Huo Siyuan gazed at his petite and lovely wife, his gaze falling on her slightly reddened eyes. Obviously, she had cried for a while out of fear when they were on the balcony just now, so there were still some tear stains around the corners of her eyes, which made him feel a sense of love and compassion. "No, this is also quite good. We can eat, and this is more convenient, I can feed you," Huo Siyuan said softly. Xiaowan could hardly believe her ears, as if she were hearing voices. She was full of doubts. Feed me? This. Then, an arm wrapped tightly around her slender waist, while the other hand carefully scooped up a spoonful of the fragrant bird's nest and fish maw soup and slowly brought it to Xiaowan's mouth. "Be good and open your mouth," Huo Siyuan coaxed gently. Xiaowan hurriedly opened her mouth and tried to explain, "Mr. Huo, you know, I'm already 18 years old this year, I'm no longer a baby who needs to be taken care of." However, before she could finish her sentence, she was interrupted by the delicious food that Huo Siyuan quickly shoved into her mouth. Xiaowan chewed lightly, savoring the wonderful taste, and couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow, this is delicious. What is this made of?" When Xiaowan was at the Xia family residence before, although the living conditions were passable and there was no shortage of clothing, food, shelter, or transportation, they were just enough to meet basic needs. She had little contact with expensive and rare items, let alone tasting such delicious food. This bird's nest and fish maw soup is not bad. If the baby likes it, you can tell them to make a serving every day and deliver it. Hearing that she could enjoy such delicacies every day, Xiaowan was naturally overjoyed. How could she refuse? With a sweet smile, she nodded gently in response, "Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Huo." However, when Huo heard again and again that the other party called him Mr. Huo, his eyebrows, which were as sharp as swords, slightly furrowed. "Every night, you are my wife registered at the Civil Affairs Bureau, so don't call me Mr. Huo anymore, you have to change the way you address me." Xiaowan thought that this remark was not without reason, so she obediently nodded in agreement and began to ponder carefully what would be an appropriate way to address him. After a long while, Xiaowan finally spoke, in a sweet and clear voice, "I'll call you Huo Siyuan." However, Huo Siyuan didn't seem to be satisfied with this name, shaking his head and saying, "No. Calling me by my full name makes it seem like we're too unfamiliar with each other. And don't call me you anymore. Aren't we strangers? We've only met twice." Xiaowan dared only think these words in her heart. The maid next to her shook her head inwardly, screaming in her heart, No, this is not a matter of familiarity. No one has dared to call second master by his first name so far. Everyone outside is respectful and addresses him as second master. Who dares to call second master by his first name? You won't find anyone so bold in this world. Even if there is, the grass on that person's grave will already be 10 meters high. After thinking about it, Xiaowan obediently continued, "What about Siyuan?" After hearing this, Huo Siyuan nodded and said in a very charming voice, "This is fine, apart from this, you can also call him my Yuan or husband." Hearing such a pleasant voice, Xiaowan felt very shy and her face became even more red. Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan, who blushed so easily, and said tenderly, "It seems that my Wan is very shy." When Xiaowan heard this, for some reason her heart began to race. She grabbed Huo Siyuan's collar with both hands and said a little bashfully, "Siyuan, you're laughing at me, so please stop." Huo Siyuan gazed deeply into the person in his arms. With the other hand, he was like a nimble dancer, gracefully picking up the chopsticks and picking up a piece of beef, as if he were protecting a treasure. He said gently to Xiaowan, Wan, come, open your mouth." Xiaowan, who was buried in Huo Siyuan's arms, was like a docile fawn. Hearing this voice, she obediently turned her head, opened her small cherry-like mouth, and gently ate the beef, then savored it as if she was enjoying the most delicious dish in the world. After a while, Siyuan, it's delicious, this beef is so tender. It's delicious. Xiaowan's gaze was like a nimble butterfly, looking left and right, and finally settling on Huo Siyuan. Siyuan, let's wait until everyone is here before we eat, or it won't be nice. Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan, who was so simple and kind in front of him, and his love in his heart surged like a tidal wave. His own treasure was like the brightest star in the night sky, radiating a charming light. He said in an extremely gentle tone, everyone is already here, who else are we waiting for? Xiaowan was surprised like a frightened rabbit. We're only 2 people eating, so why did you cook so much? Where's Grandma? Grandma, after she helped me find a good wife, she went traveling. When Xiaowan heard this, she blushed for some reason. It's fine, you don't have to eat it all. Which one do you want to eat? You can try a little bit of everything. Butler Shang was standing nearby and really wanted to tell the young mistress, it's not that I want to waste food, but it's mainly because young master is a picky eater with a poor appetite. The chefs are all 6-star chefs, and one after another, they have tried every means to bring out the best in their cooking and cook a Manchuhan imperial feast. Butler Shang dares only to say this in his heart, but dares not say it out loud. The rest of the meal was spent with Huo Siyuan tenderly feeding Xiaowan bite after bite. Xiaowan also indulged in it the whole time. Who could resist an invincible hottie feeding you so gently? Chapter 14 I got married. After eating, Xiaowan was alone in the villa, doing nothing. Huo Siyuan had an urgent matter and went to the company. After dealing with a busy day of business, Huo Siyuan received an invitation from his brothers and went to a luxurious private club. The club has a unique design and luxurious decorations, with every detail showing unparalleled quality and style. When he stepped into the luxurious box, the intense flashing lights dazzled his eyes so much that he could hardly open them. However, Huo Siyuan remained calm and composed, as if the lights were only a trivial distraction to him. He was wearing a high-end suit with exquisite tailoring and exquisite texture, and every detail revealed his dignity and taste. His face was handsome and cold, as perfect as a sculpture. His cold expression gave people an unapproachable feeling, but also exuded an irresistible charm. Feng Qi, as Huo Siyuan's right-hand man, respectfully opened the box door in front of him and politely said, "Second young master, please come in." Then, he quickly turned on the lights in the box, instantly illuminating the entire space. Huo Siyuan walked gracefully into the box. His pace was steady and confident, as if the world was under his control. He coldly scanned the crowd in the box, his gaze resting on the center of the room. "Leave." Huo Siyuan's voice was low and authoritative, leaving no room for discussion. His words were like commands, and no one dared disobey. Feng Qi, who was standing nearby, did not hesitate to carry out Huo Siyuan's instructions and quickly evicted the other unimportant people from the box. Only those who were close to Huo Siyuan remained in the box, all of them sons and daughters of the 4 major noble families in the capital. They had grown up together with Huo Siyuan since childhood and had a deep friendship and tacit understanding with each other. These noble families were not ordinary wealthy families, but existed at the top of the social pyramid. They possessed huge wealth and endless power, and controlled the lifeblood of the country's economy and politics. However, in this elite circle, Huo Siyuan still stands out with his outstanding talent and unrivaled strength, becoming the focus of everyone's attention. And among these 20% of the rich, there is also a division of classes. The 4 people in the box are at the top of the pyramid. These 4 people come from the Qin, Ouyang, and Sun families, and the top one is the Huo family. It can be said that as long as it is a profitable project, business, or supermarket, they will have a stake in it. The scope of their involvement is astonishing. Among them, the Qin, Ouyang, and Sun families all look up to the Huo family as a leader-like presence. A handsome-looking Qin Mo, seeing that Huo Siyuan had arrived, could hardly hide his excitement. "Yuan, why did it take you so long to come? We've all been waiting for you." Sun Hao, seeing his idol, the second master, finally appear, immediately stood up excitedly. "Brother Huo, I really missed you." Ouyang Xiao, who was pretending to be asleep with his eyes closed, slowly opened them upon hearing the sound. Upon seeing Huo Siyuan arrive, a smile also appeared on his face. "Yuan, you finally come? Here's a brief introduction." The first one, Qin Mo, is a notorious playboy whose life is full of sensual pleasures and materialistic indulgences. His girlfriends change frequently, almost every few days, a new face appears by his side. It is no exaggeration to say that the number of women he has played with even exceeds the number of times you have eaten. Second, Ouyang Xiao is a leader in the medical field. He has a keen interest in medicine and used this as motivation to open one of the most outstanding private hospitals in the capital. This hospital not only provided valuable employment opportunities for thousands of outstanding doctors, but also saved tens of thousands of patients on the verge of death. Third place, Sun Hao is a big, sunny boy who has an almost obsessive admiration for Huo Siyuan and is arguably his #1 fan. At the moment, Huo Siyuan is leisurely sitting on a comfortable sofa, crossing his long legs, and coldly examining the several people in front of him with his indifferent gaze. His face showed no trace of kindness, and he asked coldly, "What do you want from me?" Shin Mo keenly sensed Huo Siyuan's joy, but still pretended to be calm, trying to reply in a relaxed tone, "Nothing special, just wanted to get everyone together." Sun Hao completely ignored Huo Siyuan's displeasure, his eyes flashing with obsession and fanaticism, as if Huo Siyuan was the only belief in his life. He said excitedly, "That's right, brother Huo, it's been a long time since we last got together. Always buried in work, that's no good, you need to relax a bit too." Ouyang Xiu looked at Huo Siyuan, who had a cold expression on his face, and said softly, "Yuan, I think you look good, has anything good happened recently?" Shin Mo and Sun Hao looked at Huo Siyuan as if he were a rare treasure, staring at him intently and asking doubtfully, "Xiu, are you really sure that this ice face guy looks good? Where did you see that?" As soon as these words were uttered, Ouyang Xiu and Huo Siyuan almost simultaneously rolled their eyes at the two people next to them. Shin Mo asked with a smile, "Yuan, did Ouyang really get it right? What big thing have you been busy with recently?" Sun Hao stood next to Huo Siyuan like a mischievous monkey, eagerly asking, "Brother Huo, I really want to know too." Huo Siyuan heard them and asked what he had been doing recently. Immediately, the image of Xiaowan's bright smile from that summer night came to mind, and unconsciously, the corners of his mouth also rose slightly. The three people on the side all widened their eyes at this sight, their hearts filled with curiosity. What on earth had happened? Over the years, they had never seen Huo Siyuan laugh so happily. "I remember that before, when we bought a mine and found purple ore in it, we made tens of billions of dollars. But at that time, Huo Siyuan's face was still cold and indifferent, and I never saw him smile." Shin Mo saw Huo Siyuan smiling so wildly and couldn't help but doubt in his heart. Could it be that this kid really has something big to celebrate? But he didn't think it was likely, so he asked with a smile, "Yuan, tell us quickly, what good thing have you encountered?" Looking at the three idiots in front of him, Huo Siyuan couldn't help but reveal a faint sense of pride in his eyes and mouth, and then slowly said, "I got married." Hearing this, the three of them almost simultaneously let out an exclamation, "What?" Shin Mo was shocked, his mouth wide open as if he could stick an egg in it. Ouyang Xiu was wide-eyed, his face full of disbelief, and Sun Hao was even more direct, jumping up from his chair as if he were going to faint. However, Huo Siyuan completely ignored their shock and said calmly, "I got married." Chapter 15 I want to meet my new sister-in-law. Shin Mo, Ouyang Xiu, and Sun Hao all stared at Huo Siyuan with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were hearing. They were filled with confusion and surprise, as if time had come to a standstill. The first to come back to his senses was Shin Mo. He stared at his good friend with a tone of dissatisfaction in his voice and said, "Yuan, when did you get married? Why didn't you tell me? We are good friends, and this is not being loyal." Ouyang Xiu and Sun Hao, who were standing next to him, echoed his words, expressing their strong agreement. They felt that it was really a bit too much for their best friend to hide such an important matter from them. The three of them spoke one after the other, completely denying Huo Siyuan the opportunity to speak. They were so emotional and enthusiastic that they kept asking questions, leaving Huo Siyuan at a loss for words. Suddenly, Sun Hao, as if he had discovered a new continent, looked curious with a gossipy expression on his face and asked, "Huo Gu, this is impossible. How could there not be any news of such a big event as your marriage?" At this, Ouyang Xiu, who was standing nearby, spoke with concern, "Yuan, could it be that this sister-in-law was forced on you by Grandma Hua? Everyone knows that Grandma Hua often arranges blind dates for Huo Siyuan, and she will even send the woman directly to his villa. But no one expected that this time, she would actually help him marry his wife directly." This came as a great surprise to his brothers. Sun Hao saw his idol being forced to marry a woman he didn't know, and he was furious. He angrily said, "Brother Hua, that woman is really bold, she even dared to set her sights on you. I'll help you teach her a lesson." Huo Siyuan, who had not spoken up until then, heard someone say they wanted to teach his wife a lesson, and his face instantly turned dark, and a dangerous gleam flashed in his eyes. Sun Hao immediately felt the coldness emanating from his idol, instantly understanding that he had said the wrong thing. A wave of fear washed over him, and he quickly apologized, saying, "Brother Hua, I said the wrong thing, I know I was wrong." After saying this, he obediently shut up. Ouyang Xiu, who was standing nearby, saw that his good friend was angry, and couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Who was this mysterious sister-in-law? Shin Mo, who had had countless experiences with women, immediately saw the clues. He was secretly surprised. He had always thought that the always indifferent second master actually had special feelings for this sister-in-law he had never met. Huo Siyuan looked at the three people who had shut up, slightly crossed his legs, and gracefully picked up a glass of red wine on the table, took a gentle sip, and said in a cold tone, "Her name is Siyuan, she is my legally married wife, you are not allowed to speak ill of her in the future. If I find out, you don't need to stay in the capital." Shin Mo. Ouyang Xiao. Sun Hao. The three of them answered in unison, understood. They sounded like obedient little soldiers. Sun Hao realized that he had said something wrong just now, so he immediately began to flatter, "Brother Huo, when can we meet the young wife?" Huo Siyuan thought of his young wife and his heart was filled with longing. He really wanted to fly back to the villa immediately to meet her. As he thought about it, his expression softened. "My wife is very timid, and you three look a bit unattractive, so I'm worried that she might be scared. When she's a bit more courageous, I'll find a time to introduce you to her." Hearing this, the three people who had been told that they looked unattractive let out a deep gasp. Are these words of human speech? They suppressed the urge to violently beat Huo Siyuan. After all, they knew that they were no match for Huo Siyuan. Shin Mo thought to himself, although I'm not as handsome as Yuan, I'm at least a good-looking guy, and every time I go out, I attract the attention of many women. I never thought he would say that I look ugly, which is an insult to me. Ouyang Xiao couldn't help but exclaim, although I'm not that kind of stunningly handsome guy, I'm still considered above average. And as a leader in the medical field, I'm also considered a schoolboy-level figure. I never thought he would say something like that, it really hurts. Sun Hao was extremely depressed. He felt that although he was not handsome and charming, he was at least a bright and handsome guy who was loved by everyone. But I never thought that I would be disliked by my favorite idol for my ugly appearance. This made him feel as if his heart were about to shatter into pieces, as if it were being tightly squeezed by an invisible hand, so painful that he could hardly breathe. On the other side, Huo Siyuan really didn't want to look at these ugly guys again, so he said lightly, "I'm leaving." Hearing this, Sun Hao was very reluctant and quickly asked, "Brother Huo, it's still early, you just got here not long ago, why are you in such a hurry to leave?" However, Huo Siyuan simply ignored Sun Hao's entreaties, stood up, tidied his clothes, buttoned up his shirt, and then said with a smug look on his face, "My wife misses me, your sister-in-law is especially clingy to me, there's nothing I can do, who asked me to have a wife? You single guys won't understand." After saying that, he lifted his foot and left, leaving only a cold back to them. Huo Siyuan's words were like sharp flying knives, piercing straight into the little hearts of Shin Hao, Ouyang Xiao, and Sun Hao. The three of them looked at each other, their hearts filled with helplessness and envy. Shin Mo couldn't help but exclaim, "Look at him, is he still the Huo Siyuan we know? Now he's become so showy. He's there to rub our noses in it, it's really unbearable." The other two nodded vigorously, yes. "Ouyang Xiao, I'm really curious about the younger sister-in-law. What does she look like? How did she manage to capture this cold-hearted man's heart?" The other two nodded vigorously, yes. Sun Hao, and just now, was Brother Huo showing off that he has a wife? The other two nodded vigorously, yes. Shin Mo, I think so. After all, someone like Brother Huo would rarely mention his personal life. Ouyang Xiao, I agree. But I'm really looking forward to seeing the real face of his wife. I wonder if she's as beautiful as a fairy. Sun Hao, yeah, if his wife is pretty, then Brother Huo is really lucky. He can take her out with him in the future and make all the single guys jealous. Shin Mo, you're right. But I'm more concerned about her personality. I hope she's not too dominant, otherwise Brother Huo might not be able to handle it. Ouyang Xiao, don't worry, with Brother Huo's personality, he won't find a woman who is too dominant to be his wife. I believe that sister-in-law will definitely be a kind and considerate woman. Besides, there is no one in the world who is more dominant than Brother Huo. Sun Hao, that's right. Anyway, we must wish Brother Huo and sister-in-law happiness. I hope they can always be together and grow old together. Shin Mo, you're right. Although Brother Huo usually seems indifferent, deep down he really does long for companionship. Now that he's found his other half, we should be happy for him. Ouyang Xiao, yes, I hope they can hold their wedding soon, so that we can share in their joy. Sun Hao, that's great. We must celebrate properly then, so that Brother Huo can feel our blessings and support. Shin Mo, no problem, we'll work together to plan a romantic and unforgettable wedding for Brother Huo and his new wife. so that they can become the happiest newlyweds. The three of them smiled at each other, as if they could already see Huo Siyuan and his wife, happy and sweet at their wedding. Chapter 16 Having a drink. Villa on the clouds. Xiaowan was bored in her room alone one summer night, so she started to look around. She noticed that the whole room was in a monotonous color scheme, with nothing but black and white. Even the bed was pure black. She didn't need to guess to know that this must be Siyuan's room. Feeling a little bored, she started to walk around aimlessly, hoping to find something interesting. However, as she had just finished eating, she felt a little sleepy, but she was too embarrassed to go to bed after eating. So, she decided to put on her slippers and run downstairs to find something to drink. When she reached the first floor, all the maids heard her footsteps downstairs and stopped what they were doing, then greeted her respectfully. "Good afternoon, young mistress." Xiaowan was taken aback by the sudden change of scene, because she had always been a minor figure in the family and had not been taken seriously. This sudden change of scene made her unable to adapt for a while. She was shocked by the enthusiasm of the maids and stood dumbfounded at the top of the stairs. After a while, she came back to her senses. She sweetly told them, "You're too polite. You go about your business." The maids answered in unison, "Yes." And then everyone quickly returned to their respective posts to continue working. After all, everyone had witnessed the situation at the dinner table. Even if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they had heard about it. The maids could all see that second master was very special to Xiaowan and especially spoiled her. Xiaowan's status as the young mistress was now set in stone. Second master didn't have to flatter her anymore, but now he could flatter the young mistress. At first glance, the young mistress seemed to be a very good-natured and kind person. Although second master had only been with the young mistress for a few hours, he had been in a really good mood during those few hours. For example, at lunch today, the cook accidentally undercooked one of the dishes, but instead of getting fired, he was praised by the second master. In the past, he would have been blacklisted and never hired again. So the second master has become a better person because of the young mistress. She is such a good person. I hope she can stay in our family forever and bring the second master more happiness and joy. Yes, I think second master has also become different, as if he has become more gentle and considerate. Then we must also serve second master's wife well in the future, so that she can feel our sincerity and enthusiasm. The servants all expressed their willingness to do their best to take care of Xiaowan and make her feel comfortable and at ease here. They knew that Xiaowan was not only second master's wife, but also an indispensable member of the family. They were willing to accept her with all their hearts and make her the true master of the house. This was undoubtedly great news for those who worked in the Huo household. After all, working in the Huo household meant a high salary, generous benefits, and a relatively light workload. However, the servants were also constantly worried that they would be fired at the slightest mistake. Losing this job would be a huge loss for them. Now, with the presence of the young mistress, second master's mood would always be pleasant, and perhaps he would not dismiss others so easily. In this way, they can continue to work at the Huo family with peace of mind. Xiaowan slowly walked down the stairs, and her gaze happened to meet an ant coming towards her. This ant had a respectful attitude, and smiled as she introduced herself to Xiaowan. "Hello, young mistress. My surname is Deng, and everyone affectionately calls me Auntie Deng. If you have any needs or trivial matters at the villa, you can always tell me. Whether you want to eat something, drink something, or even need to buy something, you can just tell me." Xiaowan looked at the kind ant in front of her and said sweetly and politely, "Hello, Auntie Deng. I'm a little thirsty and would like some juice." Auntie Deng looked at the well-behaved Xiaowan and smiled and replied, "Okay. Then, young mistress, go sit at the bar over here and I'll pour it for you." Xiaowan sat at the bar and looked around the first floor. It was huge, with a mixture of arrogance and modesty with a touch of luxury. Finally, she looked in the kitchen and saw Auntie Deng making juice for herself, and felt a little warmth. The kitchen was well equipped with several refrigerators. The one Auntie Deng had just opened was full of fruit. Auntie Deng looked at herself while juicing and said gently, "Oops. Young mistress, I didn't ask what you like to drink. I've made you a strawberry juice, is that okay?" Xiaowan obediently replied, "Yes, I've eaten strawberries before, but I've never had strawberry juice before." "Thank you, Auntie Deng." Auntie Deng smiled and said, "You're welcome, as long as the young mistress likes it." In a moment, Auntie Deng handed Xiaowan the strawberry juice she had just squeezed, and said, "Please enjoy, young lady." Xiaowan took the strawberry juice and took a gentle sip. The taste was sweet and sour, delicious, and very refreshing. She smiled and said to Auntie Deng, "Thank you, Auntie Deng, this strawberry juice is very delicious." Auntie Deng happily replied, "I'm glad you like it. If there's anything you want to eat or drink in the future, just let me know." Xiaowan nodded, her heart full of gratitude and warmth. She felt that although this home was large, it was warm and comfortable. Here, she felt the happiness of being cared for and taken care of. Auntie Deng looked at Xiaowan and found that she was a very pretty young girl with delicate features, and couldn't help but sigh in her heart that the young master was truly blessed. So she smiled and asked her, "Young mistress, what kind of fruit would you like? I'll go wash some for you." Xiaowan has always had a soft spot for fruit. Hearing what Auntie Deng said, a smile immediately appeared on her face, and she responded, "Yes. I'm a little hungry too. Auntie Deng, what kind of fruit do we have at home?" While speaking, Auntie Deng quickly prepared the strawberry juice and then gently placed the cup in front of Xiaowan. "Please drink, young mistress." Xiaowan politely said thank you, took the cup and began to taste it. Auntie Deng replied with a smile, "Young mistress, you don't need to be so polite. It is my duty to take care of you." Xiaowan nodded and smiled to express her gratitude. Auntie Deng looked at Xiaowan with concern and asked, "How does it taste? Is it to your liking?" Xiaowan looked up, her eyes sparkling with contentment. "It's delicious. I really like the taste." Auntie Deng's mood brightened upon hearing Xiaowan's praise. "If you like it, I'll try making some other kinds of juice for you to try in the future, so you can experience different flavors." Xiaowan nodded gratefully and continued to enjoy the delicious strawberry juice. Auntie Deng then took a few of each type of fruit from the refrigerator and placed them on a plate. "Young mistress, these fruits are all from our own orchard, and they were also freshly airlifted. They are all natural and free of pesticides." Xiaowan couldn't help feeling very novel as she looked at the full plate of fruits of different shapes and colors in front of her. These fruits all looked very attractive and made people want to try them. Auntie Deng smiled and introduced, "Young lady, this white strawberry is called a pineapple berry, and it has a sweet and juicy taste. This grape is a ruby Roman grape, which tastes delicious. This is a dragon fruit banana, which is a cross between a dragon fruit and a banana, and of course, there is also our common cherry." Xiaowan listened with interest, listening to Auntie Deng's introduction while tasting the various fruits. She was full of praise for each one. However, when she was drinking her drink, she accidentally spilled it on her clothes, instantly staining them with a reddish strawberry juice. Xiaowan looked down at her skirt and felt a wave of guilt, as if she had made a big mistake. Auntie Deng sensed Xiaowan's unease and gently reassured her, "Young madam, it's fine. You can just go upstairs and change your clothes and wash them." Xiaowan looked at Auntie Deng gratefully, nodded, and then quickly got up and ran upstairs to change her clothes. Chapter 17 Second Master is very clingy with Xiaowan. After going upstairs, Xiaowan went to her room and gently opened the closet door. The closet was full of clothes of all styles and colors, and she couldn't help but exclaim, "When were all these clothes prepared?" She selected a light pink puffy dress from the many clothes and took it into the bathroom. When she took off her shirt, she suddenly noticed some marks on her chest, so she muttered, "Anyway, there's nothing to do now, so I might as well take a shower." Thinking this, Xiaowan didn't hesitate and got started. She took out her phone, played her favorite song, and enjoyed the time in the shower while listening to it, feeling exceptionally happy. Just then, there was a sound of an engine turning off from downstairs. Immediately afterwards, a tall and straight figure got out of the car. "Hello, second master." "Well," he replied indifferently. Huo Siyuan took big strides and walked quickly towards the villa, his eyes searching around but not finding the person he wanted to see. "Where is the young mistress?" he asked anxiously. Auntie Deng felt very gratified to see that second master was anxious to find his wife as soon as he returned. She respectfully replied, "Second master, the young mistress is upstairs in her bedroom." Huo Siyuan nodded and could not wait to walk upstairs, as fast as an arrow. Knock, knock, knock. Huo Siyuan stood outside the door and knocked gently. This was the first time he had entered, and he needed to knock on the door before this room. He couldn't help feeling a little happy. After waiting for 3 seconds and seeing no response from inside the room, he began to worry, afraid that something might happen to Xiaowan while she was inside. So, without hesitation, he pushed open the door and quickly walked in. As soon as he opened the door, he heard singing and the sound of running water coming from the bathroom. It turned out that Xiaowan was happily singing in the shower. Hearing these sounds, Huo Siyuan's heart, which had been hanging high, finally let go. He quietly walked over to the bed and sat down, waiting patiently. As the minutes passed, the singing in the bathroom gradually stopped, and the sound of the water slowly faded. Finally, the bathroom door slowly opened with a slight sound. Xiaowan wiped her wet hair as she walked out of the bathroom. When she looked up, she saw the tall figure sitting on the bed. "Ah!" Xiaowan exclaimed. She was really startled to see him because she didn't expect that Huo Siyuan would suddenly appear in the room. Xiaowan was stunned for a moment, as if she hadn't had time to react. Perhaps it was because she was shy, or perhaps she was startled by Huo Siyuan's sudden appearance. She stood there dazed and at a loss. Huo Siyuan's burning gaze locked onto Xiaowan, who had just come out of the shower, and he slowly said, "I'm back." Xiaowan was shocked by this sudden remark. Her face flushed with a hint of red, and she lowered her head shyly. After a while, she came back to her senses and said softly, "You're back." Huo Siyuan immediately stood up and walked quickly towards Xiaowan. He bent down and picked her up in his arms, letting her sit in his lap. He inhaled the fresh fragrance emanating from Xiaowan's body, feeling her warmth and softness, and couldn't help but become intoxicated. Looking at Xiaowan, who had just got out of the shower, and seeing her face reddening from the heat, was extremely seductive. The pink cartoon pajamas were loose, but one could faintly see Xiaowan's perfect figure. Huo Siyuan coughed dryly, and his deep eyes sank. He immediately stepped forward and reached out to embrace her tightly. In this embrace, he clearly felt Xiaowan's softness, and it felt as if he wanted to rub Xiaowan into his body. Xiaowan screamed in shock, "Hey! What are you doing?" After saying that, Xiaowan struggled a little. "Don't move around." A low voice sounded. Xiaowan didn't dare to move around either, and was quietly embraced by Huo Siyuan. Then, he asked gently, "Why did you suddenly take a bath?" Xiaowan nestled in Huo Siyuan's arms like a kitten, her voice as soft as a mosquito humming, with a little shyness and embarrassment, "Because I just accidentally poured it while drinking juice downstairs, and then..." Her voice got lower and lower, until it was almost inaudible. As soon as Huo Siyuan heard it, his face instantly became tense. He quickly picked up Xiaowan in his arms and gently placed her on the bed, his movements as gentle as if he were treating a fragile treasure. Anxiously, he rolled up his sleeves to check for signs of injury. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, he crouched down and prepared to lift up Xiaowan's skirt. Held up in his arms and sitting on the bed, Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan blankly, wondering what was going on. She was confused. Why was he suddenly so nervous? She blinked her big eyes and looked at Huo Siyuan curiously. Just as she was still puzzled, she noticed that Huo Siyuan was trying to lift up her skirt. This startled her, and she immediately reached out and grabbed Huo Siyuan's large hand tightly, blushing all over as she asked, "Mr. Huo, what are you doing?" Her voice was full of shyness and unease. Huo Siyuan looked at the little face in front of him, which was already blushing with shame, and a trace of pity welled up in his heart. He gently grasped Xiaowan's small, weak hand, his eyes full of tenderness, and said softly, "Wan, I just want to check your body to see if you've been hurt by that glass of juice." His tone revealed his deep concern for her. Xiaowan snapped, "Stop it." Although Xiaowan was scolding him, the soft, sweet sound had no deterrent effect at all in Huo Siyuan's eyes, but the more he listened, the more it tickled his heart. After hearing Huo Siyuan's words, Xiaowan felt very warm in her heart, but she couldn't help but laugh and cry at the same time. "Mr. Huo, I'm fine, that glass of juice is not hot." Huo Siyuan stood up abruptly, his movements swift and powerful, as if carrying an unquestionable momentum. He extended his arms and tightly embraced the petite Xiaowan in his arms. Immediately afterwards, his right hand, without hesitation, landed on Xiaowan's round and cute little bottom, giving it a gentle pat. Xiaowan felt a hot rush to her cheeks, and she was completely embarrassed. She glared at Huo Siyuan, her eyes full of confusion and embarrassment, and stuttered, "Mr. Huo, what are you doing?" Huo Siyuan's mouth curled up slightly, outlining a smile full of evil and charm. His eyes were deep and burning, as if they could penetrate Xiaowan's soul. He said softly, "This is a little punishment for you." Xiaowan's eyes widened in disbelief, and she asked, "Why are you punishing me?" Huo Siyuan raised an eyebrow and asked in a slightly teasing tone, "What did you just call me?" Xiaowan suddenly realized where the problem was. Her face turned even redder, like a ripe apple, and she timidly corrected herself, "Siyuan." Upon hearing this name, Huo Siyuan revealed a satisfied smile and nodded, saying, "Very good, remember not to call me by the wrong name in the future." After saying this, he slowly crouched down again, carefully picking Xiaowan up in his arms again, and then walked towards the downstairs with steady steps. Xiaowan's hands naturally wrapped around Huo Siyuan's thick neck, and she couldn't take her eyes off his handsome and charming face for a moment. She couldn't help but secretly sigh, this man in front of her was really handsome. Every line and contour is just right, exuding an irresistible charm. While admiring Huo Siyuan's handsome face, Xiaowan asked in a sweet, soft voice, "Where are we going?" Huo Siyuan's voice was as enchanting as a spell, and he replied softly, "Just taking a walk." "Is there somewhere in particular you want to go? Just tell me and I'll take you there." Xiaowan tilted her head in thought for a moment, but ultimately shook her head. With a voice as clear and pleasant as a yellow warbler's, she said, "I don't know either." Huo Siyuan's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a smile of affection and warmth. He whispered, "In that case, let me show you around." Without another word, he tightly embraced Xiaowan in his arms, as if she were the most precious treasure in the world, and then continued to slowly walk forward with firm and powerful strides. Xiaowan nodded obediently like a meek kitten, answering with a nod, "Mm." Her eyes shone with happiness and contentment. At that moment, Huo Siyuan's eyes were full of tender affection, and his tone was as gentle as the spring breeze. "My dear, you are so obedient and cute." Hearing this, Xiaowan couldn't help blushing, and her cheeks instantly flushed with a gorgeous red like the evening sun. She asked shyly, "Siyuan, why do you always like to hold me? I can walk by myself, can I come down?" After saying this, she looked up, her eyes sparkling as she gazed at the man in front of her who made her heart flutter. Huo Siyuan stopped in his tracks at the sound of her voice. His gaze never left Xiaowan, and the only thing in his eyes was her charming and moving figure. He replied with deep affection, "Because my wife is so obedient and sensible, I just want to be with you all the time, feel your warmth, and share every beautiful moment." Xiaowan gazed at Huo Siyuan in silence, not knowing how to respond for a moment. Her heart felt as if a stone had been thrown in, sending ripples outwards, and her heart was filled with endless sweetness and emotion. Chapter 18 The Obedient Second Master. Xiaowan was thus tightly embraced as she walked down the stairs. It was only the first day they had met and the third time they had seen each other, but the two of them were already acting so intimately together that she couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed. The rosy blush on her cheeks, like the gorgeous sunset, never faded. At that moment, Xiaowan gazed closely at Huo Siyuan beside her and suddenly noticed an eyelash floating quietly at the corner of his eye. She was afraid that the tiny eyelash would accidentally fall into his deep eyes, so she said softly, "Siyuan, don't move for a moment." As soon as Huo Siyuan heard the sweet voice of his beloved wife, he dared not disobey her in the slightest, and immediately stopped in his tracks, looking forward with joy to being able to be toyed with recklessly every night. Seeing that Huo Siyuan had obediently stopped, Xiaowan quickly placed her hands lightly on either side of his strong face, one hand carefully feeling around his eyes. Although Huo Siyuan did not know what Xiaowan intended to do, he still stood meekly in place. Before long, Xiaowan's face blossomed into a radiant smile, and her two slender, delicate fingers were holding a tiny piece of fluff. "Siyuan, look, this is an eyelash that fell off you." And Huo Siyuan gazed at the woman smiling at him with a beaming face, with eyes full of deep affection. Time stood still. The servants nearby couldn't help but stop what they were doing and watch this rare sight. Maid 1, look, the second master really loves the young mistress. Maid 2, yes, you can't lie about that look in his eyes. Maid 3, today I really feel like I'm dreaming. I've worked here for so long and I've never seen the second master look like this. Maid 1, yes. Look. When have you ever seen the second master so attached to someone? Maid 2, the young mistress is really very happy. Maid 3, hey, you guys, the young mistress is so obedient, can she stand the second young master's strong possessiveness? Maids. Huo Siyuan gazed at Xiaowan, who was so attentively caring for her eyelashes, and a gentle smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said softly, "Thank you, baby." Xiaowan looked up at the eyelash curler in her hand, smiled smartly at him, and said playfully, "Siyuan, I suddenly realized that your eyelashes are really long. They seem to be even longer than mine." Huo Siyuan keenly sensed a hint of displeasure in Xiaowan's mood, and was extremely anxious. He really didn't want to see his beloved wife continue to be sad. He quickly and softly reassured her, "If you don't like them, I'll have them cut off. Of course, if you want to do it yourself, that's fine too." Upon hearing this, Xiaowan was stunned, her face full of shock. She muttered to herself, "Does this person even understand what he's talking about? He even mentioned cutting off the eyelashes." Seeing that Xiaowan didn't respond, Huo Siyuan immediately turned to a maid who was also in a daze beside him and said, "Go get an eyelash trimming tool for me." The maid immediately respectfully responded, "Got it." Then she quickly turned and left to get the required tool. Just then, Xiaowan finally came back to her senses and hurriedly shouted out, "Wait a minute." Xiaowan suddenly turned her head and looked at Huo Siyuan with a sharp gaze, pouting, "Siyuan, what are you talking about? No one would cut off their own eyelashes." Look at how long and beautiful these eyelashes are, you have to keep them. As she spoke, she gently ran her hand over her eyelashes, as if showing him this rare beauty. Huo Siyuan, on the other hand, stared straight at Xiaowan, who was speaking fiercely, and a ripple of emotion could not help but arise in his heart. He had never thought that even when angry, Xiaowan was so well behaved and cute that he could not help but want to dote on her. The maid standing nearby was standing straight, with large beads of sweat on her forehead that kept sliding down her cheeks, looking very nervous and uneasy. She was inwardly crying out in anguish, completely at a loss. Should she obey the second master's order and fetch the item, or should she obey the young mistress's wishes and not fetch it? In the past, there would have been no doubt that she should obey the second master, but now that the second master was so fond of the young mistress, she dared not disobey the young mistress either. Just as she was at a loss as to what to do, time seemed to have come to a standstill. However, as if time had frozen at that moment, it was only a blink of an eye before Huo Siyuan once again revealed that gentle tenderness like the spring breeze. With a voice so soft that it seemed afraid of disturbing anything, he said, "I'll listen to you." Hearing these words full of obedience and love, Xiaowan's face blossomed with a contented and happy smile. She nodded gently and let out a melodious sound like a yellow warbler singing in the valley. Then, with tender eyes, Huo Siyuan gazed at the person in his arms and asked softly, "May I hug you now?" There was a trace of caution in his tone that was hard to detect. Xiaowan maintained that sweet posture and responded without hesitation, After receiving permission, Huo Siyuan's movements became even more gentle. He carefully held Xiaowan in his arms as if she were the most precious treasure in the world, and then walked steadily and slowly, step by step, towards the downstairs. At the same time, he did not forget to shout to Sean, the butler, not far away, "Get the car ready." At the moment, Xiaowan, who was tightly embraced in Huo Siyuan's arms, was full of endless curiosity. She blinked her big, intelligent eyes and asked coquettishly, "Where are we going?" Upon hearing this, Huo Siyuan's mouth unconsciously rose up, outlining a smile full of affection, and he replied softly, "Wan, I'll take you to the mall, okay? How about I take you to look at some clothes or accessories?" Xiaowan gave it some thought and then nodded in agreement. "That's good." Seeing that Xiaowan had agreed, Huo Siyuan's mood grew even more pleasant, and he said with a smile, "Let's go then." At that moment, Huo Siyuan had never felt so truly how wonderful it was to be able to stroll through the bustling streets and alleys with the person you love, and to choose things together that you like. Looking at the little wife he cherished, an unprecedented feeling of anticipation welled up in his heart. He then embraced Xiaowan tightly and slowly got into a luxurious Bentley. Once inside, he didn't have any intention of putting Xiaowan in the passenger seat. Instead, he kept holding her, but the position changed from a hug to a gentle princess carry. Xiaowan curled up obediently in Huo Siyuan's broad, warm embrace, her voice as soft as a mosquito's buzz. "Can I get up and sit next to you?" However, the response was a cold and unyielding no. The decisive tone made it clear that there was no room for negotiation. Then Huo Siyuan turned to the driver in the passenger seat, who was concentrating on driving, and commanded in a deep voice, "Go to the Dihui Mall." The driver respectfully replied, "Yes, second master." When it came to the Dihui Mall, Xiaowan had heard a lot about it. It was the grandest and most prestigious luxury shopping mall in the capital. Many famous families and wealthy people loved it, especially when there were grand banquets. The noble ladies would go there to shop. In the past, Xiaowan had heard the mother and daughter mention this place many times. Whenever they had money to spare, they would not hesitate to go to the mall and splurge. But for Xiaowan, although she lived in the Xiao family, her clothing, food, housing, and transportation were just barely adequate, and there was no extra money for her to spend as she wished. Besides, she herself did not have a strong desire for such material pleasures. Chapter 19 Kissing in the Car. In the car. Huo Siyuan embraced Xiaowan tightly, as if he wanted to rub her into his body. However, this was not enough. His long, strong hands began to gently stroke Xiaowan's silky, soft hair, feeling the delicate touch. After playing with the hair for a while, he seemed still not satisfied, and shifted his target to Xiaowan's small and delicate hands. He carefully held Xiaowan's small hands and looked at them carefully, as if admiring a rare treasure. Sometimes he played with her slender fingers, and sometimes he gently stroked her palm with his fingertips, never taking his eyes off her hands. Xiaowan was a little embarrassed by his intense gaze and couldn't help but ask softly, "What are you looking at, Huo Siyuan?" There was an imperceptible hint of coquettishness in her voice. Huo Siyuan heard Xiaowan's question and slowly looked up, looking at the woman in front of him, who was blushing. He raised the corner of his mouth slightly, revealing a smile of affection. "I'm looking at my wife's little hands. My wife's little hands are really small and soft, and I can't let go of them." Hearing his words, Xiaowan couldn't help but feel a wave of sweetness in her heart. She broke free of Huo Siyuan's embrace, sat up straight next to him, and then looked down at the two of them, their hands clasped together. In comparison, she suddenly realized that Huo Siyuan's hands were actually so big. Yes. Your hands are really big. Xiaowan exclaimed, and subconsciously tightened her grip on Huo Siyuan's hand. Huo Siyuan felt Xiaowan's movement, and a trace of tenderness flashed in his eyes. He whispered in response, Then, he opened his palm as Xiaowan had requested. When the palms of the two came into contact, the difference became even more obvious. Huo Siyuan's palm was more than half an inch larger than Xiaowan's. Xiaowan looked at this scene in amazement and muttered, Siyuan, your hands are so big. Huo Siyuan nodded and said firmly, my wife is so petite and lovely, so I must protect her well and never let anyone have the chance to hurt you. After saying this, he once again embraced Xiaowan in his arms and held her tightly. Xiaowan couldn't help but freeze, because this was the first time in her life that someone had said they wanted to protect her. A warm current instantly welled up in her heart, and she let the whole of her body soak in this warmth. Thank you, Siyuan, why are you being so good to me? We've only met a few times, haven't we? Xiaowan asked softly, her gaze fixed on Huo Siyuan as she tried to find the answer. My dear, do you believe in love at first sight? Huo Siyuan looked deeply into Xiaowan's eyes and said earnestly. Love at first sight. Xiaowan repeated softly. Huo Siyuan gazed at Xiaowan with eyes that were sincere and resolute. Wan, ever since that night, my heart has been taken by you. I have recognized you, both in body and in spirit. This feeling is stronger than ever before for me, and you are the wife destined for me, Huo Siyuan. This will never change in this life or the next. So don't even think about running away from me. Xiaowan listened intently to every word Huo Siyuan said, and was deeply moved beyond words. For a long time, she had felt like an unnecessary person, as if she were an extra in this world. No one had ever really cared about her, or paid attention to her thoughts and needs, let alone try to understand what she liked and longed for. At this moment, Huo Siyuan quietly watched Xiaowan, who was looking at him. Suddenly, he noticed that her eyes were gradually reddening, and tears were quietly rolling down the corners of her eyes. His heart suddenly ached, and he reached out tenderly to gently wipe away the tears. Night, why are you suddenly crying? It hurts me to see you like this. Xiaowan sniffed and muttered, Siyuan, it's nothing. I just remembered something from the past. A fierce look flashed in Huo Siyuan's eyes. It seemed that he wanted to investigate Night's past life. Seeing her so sad, he must have been bullied a lot in the past. He gently reassured her, it's okay, Wan, don't think about it anymore. Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan with shiny eyes from crying. Siyuan, you didn't marry me just because there might be a baby in my belly, did you? If there's no baby in my belly, we should get a divorce, shouldn't we? Huo Siyuan listened to Xiaowan's words and realized that she had always thought this way about him. He really wanted to smack her on the head. Who told you that I think this way? Xiaowan, isn't that what you think? This is what Grandma said. Grandma said that I might be pregnant and have to marry you. Grandma Hua, I have to set the record straight, I did say that, but it definitely wasn't what Wan said it meant. Huo Siyuan said seriously, I, Huo Siyuan, will not marry just for a child. I like you now, and it has nothing to do with the child. Besides, we are both young, and we will have children. Let's start from today, and work hard together. Even if we don't have a child now, we will have one in the future. The driver in front heard this and knew he shouldn't listen anymore. He immediately pressed a button, and then the back baffle slowly rose, blocking out the sound behind him. After all, it's best not to listen to the intimate words between the second master and the young mistress. Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan, who looked so serious, and knew that these were sincere words. So she smiled happily, really? Do you really like me? Looking at his wife, who was smiling innocently, Huo Siyuan really liked her more and more. He directly embraced her in his arms. Really, I like you a lot. How about you? Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan and was very happy. Who wouldn't like to be around such a handsome and gentle person? Xiaowan hugged Huo Siyuan back, holding him firmly around the neck. Siyuan, I like you a lot too. Huo Siyuan gazed at Xiaowan, who had come flying at him like a little bird and was now hugging him tightly. His already deep, ocean-like eyes were even deeper now, as if they could swallow someone whole. After a long moment, his deep, magnetic voice slowly began to speak. Wan, can I kiss you? The moment she heard these words, Xiaowan froze. What kind of question was this? It was really embarrassing to have to ask yourself something like this. But then she thought, she and the man in front of her had already become husband and wife, and there seemed to be nothing wrong with intimate contact. Yes, that's right. After a long silence, time seemed to have come to a standstill. Finally, Siyuan nodded, her movement as light as a falling feather. Seeing this, Huo Siyuan did not hesitate to lean down, impatient to taste the sweetness that had been on his mind for so long. For Siyuan, who was experiencing her first taste of kissing, she had no idea how to breathe, and soon her cheeks flushed with lack of oxygen. Seeing this, Huo Siyuan reached out and gently stroked the top of Siyuan's head, whispering, "Silly girl, breathe in." After being reminded, Siyuan woke up from her dream and quickly opened her mouth to inhale and exhale heavily. But before she could catch her breath, Huo Siyuan came up to her again, and so on and so forth, in an endless cycle. During this long and lingering journey, the two were always immersed in endless love. In the end, Siyuan's lips were swollen from all the frequent kissing. Chapter 20 Buying a Ring 1. Dihue Mall. Siyuan's gaze was drawn to the extremely luxurious and grand mall in front of her, and she couldn't help but let out an exclamation, "Wow, it's really big." Huo Siyuan, who was standing next to her, held Siyuan's slender hand tightly and carefully got out of the car. He asked in a gentle voice, "Knight, have you never been here before?" Siyuan looked up at Huo Siyuan next to her, then quickly looked down again, and said in a soft voice like a mosquito, "No, everything in here is too expensive, I don't have the money to buy it, and there's nothing in particular that I need to buy, so I've never been here before." Perhaps she had just said too much. Siyuan subconsciously reached out her other hand and gently touched her lips, then couldn't help but gasp. Hearing these words, Huo Siyuan's heart couldn't help but ache with pain. He secretly made up his mind that he must be doubly good to her in the future. His wife was so meek, obedient, kind, and beautiful, and yet someone could still have the heart to bully her. The Xia family members were simply unforgivable. Huo Siyuan slowly reached out his hand and gently caressed Siyuan's slightly swollen lips. Looking at that face that made one's heart ache with love, he felt full of self-blame and remorse. It seems that next time I need to control my strength better. He cooed softly, "Does it still hurt? Let me blow on it for you." Siyuan slowly raised her head, her gaze falling on the gentle-looking Huo Siyuan in front of her. For some reason, she suddenly felt a little shy and embarrassed. "What do you mean, blow on it? How?" As she spoke, a slight blush rose to her cheeks. As he gazed at Siyuan, who was so easily embarrassed, Huo Siyuan couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth into a smile of affection. He bent down gently and gazed at Siyuan in an incredibly tender manner, as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. "Blow like this." Saying this, he extended a hand and gently stroked Siyuan's small cherry-like lips, then opened his mouth slightly and gently blew air at her, touching and blowing at the same time. Siyuan was a little overwhelmed by this sudden move and became confused. She subconsciously extended her slender little hands and effortlessly took Huo Siyuan's big hands away from her lips. "You." At this moment, her heart was like a tangled mess, completely unable to make sense of it, and she couldn't even express what she wanted to say clearly. Huo Siyuan noticed Siyuan's big, dark eyes staring round, looking very cute and interesting. He couldn't help but affectionately lightly scratch Siyuan's small nose with his finger and said softly, "All right, I won't tease you anymore, let's go." Upon hearing this, Siyuan's heart was still in a mess, but she didn't know how to respond, so she could only silently nod and obediently follow Huo Siyuan out of the car. After entering the mall, Siyuan looked up at Huo Siyuan, who was tall with long legs, and hurriedly quickened her pace, barely able to keep up with his. Huo Siyuan keenly sensed Siyuan, who was running to keep up with him, and a feeling of guilt welled up in his heart. He quickly slowed down his pace and said softly, "Wan, I'm sorry. I'm used to walking alone and didn't consider your situation." Siyuan hurriedly shook her head vigorously and a bright, warm smile blossomed on her face. "It's okay. Siyuan, where are we going next?" Curiosity and anticipation shone in her bright, big eyes. Upon hearing this, Huo Siyuan slowly stopped in his tracks, gently lifted the large, soft hand that was tightly clasped in Siyuan's, and at the same time pointed to Siyuan's slender, long ring finger with his other hand. In a firm but gentle tone, he said, "Since we have become husband and wife, we must have our own wedding rings." After hearing this, Siyuan suddenly understood Huo Siyuan's intentions. He had deliberately brought her here to buy wedding rings. A sweet smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and she nodded obediently in response, "Mm." Then, holding Siyuan's small and delicate hands tightly, Huo Siyuan entered a luxurious diamond specialty store with her. When Siyuan stepped into the store, she was almost blinded by the dazzling radiance of the diamonds before her. The staff in the store, seeing a man and a woman dressed in gorgeous clothes and with outstanding temperament, who seemed to be a perfect match, enter the store, immediately enthusiastically approached and asked, "Dear sir and beautiful lady, may I ask what you would like to buy?" However, at this time, Huo Siyuan's gaze never left Xiaowan by his side, and he didn't even look at the female clerk directly. He simply replied in an indifferent but unmistakable tone, "We want to buy wedding rings." The saleswoman, with an enthusiastic smile on her face, led them briskly to the ring display area and politely introduced them. "Please take a look. On this side are the ring styles set with sparkling diamonds, and on the other side are the gold rings shining with golden light. Please take your time and choose." However, Huo Siyuan seemed to have completely ignored the saleswoman's words. He held Xiaowan's hand tightly and walked towards the dazzling display of rings together. His gaze never left Xiaowan's face as he spoke softly and tenderly, "Wan, come and have a look. Is there a style you like here?" Xiaowan's eyes were drawn to the dazzling array of diamond rings before her, and an indescribable feeling of joy welled up in her heart. These diamond rings were as dazzling as the stars twinkling in the night sky, and they were irresistible. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and like an innocent child, she asked with joy, "Siyuan, can I really choose whatever I want?" For a long time, Xiaowan has had a keen interest and love for the field of design. Therefore, when she saw such exquisite and unique rings, the love in her heart naturally grew. At this moment, the voice of Huo Siyuan rang out again, but this time it was more indifferent and determined. "I want those unique and one-of-a-kind rings, and I don't care about the price. You immediately bring out the rarest wedding rings in the store and let my wife pick them, understand?" Wife. It turned out to be a husband and wife. Really, the man is handsome and the woman is beautiful, really a good match. His tone of voice sounded calm and flat, but it contained an irresistible and unquestionable air of majesty. The female clerk thought to herself, this handsome man in front of her must come from a wealthy family. From the tenderness he showed towards the beautiful woman next to him, she thought he must be a gentle person. However, when the female clerk heard him say the two short but powerful words, "Got it?" it was like she had been hit by a thunderbolt. She was instantly shocked by the sudden powerful aura and her heart pounded. The female clerk could not help but tremble, and quickly responded, "Yes, I understand." As soon as the words fell, the phone in Huo Siyuan's pocket suddenly rang. Hearing the sound, Xiaowan saw Huo Siyuan about to hang up the call, and hurriedly stopped him, saying in a sweet voice, "Don't hang up. You go answer it. I'll just wait here for you to come back." After gazing at Xiaowan for a moment, Huo Siyuan replied softly, "Okay then, Wan, I'm going to go out and answer the phone, I'll be right back." I know," Xiaowan nodded, understanding. Then, with a heart full of love and reluctance, Huo Siyuan slowly walked out of the room to answer the phone. Chapter 21 Buying a Ring 2. Xiaowan stood in front of the jewelry counter, her gaze captivated by the dazzling array of rings before her. She carefully examined each one, especially the ones that were later brought over, and she couldn't help but exclaim, "These rings are really beautiful." Xiaowan's eyes rested on a delicate ring made of sapphires, and she gently tapped her finger against it, saying to the saleswoman beside her, "Please show me this one." The saleswoman smiled and nodded, put on gloves, and then carefully and gently took out the sapphire ring, enthusiastically introducing it to Xiaowan. "Miss, you really have a discerning eye. This ring is from the famous designer Ada, and it's his latest work." Xiaowan took the ring, held it in her hands, and admired it carefully. The gemstones gave off a deep and charming radiance, and the design of the ring setting was unique. The overall shape was elegant and generous, and it was hard to put down. She nodded with satisfaction, indicating that she really felt good about it. Just then, Xiaowan inadvertently glanced at a ring placed at the very back. That ring looked a bit familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere. She frowned slightly and said to the saleswoman in a flat tone, "Could you please get me the ring in the back again?" Upon hearing this, the saleswoman immediately carefully took out the ring from the inside and, with a smile and full of enthusiasm, handed it to Xiaowan, saying, "Miss, I have to say that your eye is really good. This is the store's treasure. It was personally designed and crafted by the extremely mysterious designer XW, and there are only 3 of them in all of China. And this one is the only one of its kind in the entire capital." Xiaowan took the ring and smiled. Just as she was about to say something, 2 people walked in from the door. "Lianqing, let's go in and see, what beautiful jewelry is there." In the bustling street, a plain-looking Qianxinshi, wearing a dark blue vest, was walking side by side with Xia Lianqing, who was wearing a gorgeous halter neck dress and had a proud expression on her face. They laughed and chatted all the way, walking towards the jewelry store not far away. Xia Lianqing excitedly said, let's go take a look." Before they even reached the shop, Xiao Lianqing's shrill voice reached everyone's ears. Xiaowan, who was carefully selecting a ring by the roadside, knew immediately who was coming without even looking up when she heard this familiar voice. However, she did not turn her attention to the two of them, but continued to attentively select her own beloved ring. Chen Xinqi beamed and praised Xiao Lianqing, saying, "Lianqing, look at this necklace, it's a perfect match for the dress you just bought." Xiao Lianqing, who was wearing 10-centimeter high heels, twisted her slightly stout waist and slowly walked up to Chen Xinqi, speaking in an overbearing manner. "Well, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. If it's that good, then buy it." Her words were full of superiority. Then she added, "I really envy you. I can't believe that Zhu Juanli, the school hunk, has now fallen at your feet. He even gave you the credit card you used to buy the clothes." Xiao Lianqing couldn't help but feel a surge of joy in her heart when she heard what Chen Xinqi said. Her mouth curved up, revealing a smug smile. "Well, it's not bad." Chen Xinqi said with envy, "He is the school's most popular guy. Not only is he extraordinarily good-looking, but he also comes from a wealthy family and is very gentle and considerate. Do you know that the school's forums are full of discussions about the two of you? Everyone is so envious of you that they speculate about whether you will become engaged to him after graduation and enter a wealthy family. Zhu Juanli comes from a wealthy family, but his family is only a little famous in the capital. Even so, it is not Xiao Lianqing's ultimate goal. However, being able to fall in love with him makes Xiao Lianqing content. After all, it can satisfy her vanity to some extent." Xiao Lianqing seemed reluctant to talk about Zhu Juanli anymore, and quickly changed the subject. "Okay, enough about him, let's keep shopping and see what else is worth buying." Just then, Chen Xinqi looked up and looked into the store, and her gaze happened to fall on Xiaowan's upper body, and she let out a light laugh. "Lianqing, you said before that your so-called sister-in-name only lives in straitened circumstances and doesn't have a lot of money, right?" When Xiao Lianqing heard the name Xiaowan, the joy that had originally been on her face instantly dissipated, and her face sank slightly. "Yes. Why did you bring her up for no reason?" "Chen Xinqi, because I saw your so-called younger sister over there picking out a diamond ring." "What?" Although she said this, her body immediately turned around. Sure enough, she saw Xiaowan. She immediately walked towards Xiaowan, and Chen Xinqi, who was next to her, followed along. The salesperson who introduced the ring to Xiaowan knew something was about to happen when she saw the two women across from her, walking towards her with stern faces. Xiao Lianqing stared fixedly at Xiaowan's exquisite profile, and the anger in his heart grew more and more intense. The woman in front of him was so beautiful and moving, which made Xiao Lianqing, who was already jealous, even more angry, and he wanted to raise his hand and slap her hard. Upon closer inspection, Xiaowan was wearing the very same dress that he had admired the other day but could not afford to buy because he was short of money. That dress cost more than 200,000 yuan. Chen Xinqi, who had also noticed this, couldn't help but say, "Lianqing, look at the dress she's wearing, isn't it the one we looked at together a while ago? I remember it was expensive." Xiao Lianqing's face was so gloomy that it looked like water could drip from it. She snapped back, "I'm not blind, I can see, do I need you to remind me?" Chen Xinqi looked at Xiao Lianqing, who was full of anger, and her mouth slightly curled up, revealing a meaningful smile. She said, "Tell me, where did she get so much money to buy this dress? You have to know that this dress cannot be bought just by having money, you also need connections and a background." After hearing this, Xiao Lianqing could not help but fall into deep thought. After a moment, she suddenly raised her voice and yelled at Xiaowan, "Xiaowan! How did you end up here? I said I hadn't seen you all day, but you were sneaking off to fool around. Look closely. Can you afford an expensive ring like this? And that thing you're holding in your hand, I'm afraid you'll never be able to own it in your lifetime." Xiaowan was looking at the ring and feeling quite good, but when she heard this harsh voice, she turned her head to look at the other people and didn't say anything. Chapter 22 Buying a Ring 3. Xiao Lianqing stared at Xiaowan in disbelief, unable to hold back her anger. How dare she ignore her? Xiao Lianqing walked up to Xiaowan and fixed her gaze on the ring in her hand, exclaiming, "This ring is really nice." However, before she could finish speaking, she suddenly reached out a hand and snatched the ring from Xiaowan's hand with lightning speed. The female clerk standing nearby was stunned by the scene. Seeing the arrogant customer so rudely snatch the store's treasure, her heart instantly rose to her throat. The female clerk hurriedly stepped forward, full of anxiety, and issued a kind warning to Xiao Lianqing, "Miss, please be careful, this ring is very expensive." Unexpectedly, after hearing this, Xiao Lianqing not only did not restrain her actions, but became even more irritated. She straightened up and raised her voice, saying, "What? Did you just start working here? Don't you even know me? Let me tell you, I am the Honorable Miss Xia. You should know that as employees of this luxury store, they all received rigorous pre-employment training before joining the company. Not only do they need to be familiar with the facial features of the rich and powerful from all walks of life in Kyoto, but they also need to have a certain level of understanding of their backgrounds and other information. People of Xia Lianqing's prominent status are even more the focus of their attention. However, all of this is predicated on the premise that relevant information is available for review. In fact, Huo Siyuan has always acted low-key, to the extent that no photos of the second master have ever circulated on the market. Because of this, the female staff member just now was unable to recognize Huo Siyuan immediately when she saw him. At this time, Chen Xinxi, who was standing next to Xia Lianqing, witnessed the scene unfolding before her. To the female staff member, who had no discernment, she spoke impolitely and arrogantly, saying, "Open your eyes and take a good look. This is the Honorable Xia Group's eldest daughter, and her annual spending here alone far exceeds 10 million yuan." Upon hearing this, the female clerk naturally understood which Xia family she was referring to. Nevertheless, she still maintained her proper etiquette and tactfully advised, "So you are Miss Xia. But if I may be so bold, I would like to remind you that the ring you are wearing is very valuable." Seeing the shop assistant's insolent and arrogant appearance, Xia Lianqing was so angry that she turned pale with rage and shouted at her angrily, "What are you talking nonsense about? You are just a lowly and despicable little employee, so you'd better watch your attitude." Xia Lianqing was so angry that her face turned red. She stared with wide eyes, looking around like an angry lion, and yelled at the top of her voice, "Where is the manager? Hurry up and get your manager to come here. I'll make him fire you." The noise quickly attracted the manager's attention. A plump man with a big belly came slowly towards them, walking with heavy steps. He was wearing a black suit, but the tight clothes seemed like they would burst open at any moment. As he walked, he asked loudly, "What's going on?" When he got closer and saw the person in front of him, the serious face immediately filled with a flattering smile, and then quickly lowered his head. He bent over and trotted all the way to Xia Lianqing, nodding and bowing, saying, "Oops. It turns out to be you, Miss Xia. What a rare guest. I wonder which treasure in our store you like today. Just recently, a new batch of high-quality goods has arrived." Xia Lianqing glanced sideways at the manager, who was bowing low on approaching her, and her arrogance instantly grew a few notches. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, raised her chin slightly, and said in a domineering manner, "Humph, Manager Lu, you've finally come. Look at how these people under you do things. They have no discernment at all. They actually left such an important customer like me hanging, and instead went to entertain that pauper." The portly manager Lu looked up at Xia Wan and was astounded by her beauty at first glance. Then he looked at the dress she was wearing, a well-known brand, and his mind raced as he searched for the answer. He wondered if there was a rich young lady in the capital who looked like her. After 800 iterations of back and forth thinking, he finally confirmed that there was no such person. With full contempt, the man blurted out, "Hey, I'm telling you, young lady, any of the accessories in our store are worth a lot of money, even the cheapest ones, so you won't be able to take them home without spending 100,000 yuan. Xia Wan calmly gazed at the opportunistic and fawning manager Lu in front of her, her mouth slightly raised, and she responded softly, "Oh? Does it mean that the items in the store have become so precious that they can't even be looked at?" Seeing that Xia Wan didn't take his warning seriously, manager Lu felt even more emboldened. He straightened his back and retorted with justification, "It's not that touching is forbidden, it's just that. Hey, I'm afraid that if you're not careful, you'll damage the treasures in our store, and then you won't have the financial resources to compensate." At this moment, Xia Lianqing, who was standing by the side, witnessed Xia Wan being mocked by everyone and felt a great sense of satisfaction. With a smug smile on her face, she interjected, "You bet. Xia Wan, with your abilities, can you afford this ring? Who are you to buy it?" As soon as she finished speaking, she turned to Manager Lu and signaled to him, "Manager Lu, please quickly wrap this ring up for me." Then, she quickly took out a credit card from her handbag and handed it to Manager Lu without hesitation. Seeing this, Manager Lu immediately beamed, bowed forward to take the credit card, and nodded repeatedly in agreement, saying, yes, no problem, I'll go and pack it carefully for you." HM. Xia Wan slowly stood up, a helpless and slightly mocking smile on her face, and snorted, "Ha." The sound of the laugh seemed to contain endless sarcasm and disdain. Seeing this, Manager Lu immediately shouted, "Hey, you over there, whoever you are, go quickly and call XW to ask about the situation." His voice was urgent and carried a hint of authority. Xia Lianqing, who was listening on the side, was confused and asked with a puzzled expression, "Manager Lu, what phone call are you going to make?" Obviously, she was very confused about what was happening. Manager Lu, on the other hand, appeared quite patient and gently explained, "Miss Xia, this is a task personally assigned by XW. As for the specific reason, I'm not really sure either." After saying this, he helplessly spread out his hands to show that he was also following orders. However, Xia Lianqing was still full of confidence and showed no sign of fear. After all, she had never been afraid of anyone or anything before. What she never expected was that this person XW was really as eccentric as the rumors suggested. Just then, Xia Lianqing glanced over at Xiaowan next to her, who was playing with her phone as if no one was around. Back when Xiaowan was still in the Xia family, she would do whatever Xia Lianqing told her to do, and would be respectful and obedient. If Xia Lianqing told her to go east, she would never dare to go west. If she told her to sit down, she would never dare to stand up. But now, after just one day of not seeing each other, Xiaowan seemed like a different person, completely ignoring herself. This sudden change made Xia Lianqing feel an unusual feeling in her heart. After a while, I saw Manager Lu bend slightly and walk in small steps towards Xia Lianqing. Xia Lianqing noticed Manager Lu's approach in the corner of her eye and couldn't wait to extend her right hand and prepare to receive the long-awaited ring. However, to her surprise, although her arm had been raised high and had been frozen in the air for a long time, she did not get the treasure she had longed for. Turning her head, she saw Manager Lu bent over, holding only her card in her hand, and there was no gift bag in sight. Xia Lianqing was aghast. Xiaowan gave a crooked smile. Chapter 23 Buying the ring for. Xiaowan sat quietly on one side, her head always bowed, her gaze fixed on the screen of the phone in her hands, which she kept fiddling with, as if everything around her was completely irrelevant, and she hadn't even glanced in the direction of Xia Lianqing. Meanwhile, Xia Lianqing was shocked. A faint, hard-to-hide anger was flickering in her eyes, which had previously been as calm as water. She frowned slightly, staring intently at Manager Lu in front of her. Her voice was slightly low and full of questioning as she said, "Manager Lu, where is my stuff?" Facing Xia Lianqing's sudden interrogation, Manager Lu looked a little frightened and uneasy. His slightly stooped figure couldn't help but bend a little more, and big beads of sweat fell from his forehead like rain. Perhaps because of his obesity, the sweat that ran down his cheeks looked like a thin stream merging into a river. He responded in a trembling, submissive voice, "Miss Xia, I'm really sorry. I just called XW to inquire about the situation, and the other party said that you are not eligible for this purchase. As for their specific review process and standards, I really have no way of knowing. That's why this situation has arisen." Shen Xinqi, who had been standing by and witnessed the whole thing, saw Xia Lianqing's face grow more and more gloomy and terrible, so she quickly walked up to him and cooed, "Lianqing, don't be angry, there's nothing we can do about this. Take a closer look, I don't think this ring is actually as good looking as you think. Why don't we go and pick out some other items?" Xia Lianqing had been full of joy and wanted to buy the ring, but she was rejected, which made her feel extremely embarrassed and humiliated. Fortunately, Shen Xinqi took the initiative to offer her a way out. She naturally did not hesitate to take it, and with a forced smile on her face, she said, "Yes, when I think about it, I don't really like this ring either. It doesn't have anything particularly attractive about it, and I don't want to buy it at all." Seeing this, Manager Lu hurriedly nodded repeatedly in agreement, smiling flattery, "Yes, Miss Xia really has a discerning eye. Look at these over here, they are all the latest models that just arrived today, each with a unique design style." Xia Lianqing noticed the change in attitude of the people around her, and the flame of confidence in her heart could not help but ignite again. A slight upward curl of the corners of her mouth revealed a smug smile, and she responded firmly, "Bring them over, let me admire them." As soon as she finished speaking, several female staff members and Manager Lu quickly gathered around Xia Lianqing and began introducing to her the most fashionable jewelry of the moment. "Miss Xia, take a look at this bracelet, it's practically tailor-made for you. It perfectly complements your elegant and distinguished temperament, especially when paired with your carefully manicured nails, it's a perfect match." One of the female staff members enthusiastically recommended. Another female staff member was not to be outdone, quickly picked up a dazzling necklace and brought it up to Xia Lianqing's face, saying, "Miss Xia, what do you think of this necklace? It really suits you. Not only does it make you look extraordinary, it also goes with everything. Whether you're attending a grand banquet or wearing it every day, it will be the center of attention. Miss Xia, take a look at this anklet made of blue jewels. It is dazzling and crystal clear, like the brightest star in the night sky, shining with an enchanting radiance. And look at your slender 42-inch long legs. If you wear this anklet, it will be the icing on the cake, it will be absolutely beautiful. The saleswoman said with a flattering smile, her eyes sparkling with eager enthusiasm. Hearing the saleswoman's praise, Xiao Lianqing felt exceptionally happy. She lifted her chin slightly, with a smug smile on the corner of her mouth, like a proud and noble peacock, showing off her charm and style to the fullest. Very well, I like all these things, wrap them all up for me. Xiao Lianqing waved his hand vigorously, his tone revealing an unmistakable domineering air. Hearing this, the female sales assistants immediately cheered and jumped for joy, their hearts secretly glad that they had met such a generous and wealthy customer. They would finally have their bonuses this month and be able to buy the clothes and cosmetics they had longed for so long. However, the female sales assistant who had initially greeted Xiao Lianqing remained quietly standing next to Xiao Wan, continuing to introduce various exquisite accessories to her. Miss, why don't you take a look at this ring? Although it may not be as good as the one you liked before, it is still our store's treasure. This ring is made of a rare pink ruby and is shaped like a dancing butterfly, which is very lively and elegant. I believe it will look even more dazzling on your hand. The saleswoman said softly, and handed the ring to Xiao Wan. Xiao Wan glanced at the pink ruby butterfly ring in the saleswoman's hand, then reached out to take it. She looked at the ring carefully, and saw that the pink ruby was bright and vivid, exuding a seductive luster. The butterfly wings were inlaid with small diamonds, sparkling and dazzling, and she couldn't help but love it. It is indeed very beautiful. But how much does this ring cost? Xiao Wan put down the ring and looked up at the saleswoman, her eyes full of curiosity. Miss, this ring is 1.08 million. Not far away, Xiao Lianqing let out a gasp of surprise at the expensive price of 1.08 million. She thought to herself, this is outrageous. It's practically a sky-high price. She stared at Xiao Wan with wide eyes in disbelief, then let out a loud mocking laugh and said, Yo, Xiao Wan, if you don't have the means, don't pretend you do. Don't think you're so capable. You know, that's a whole 1.08 million, not just 108 yuan. Be careful, if you can't come up with that kind of money later, it won't help if you cry your eyes out. Ha ha. After saying this, she took out the bank card from her bag triumphantly, handed it to Manager Lu, and ordered haughtily, hurry up and charge it to my card and pack up everything I just introduced. Okay, just a moment. Manager Lu promised and bent over to go through the relevant procedures. However, after a long while, Manager Lu returned to Xiao Lianqing with the bank card in his hand, looking a little embarrassed. He said carefully, Miss Xia, I'm sorry, but could you please check if you have another card to use? There seems to be something wrong with this one, it won't go through. Upon hearing this, Xiao Lianqing's face turned even uglier than a pig's liver, as if she had just swallowed a piece of stinking excrement. She yelled angrily, Are you kidding? Absolutely not. Did you brush it thoroughly? Is there something wrong with your POS machine, and you're blaming it on my card? Go try again. Facing Xiao Lianqing's questioning and accusations, Manager Lu shook his head helplessly and patiently explained, I've already tried to swipe the card 9 times in a row, but the result is always the same. How about this, Miss Xia, why don't you give the bank a call and ask them what the situation is? Hearing Manager Lu's suggestion, Xiao Lianqing did not hesitate. She quickly took out her mobile phone, dialed a number, and asked anxiously, Juanli, what's going on with this card you gave me? Zhu Juanli, on the other end of the line, said in a cold tone, Xiao Lianqing, don't you dare say that. Just a few hours ago, you used my card for over 6 million yuan. Do you really think I own a gold mine? So you just stopped the card without authorization. Do you know how embarrassing it was for me when I suddenly couldn't swipe my card while I was shopping? The female staff in the store all listened with their ears pricked, and they were also very clear that the meat they had in their mouths was about to be gone. Xiao Lianqing became angrier and angrier as she listened, and she hung up the phone directly with a dark face. Xiao Lianqing hung up the phone and left the jewelry store directly. Chen Xinqi had to shut up and follow. Manager Lu could do nothing but watch the bills slip away. Manager Lu couldn't help but smile as she walked towards Xiao Wan. Looking at this exceptionally beautiful but poor customer, she thought that she was probably the lover of some rich man and should have some purchasing power. She picked up the ring from XW and walked towards Xiao Wan, and then said with a smile, Miss, this ring, if you want it, I'll wrap it up for you. Xiao Wan didn't even look up at this wallflower, concentrating on the ring the saleswoman had just handed her. She replied indifferently, I don't want anything you've got. The wallflower saleswoman turned green with anger. Chapter 24 Buying a Ring 5. At that moment, Huo Siyuan, who had been answering a call outside, hurried back to the jewelry store after finishing the call. As soon as he stepped into the store, he heard a low but incredibly gentle voice, "Night-night, how's the selection going?" Xiaowan turned her head at the sound, her lips pursed and her eyes red, her appearance truly heartbreaking, as if silently saying, "Someone took advantage of me while you were gone." When Huo Siyuan saw Xiaowan, who was full of grievances in front of him, his heart suddenly tightened, as if he had been pricked by a needle, and the pain was unbearable. He always knew that his wife was petite and cute, with a gentle personality, and was easily bullied, but he never expected that she would suffer such grievances so soon. It seems that in the future, no matter when or where, he must always keep this adorable little wife by his side at all times, otherwise, who knows when she might be bullied again. Xiaowan, at this moment, never expected that she would lose her precious freedom just because she subconsciously pouted her lips, and almost become Huo Siyuan's exclusive pendant. Huo Siyuan quickly walked up to Xiaowan's side in the blink of an eye, and said softly and concernedly, "What's going on? Who dares to bully my baby? Tell your husband, and he will take revenge for you." As he spoke, he flashed into action, quickly sitting in the chair next to Xiaowan, and then stretching out his arm, pulling Xiaowan into his warm, broad embrace. Manager Lu, who was standing nearby, was a man with a sharp eye. When he first saw Huo Siyuan, he knew in his heart that this person was definitely no ordinary character. Just look at the suit he is wearing, with its exquisite tailoring and high-quality fabric. You can tell at a glance that it must be a custom-made piece from the hands of a master, and it must cost millions. Then look at the watch he is wearing on his wrist. The style is understated and simple, but it cannot hide its luxurious nature. There is no doubt that it is a priceless and valuable watch, worth at least tens of millions. Even the leather shoes he is wearing are custom-made from a well-known Italian brand. Not to mention these external accoutrements, just looking at the gentleman's eyes, you can tell that he is no ordinary person. Those eyes are as sharp as an eagle's, as if they can see everything. Such eyes are not something that just any rich person can have. Not to mention the powerful aura exuding from him, it is simply chilling. How could such a man of imposing presence be an ordinary person? Seeing this, Manager Lu hurriedly came forward like a puppy begging for food, holding the ring up high and smiling obsequiously, saying, "Sir, your beloved has set her heart on this ring." He said this while holding the ring high in the air so that the other person could see it more clearly. Xiaowan was leaning in Huo Siyuan's arms at the moment, her eyes red with tears. She pointed at the saleswoman next to them, her voice slightly choked with emotion, and said, "Just by the ring she's wearing. It's quite pretty." Huo Siyuan didn't even look at Manager Lu. His heart and eyes were filled with Xiaowan. Right now, Huo Siyuan only cared about Xiaowan's happiness. Huo Siyuan's intelligence is unparalleled in the world, which is why he has become a business magnate. With just a simple sentence from Xiaowan, he easily gained insight into who had the audacity to bully the treasure he holds dear. His face was as cold as frost, his eyes revealed a hint of coldness, and he coldly spat out two words, "Feng Qi." Feng Qi is naturally not stupid either. In an instant, he understood what was going on, quickly pulled out his phone from his breast pocket, and without avoiding the gazes of the people present, he dialed a phone number without hesitation. It didn't take long before someone answered the phone. Feng Qi then handed the phone to Huo Siyuan, and respectfully said, "Second young master." Huo Siyuan calmly took the phone and spoke in a flat tone, but the authority behind his words made everyone feel that they should not underestimate him in the slightest. He said slowly, "Immediately dismiss all the staff in the store and never hire them again. At the same time, promote the female staff member with ID number 6327 to manager of this store." However, just as everyone thought that this was just a joke, an eerie ringtone suddenly sounded in Manager Lu's pocket. Ding ding ding. Manager Lu felt his heart pounding, and he became flustered. He quickly reached for his phone, and when he saw the caller ID, his unease intensified. Even his voice trembled as he said, "Hello." Next, everyone in the store saw Manager Lu's sweat, which was flowing more and more profusely, and it felt like there was already a puddle of water directly below his head. At the same time, a group of people dressed in black, moving in perfect unison and with great discipline, approached rapidly like the wind. Leading the way was a man in a royal blue suit, his gait firm and steady, as if each step contained endless power and majesty. In the blink of an eye, the group of black-clad men arrived before Huo Siyuan. The man in the blue suit at the head of the group bowed slightly, his attitude extremely respectful, and said, "Second young master." Huo Siyuan merely gave a soft response, His voice was low and full of magnetism, but it carried an unmistakable sense of authority. The blue-shirted man had a stern expression and sharp eyes. He ordered in a light tone, "Take all these people out and fire them immediately." also informed the entire Huo's group that they are never to be hired. By the way, who is employee number 6327? The female employee standing next to Xiaowan trembled when she heard this. She lowered her head, nervously looking at the name tag hanging from her chest, then carefully removed it, looked at it carefully, and after making sure it was correct, she found the courage to reply softly, I am. The man in blue turned to look at the female employee and announced firmly, from today onwards, you will be the manager of this store. The sudden piece of good news made the female clerk ecstatic, and a broad smile blossomed on her face. Her heart was full of gratitude for Xiaowan, and she secretly felt glad that she had encountered such a lucky event today. Being promoted to manager not only meant a substantial increase in salary, but also a generous bonus awaited her, so that there was finally new hope and anticipation in her life. So, she turned to Xiaowan excitedly and thanked her with deep feeling, Miss, thank you. I really can't thank you enough. Xiaowan looked at the overjoyed female employee in front of her, her mouth slightly raised, revealing a friendly smile, and lightly said, You're welcome, I didn't do anything special. However, it was precisely Xiaowan's inadvertent kind act that changed the trajectory of this female employee's fate. When Huo Siyuan heard that, the sweet and soft voice like a yellow warbler's voice could not help but cause a ripple in his heart. His mouth curled up slightly, and he reached out and affectionately scratched Xiaowan's small and delicate nose with his hand, chuckling softly, What a quirky little rascal you are. Meanwhile, Manager Lu and the others were crying bitterly while shouting at the top of their lungs, but they still couldn't break free from the black-clad men's grasp. In the end, they could only watch helplessly as they were forcibly dragged away from the scene. In the blink of an eye, the large store was left with only one shivering clerk and a group of mysterious men in black suits with cold expressions. However, in the face of such a tense situation, Huo Siyuan appeared exceptionally calm and composed, as if everything that was happening around him had nothing to do with him. After all, such a scene is nothing but a piece of cake for him, who has been through thick and thin. At this moment, Huo Siyuan's sharp gaze, which was like that of a hawk, suddenly became soft and watery, gazing lovingly at Xiaowan next to him. He said softly, Wan, since you like these rings, let's buy them. I also think they're very beautiful. As he spoke, a determined and deep light shone in his eyes. Xiaowan looked down at the dazzling ring in her hand, her face beaming with happiness, and she nodded repeatedly in agreement, saying, Yes. They really are very beautiful. Then she looked up, her eyes meeting Huo Siyuan's, her eyes full of sweetness and contentment. Huo Siyuan gazed at her quietly, and a strong desire to protect the sweet, adorable girl in front of him welled up in his heart. He thought to himself, I really want to carefully hide her away, so that no one has the chance to hurt her in the slightest. But thankfully, she is now his wife, and from now on, he will do his best to protect this hard-won love. As he spoke softly, he slowly reached out his hand and carefully picked up the small, delicate lady's ring that radiated a charming light. At the same time, he gently took Xiaowan's hand in his other hand, as delicate as a piece of white jade, as if he were holding a rare treasure. Then, he gently separated Xiaowan's ring finger from the other fingers, with an elegant and delicate movement, and then carefully placed the delicate ring slowly on her slender and delicate ring finger. Xiaowan stared intently at the ring on her hand, which sparkled with a bright radiance, and tears of happiness and joy shone in her eyes. She slightly raised the corners of her mouth, revealing a radiant smile, as beautiful and touching as a blooming flower in spring. She said with joy, Siyuan, in that case, let me put it on for you as well. Before she finished speaking, she couldn't wait to reach out and grasp the broad, warm palms of Huo Siyuan, and from them, she selected his thick and powerful ring finger. Then, with the same gentle movements, she carefully slipped the other ring, which echoed the previous style, onto Huo Siyuan's finger. After the two had completed this loving gesture for each other, they looked at the rings on each other's hands at the same time, their faces filled with contentment and gratification. Finally, Xiaowan couldn't help but exclaim, It looks really good. This simple but sincere sentence seemed to turn into a warm current that flowed through the hearts of the two, making the entire atmosphere extraordinarily warm and romantic. Chapter 25 Kissing in the Living Room. Was Villa. Huo Siyuan tightly held Xiaowan's soft and delicate little hand as the two of them slowly walked into the magnificent villa. After stepping through the door, Huo Siyuan stopped and turned around, gazing deeply at Xiaowan beside him. His eyes were full of endless tenderness and care, as if he wanted to melt her. He asked softly, Wan, are you thirsty? His voice was low and full of magnetism, as if it were the sound of nature entering Xiaowan's ears. Xiaowan slightly raised her head to meet Huo Siyuan's burning gaze. Instantly, a warm current surged through her heart, making her feel a little shy. She nodded slightly to indicate that she did feel a little thirsty. Hearing Xiaowan's answer, Huo Siyuan immediately turned his head and said to Deng Ma, who was standing not far away, Deng Ma, please pour us a glass of water. Her tone was firm but polite. Hearing this, Deng Ma, who was busy in the kitchen, quickly responded, yes, second master, I'll get it ready. After saying this, she put down the work in her hands and quickly walked towards the water dispenser. It wasn't long before Deng Ma walked out of the kitchen, holding an exquisite tray in her hands, on which were two clear and transparent water glasses. She came into the living room, respectfully placed the tray on the coffee table, and bowed to Huo Siyuan and Xiaowan, saying, second master, madam, please enjoy. Then she silently stepped aside. Huo Siyuan nodded slightly to express his gratitude, but didn't say anything more. Then he reached out and picked up one of the glasses of water, carefully bringing it to Xiaowan's lips, his movements gentle as if he were holding an invaluable treasure. He smiled encouragingly and said, Xiaowan, come on, open your mouth and drink some water. His words were full of affection and care. During these long hours, Huo Siyuan had treated her with the utmost gentleness, but even so, she still wasn't fully accustomed to this intimacy and care. Therefore, when Huo Siyuan used such a tender gesture to personally feed her water, Xiaowan couldn't help blushing, her shyness evident. Xiaowan, like a docile sheep, obediently took a few sips of water, then said in a voice as sweet as a nightingale's song, Siyuan, for some reason, I always feel like you're treating me like an innocent little baby. Huo Siyuan gazed at the adorable woman in front of him, his heart filled with joy. His mouth curled up slightly, and he responded softly, Wan, it's just that you're so petite and weak, and it makes me really uneasy. After all, as your husband, it's my job to protect you. At this moment, Xiaowan felt as if she were immersed in a sea of sweetness, surrounded by happiness. Although Huo Siyuan would occasionally say some affectionate words, she could truly feel the sincerity in them. Then Huo Siyuan once again held the glass to Xiaowan's lips and softly instructed, drink some more. Seeing this, Xiaowan looked at his serious and focused expression and couldn't help but gently open her cherry lips and obediently continue drinking. Before long, the entire glass of water was almost completely consumed. Just then, a low, full and magnetic voice full of tenderness asked again, Night, are you hungry? Night, who had not felt hungry, could not help but feel a little puzzled, and she herself could not say why. As if driven by a mysterious force, she could not help but nod and say softly, well, a little bit. However, at that moment, her voice suddenly changed, from the original gentle tone to a cold tone, Deng Ma. Deng Ma, who had been waiting nearby, almost responded immediately, okay. I'm coming. At that moment, Huo Siyuan, like a powerful piece of 502 glue, tightly embraced Xiaowan, and affectionately called out to her, Wan. Xiaowan, who was curled up in Huo Siyuan's arms at the moment, suddenly felt a warm breath coming from above her head, gently blowing on her cheeks. She looked up a little dazedly, her eyes landing on Huo Siyuan's chin. Her eyes were slightly dull, and she asked, what's wrong? Huo Siyuan lowered his head slightly, gazing at Xiaowan's cute and adorable face, with a faint smile curling the corners of his mouth. He said, actually, there's nothing special. I just wanted to call out to you. Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan in front of her, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. At that moment, Huo Siyuan was also gazing at Xiaowan, and their gazes met, as if the whole world was left with just the two of them. Huo Siyuan couldn't help but swallow, then asked in a low, magnetic voice, can I kiss you, Wan? Xiaowan's face instantly turned red again, and she felt like she couldn't even speak. The two of them just looked at each other. Huo Siyuan's gaze on Xiaowan deepened. Xiaowan was mesmerized by Huo Siyuan. After a while, Xiaowan, who was delicate and cute, with a voice so soft it could melt hearts, whispered timidly, what on earth are you talking about? There are people everywhere. As she spoke, her eyes, pure as a fawn's, twinkled with shyness and unease. Upon hearing this, Huo Siyuan slowly raised his head. His gaze was like a sharp arrow, sweeping around with a hint of coldness. The servants, who had been standing quietly around the hall, felt the intimidating gaze of the second young master and suddenly felt like they had a thorn in their back and were shivering all over. As soon as the second young master turned his gaze towards them, all the servants, as if trained, completed a 180-degree turn with astonishing speed. In just 1 second, all the servants in the entire villa stood facing the wall together, and they all reached out their hands at the same time, covering their ears tightly. Xiaowan witnessed this scene before her eyes and felt extremely embarrassed and awkward. At this moment, she really wanted to find a place to hide immediately, preferably by digging a big hole in the floor with her toes and then diving headfirst into the hole and burying herself deep inside. However, Huo Siyuan seemed quite satisfied with the performance of the crowd and nodded slightly in recognition. Then, he returned his gaze to Xiaowan, his eyes becoming unusually tender, and asked softly, "In this way, no one will see?" Xiaowan bit her lip lightly, her brows furrowed slightly, and she whispered in response, As soon as the word left her mouth, before she could react, Huo Siyuan quickly leaned down and, without hesitation, kissed Xiaowan's delicate, cherry blossom mouth. Time seemed to have come to a standstill in that moment. Huo Siyuan enjoyed his wife to the fullest, reveling in the wonderful sensation of her soft lips. He secretly marveled, "My wife is beautiful in every way, both in appearance and personality, and I can't get enough of her." At that moment, Xiaowan was completely immersed in this sudden sweetness, her cheeks flushed like ripe apples. This time, Huo Siyuan gently placed his lips on those delicate lips like flower petals, as if afraid of disturbing this beauty. He kissed carefully, again and again, each touch full of endless tenderness. At this moment, Xiaowan opened her big, watery eyes wide, like bright stars in the night sky, staring straight at the man in front of her who made her heart race. Huo Siyuan felt her burning gaze, his mouth curling up slightly, revealing a smile of affection, and he whispered, "Wan, remember to close your eyes when we kiss." His tone was so gentle, as if it could melt everything in the world. After hearing this, Xiaowan blinked a little dazedly, then nodded obediently like a good boy, responding, "Okay." Her voice was clear and pleasant, as beautiful as the sound of nature. Then, Huo Siyuan continued to gaze deeply at Xiaowan's pretty and cute face, and sincerely exclaimed, "Wan, has anyone ever told you that you are really well behaved?" In fact, the answer was self-evident, because the person who said this was none other than him standing in front of her. However, Xiaowan, who was immersed in happiness at the moment, did not realize this and just giggled foolishly. Then, Huo Siyuan leaned closer to Xiaowan again and asked in his magnetic, slightly hoarse voice, "Wan, then next time, can I do whatever I want? When I want to kiss you, I'll just kiss you?" Faced with such a straightforward question, Xiaowan instantly blushed, but her heart was filled with joy and anticipation. Her thoughts had long been disrupted, her mind a blank, unable to think about anything. In the end, she couldn't help but nod her head in agreement. Seeing Xiaowan's cute and adorable appearance, Huo Siyuan couldn't help but laugh out loud. He slowly lowered his head, gently kissed Xiaowan's smooth and delicate forehead, and said softly, "My Wan is really good." This simple praise made Xiaowan's heart feel like it was being blown by the spring breeze, sending ripples through her. Chapter 26 This is fate. Xiaowan was at a loss. She felt like a child lost in a thick fog, everything in front of her becoming blurry. She didn't know what she was doing or where she was, just feeling as if her body were light as a feather, floating aimlessly in the air. Huo Siyuan quietly watched Xiaowan slowly open her eyes filled with endless care and love. Time passed by minute. After a long while, Huo Siyuan reluctantly let go of Xiaowan in his arms and gently called out her name, "Wan." Hearing that familiar voice, Xiaowan instinctively responded, "Hmm?" There was a hint of confusion in her voice, as if she had just woken up from a long dream. Huo Siyuan gazed deeply into Xiaowan's eyes and said in a gentle tone, "Baby, can you hand me your phone?" Although Xiaowan didn't understand why he had made this request, she obediently began looking for her phone and handed it to him. "Here you go." Then she looked at Huo Siyuan with a puzzled expression, as if asking what his intentions were. Huo Siyuan skillfully fiddled with Xiaowan's phone, sliding and tapping his fingers quickly on the screen. Xiaowan, meanwhile, stood quietly to one side, silently observing his every move. Suddenly, she felt a hot gaze fall on her. So she turned her head, just in time to meet Huo Siyuan's incredibly gentle eyes. Huo Siyuan's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a faint smile, as he softly explained, "I just saved my phone number in your phone. If you ever need anything in the future, remember to call me at any time." Xiaowan nodded lightly upon hearing this, and her gaze fell on the screen of her phone. When she saw the note in the contact list, "Husband," a sweet warm current could not help but well up in her heart. "And this is my WeChat ID, if I'm out working and you miss me, you can video chat with me." The man's low voice carried a hint of seduction, as if he were trying to lure her heart away with him. Xiaowan listened very carefully, nodded vigorously, and her eyes shone with determination. "Okay." These two words made her feel both surreal and real, as if everything had become less real. Just then, a very kind voice came from outside the door, as warm as the spring breeze. "Xiaowan, my Wan, Grandma is here." Before she saw her, she heard her voice. Xiaowan immediately stood up, her eyes eagerly fixed on the door. When she saw the familiar figure, an inexplicable feeling welled up in her heart. Wasn't that Grandma from this morning? Why did it feel like it had been a long time ago? She smiled sweetly and said, "Grandma." After calling out, she couldn't wait to run over, like a happy little bird. Although they had only met once, Grandma Hua gave her an indescribable sense of familiarity and was very kind to her. Xiaowan hugged her grandmother tightly, feeling the warmth and love from her. At that moment, she felt like the happiest person in the world. Grandma Hua looked at the cute and well-behaved Xiaowan in front of her, her heart full of love. She couldn't help but reach out and gently stroke the back of Xiaowan's head, saying tenderly, "My Wan is really well-behaved. Has that brat been bullying you?" This grandson of hers did have a bit of a bad temper, was relatively aloof, and had an eccentric personality. If he dares to bully you, Wan must tell Grandma, and Grandma will back you up. At this moment, sitting next to the sofa, Huo Siyuan heard his own biological grandmother constantly enumerating his shortcomings in front of his beloved wife, and she even put it so bluntly, as if he was not her own grandson. If it were anyone else, they would have probably stopped talking a long time ago, but after all, this was his own biological grandmother, so he could only helplessly say, "Grandma." However, Grandma Hua didn't even look at Huo Siyuan once, and she still looked at Xiaowan intently, comforting her, "Wan, don't be afraid. With Grandma here, he definitely wouldn't dare bully you." Xiaowan looked at Grandma Hua and felt a little apologetic, as she had been blaming Huo Siyuan for his faults since she entered the door. She quickly shook Grandma Hua's arm gently and explained, "Grandma, it's not like that. Siyuan is very good to me." Grandma Hua listened to Xiaowan's words with disbelief on her face. She had raised her grandson single-handedly, and she just couldn't believe that he would develop such a strong attachment to Xiaowan, someone he had never met before. Night, don't let him scare you, this kid is not usually like this." Grandma Hua frowned and said. Xiaowan shook her head with a smile, "Grandma, don't worry, Siyuan is very nice to me, really." Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan, and a trace of tenderness flashed in his eyes. Night, you go chat with Grandma for a while, I'll go to the kitchen and see how dinner is coming along," he said and turned around, walking into the kitchen. Grandma Hua was puzzled, can this kid cook? She's getting on in years and has never eaten a meal he's cooked. Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan's back and a feeling of warmth welled up in her heart. She knew that although Huo Siyuan appeared cold on the outside, he was very delicate on the inside and cared for her to the utmost. Grandma Hua looked at her granddaughter watching her grandson and saw stars in her eyes, knowing that there was a future for them. Ha ha ha. It seems that she's made the right choice this time. She smiled kindly at Xiaowan and said with a smile, "Wan, how do you like holding your grandson? Are you satisfied?" Xiaowan laughed happily, "Grandma, I love him so much. Not only is he good looking, he is also very talented and capable, and he is very considerate of me." Grandma Hua nodded with satisfaction, "That's good. As long as you are happy, I will be relieved." At this time, Huo Siyuan walked out with a plate of food. "Dinner is ready, come and try my cooking." Xiaowan stood up and helped Huo Siyuan set the table. The family sat down together and enjoyed a warm dinner. Grandma Hua looked at the two of them being so close and her heart was full of joy. Especially seeing her always cold-hearted grandson, who had never shown any affection towards her, now acting so intimately towards Xiaowan, she couldn't help but secretly feel happy, thinking that her wish to hold her great-grandchild was now within reach. She had originally worried that it might take her grandson some time to develop a bond with Xiaowan, but she had never imagined that in less than a day, they would seem to have already fallen for each other. At this thought, Grandma Hua's face involuntarily broke into a happy smile. "Yuan, are you satisfied with the wife that Grandma found for you?" Grandma Hua asked with great anticipation. Huo Siyuan smiled and replied, "Of course I am satisfied. I really have to thank Grandma for finding me a wife." As he spoke, he gently put an arm around Xiaowan, who was sitting next to him. "This is fate," Huo Siyuan said with emotion. He knew in his heart that from the moment they had gone to bed together last night, their destinies had become closely intertwined. Now, Xiaowan had become his wife, and this wonderful coincidence made him feel incredibly happy. Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan a little dazedly, her eyes full of confusion and curiosity. She didn't seem to have fully adapted to the sudden marriage yet, but deep down she was full of expectations for the future. Chapter 27 Aaron Yang held Xiaowan tightly. "Grandma Hua, Aaron Yang, and young mistress, dinner is ready," Dang Ma called respectfully. Xiaowan quickly stood up and hurriedly held out her hand to help her grandmother, saying with concern, "Grandma, let me help you." At this moment, Huo Siyuan's gaze remained fixed on Xiaowan, and when she saw her get up, he immediately stood up as well. Grandma Hua couldn't help but smile at the way her grandson followed her every move. "Oh, Grandma may be old, but I do Tai Chi every morning to keep fit, so I'm still very healthy." Xiaowan looked at the energetic and vibrant Grandma Hua and still held her hand tightly, whispering, "Then I'll support you." Grandma Huo laughed even more heartily, reached out and shook Xiaowan's hand firmly, which Xiaowan was about to let go of. It's really nice of you to hold my hand like this, Grandma really likes it too. Xiaowan was very happy to hear Grandma Huo's praise. Hey, thank you Grandma. However, Huo Siyuan, who was being ignored on the side, had a gloomy face like the bottom of a pot that hadn't been used for years. Xiaowan and Grandma Huo were chatting and laughing, and they didn't notice Huo Siyuan's dark face at all. So, the old and the young walked together to the dining room, chatting and laughing. Grandma Huo sat in the main seat, her face beaming with a smile, and warmly took Xiaowan's hand. Xiaowan, come on, sit next to Grandma. Xiaowan obediently sat on the right side of Grandma Huo. Following closely behind her, Xiaowan thought that Huo Siyuan would sit on the left side of Grandma Huo. But what happened next took her by surprise. She saw that Huo Siyuan was walking towards her step by step, and Xiaowan's heart began to pound. Huo Siyuan looked at the chair next to Xiaowan, frowned, feeling that it was too far away, and thought to himself, I don't know which inconsiderate person put the chair so far away. Then he looked up at the maid next to him and said coldly, it's too far away. The maid didn't react at first and stood there dumbfounded, at a loss. But Shang Xiaowu, the butler, understood what Huo Siyuan meant and quickly told the maid, hurry up and move the chair closer to the young mistress. After he said that, the maid immediately understood, and the two of them immediately carefully lifted the chair and placed it next to the young mistress's chair. Xiaowan, who was sitting in the chair, was dumbfounded. She looked at the chair next to her, which was so close that it seemed as if the two chairs had always been connected. Grandma Huo watched with interest from the side, secretly exclaiming in her heart, this is even more exciting than the dramas I usually watch. Hey, don't you usually sit on Grandma's side? Huo Siyuan's mouth curled up slightly, and instead of answering her grandmother's words, he sat directly next to Xiaowan. Xiaowan looked at his buttocks leaning against her own, feeling a little embarrassed, so she shifted over to the side. She muttered to herself, secretly, why is this guy so overbearing? However, what she didn't expect was that every time she moved a little, he would move a little as well, so that he was always right next to her. Xiaowan helplessly thought, is this guy doing this on purpose? Xiaowan felt that if she moved any further, she would fall. She couldn't help but look up and see Huo Siyuan, who was sitting right next to her, with a hint of dissatisfaction and shyness on his face. Siyuan, your chair is next to mine, are you sitting too close? It's inconvenient to eat if you sit too close. The further she spoke, the softer her voice became. When Huo Siyuan heard Xiaowan's sweet and weak voice, his heart softened, but he pretended to be innocent and said, really? Why don't I feel it? Xiaowan was suddenly infuriated by these words. She angrily turned her head to look at the other side of herself, puffed up her lips, and said in a low voice, look, if you move again, I'm going to fall. Huo Siyuan is tall, and his line of sight follows Xiaowan's. He sees that half of Xiaowan's but is already hanging out, and his heart suddenly aches. He quickly reaches out and pulls Xiaowan back, saying gently, be careful, don't fall. Xiaowan is startled by Huo Siyuan's sudden move. Her cheeks blush instantly, and she mutters, you, pay attention. But a feeling of warmth wells up in her heart. He put his arm around Xiaowan's waist and said gently, Wan, I won't move if you don't. Xiaowan was taken aback by these words, and she angrily said again, this, you, leaning so close, it's inconvenient for me to eat. Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan deeply and said tenderly, it's fine, it won't be inconvenient, I can feed you, you just have to open your mouth. Shocked. Everyone was taken aback by this scene. Is this still second master? Is this still the same second master who looks down on everything? It was surprising enough this afternoon, but I never expected our second master to be so eloquent when it comes to sweet nothings. While everyone was still in a state of shock, Huo Siyuan suddenly lifted Xiaowan up with both hands and gently placed her on his lap. It all happened so quickly, as if it were just a momentary thing. When Xiaowan reacted, she was already sitting on Haziwen's lap. She looked at her grandmother sitting next to her and the crowd around them. She was so embarrassed. Xiaowan sat gently on Haziwen's lap. Her fingers trembled slightly, and she nervously reached out and put her arms around Haziwen's neck. She slowly leaned closer to him, her lips close to Haziwen's ear, and whispered, Siyuan, Grandma is still here, so this isn't very good. Can you let me down? Huo Siyuan couldn't help but feel a surge of pleasure in his heart when he heard this. He enjoyed the feeling of Xiaowan leaning closer to him, and his mouth slightly lifted. He couldn't help but increase the strength of his hands, holding Xiaowan tightly in his arms. However, Xiaowan did not expect such a move from Huo Siyuan. With Huo Siyuan's strong hug, she lost her balance and fell directly onto Huo Siyuan's body. The two were already close to each other, and now they were even closer. What's worse is that due to this accident, Xiaowan's small cherry lips actually kissed directly on Huo Siyuan's ear. Xiaowan stared with wide eyes, surprised to see her mouth pressed against Huo Siyuan's ear. She felt extremely embarrassed and ashamed, especially when she realized that this had happened in public. Her cheeks instantly turned red, as if they were ripe apples. This was also the first time Huo Siyuan had experienced something like this. He felt Xiaowan's soft lips lightly touching his ear, and the wonderful touch made his heart beat faster. His Adam's apple moved up and down unconsciously, showing the unrest in his heart. At this moment, Huo Siyuan gazed at Xiaowan, who was blushing all over, and a hint of teasing shone in his eyes. He teased in a seductive voice, "My lady, you are really passionate, so proactive, it makes me a little overwhelmed. But I just love it when you do this." Chapter 28 Ernyan's tenderness. Grandma Huo looked at the scene in front of her with a kind face, and a feeling of helplessness and joy welled up in her heart. She never imagined that her grandson, who had always been steady and introverted, would actually be so intimate with Wan in front of everyone, cooing and cuddling, with an incredibly happy smile on his face. Just then, Grandma Huo broke the sweet atmosphere with a few light coughs and said with a smile, "Ahem ahem ahem. Children, Grandma is still here, it's time to eat." Upon hearing this cough, Xiaowan snapped back to reality like she had just woken up from a dream, realizing that she had just lost her temper a little. She hurriedly sat up straight. However, what she never expected was that when she sat up straight, she made a sudden move and slammed straight into Huo Siyuan's chin, which was looking down at her. Ah! With a scream, Xiaowan felt a sharp pain in her head, and she couldn't help but cry out. Huo Sanyuan and Grandma Hu, who were standing nearby, were both heartbroken. Xiaowan quickly reached out her hand and gently stroked the top of her head, which was in pain, while murmuring in her mouth, "It hurts. It hurts." She looked like a child who had suffered an injustice, and it was heartbreaking to watch. Huo Siyuan was even more distressed. He gently reached out his hand and carefully stroked Xiaowan's head as if he were caring for a rare treasure. Then he lowered his head and gently blew air on Xiaowan's head, soothingly whispering, "It doesn't hurt anymore. I'll blow on it for you." His tone was full of concern and love. Huo Siyuan gently ran his fingers through Xiaowan's beautiful, dark hair, which fell like a waterfall over her shoulders, as if he were admiring a precious work of art. He carefully played with each strand of hair, and as time passed, he finally discovered a small, faintly reddish trace hidden within. Xiaowan, like a docile little lamb, sat quietly on Huo Siyuan's strong and powerful lap, without any intention of resisting, allowing him to play with her as he wished. After a while of playing, Xiaowan looked up and gazed at Huo Siyuan with watery eyes. She stretched out her small, delicate hands and gently combed her long hair, which had become a little messy, and said in a sweet voice, "Ouch. Let me blow it out." Her voice was soft, but full of endless tenderness and intimacy. Huo Siyuan stared at Xiaowan without taking his eyes off her, his eyes full of affection and love. At the moment, Xiaowan was shy and a little playful and lively, and this appearance simply made people feel affectionate. He couldn't help but sigh, "His precious baby is really cute." Xiaowan saw that Huo Siyuan just stared at her without saying a word, and then she felt a pair of warm and thick hands cover her cheeks. The warmth from the palm of his hand spread throughout her body, making her originally pale and rosy face become even more flushed. She couldn't help but pout, "Siyuan, what are you smiling at?" However, there was no hint of reproach in her words. Huo Siyuan stroked Xiaowan's tender and delicate face, feeling the unique touch, while smiling and saying, "Because I'm happy to see my wife, and I'm happy, so I'm smiling." His words revealed a deep attachment and love for Xiaowan. Xiaowan looked helplessly at Huo Siyuan, who always liked to ramble on, shook her head, and gently urged, "Okay, stop it, hurry up and go eat, or the food will get cold." After saying this, she got up from Huo Siyuan's lap and tried to sit next to him. But the overbearing Huo Siyuan would never let go, and quickly pulled down Huo Siyuan, who had just stood up. Xiaowan was so caught off guard that she sat back down on Huo Siyuan's lap. Xiaowan looked up at Huo Siyuan in a daze. Huo Siyuan slowly put down what he was holding, then reached out and picked up the chopsticks with an elegant and skilled motion. He gently picked up a piece of tender and juicy beef, carefully brought it to Xiaowan's lips, and said softly, "Here, baby, open your mouth." Xiaowan was like a docile little lamb, obediently opening her cherry lips and catching the piece of beef that Huo Siyuan handed over. She chewed it carefully, her face filled with a smile of contentment and happiness. After swallowing the food in her mouth, Xiaowan's mouth corners rose, revealing a sweet smile, as she whispered, "Siyuan, thank you, but I can do it myself, I can eat by myself." Huo Siyuan gazed at Xiaowan, his eyes full of affection and tenderness, and responded with a slight smile, "My dear, I like holding you like this and feeding you with my own hands. It's more convenient and sweeter." Xiaowan frowned slightly, feeling a little helpless. But she was too embarrassed to refuse directly, so she could only mutter, "But this isn't very good. It feels like you're being overbearing and not listening to me." Regardless, Huo Siyuan continued to feed Xiaowan carefully and thoughtfully, bite by bite. At this moment, Grandma Huo couldn't help but feel as if she had become a 1,000-kilowatt super light bulb that radiated light as bright as day. She couldn't help but laugh out loud, teasingly saying, "Oh dear, okay, Grandma is still here. You two don't treat Grandma like air, always cooing and flirting here, or is Grandma in your way? It seems that Grandma should go first to make room for you." Hearing this, Xiaowan suddenly blushed with shame and wished she could find a crack to crawl into. She pouted and said, "Grandma, stop teasing me." Seeing this, Grandma laughed even more happily. "Ah, Grandma knows, I won't tease you anymore." Huo Siyuan looked at his dear grandma innocently, slightly complaining, "Grandma, just stop teasing her, see how shy she is." Okay, I won't tease you anymore, otherwise my grandson will be angry and say I'm bullying you." Grandma Huo was really happy today, and she also saw the sparkling wedding ring on Wanwan's ring finger. "Grandma, I can see something glittering on your finger." The maid next to her could hardly contain her laughter. "Grandma Huo, you're still the one who pretends to be crazy." Xiaowan immediately held out her hand, looked at it, and said happily, smiling, "Grandma, this is a wedding ring. I just went out with Siyuan to buy it." "Grandma, does it look good?" Grandma Huo was also full of joy when she heard this. Looking at such a well-behaved and beautiful night, she was 100% sure that her grandson must have been attracted by her. She never imagined that her grandson would be like this. Grandma Huo looked at Xiaowan and smiled kindly, "Beautiful, my night is the most beautiful." "Xiaowan. Grandma, I was asking if the wedding ring looks good, not about myself." "Grandma, are you misunderstanding me?" Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan tenderly, "I also think my Wanwan is the most beautiful." "Xiaowan. What on earth are you two talking about?" Xiaowan pouted, lightly pounding her small, delicate fists against Huo Siyuan's broad, solid chest. Her beautiful eyes were wide with confusion and disbelief as she asked, "Siyuan, what nonsense are you talking about?" Xiaowan thought to herself, "I need to correct him quickly." So, she quickly sat up straight, straightened her back, and then carefully extended her slender hand, trying to take off the dazzling ring on her finger and hand it to her grandmother to take a closer look. However, just then, the quick-witted Huo Siyuan quickly extended his large hand, gently covering Xiaowan's hand with the ring on it, and slowly shook his head. His tone was gentle as water but also firm as he said, "My dear, you can't just take off your wedding ring casually." Hearing this, Xiaowan couldn't help but flinch slightly, and then nodded thoughtfully, responding like a good and obedient child, "Oh, I see." She immediately obediently withdrew her hand, put the half-removed ring back on. In that case, Xiaowan had no choice but to sit still, leaning slightly towards her grandmother, while stretching her arm out. With a joyful heart, she showed her grandmother the ring in her hand and asked excitedly, "Grandma, look, isn't this ring beautiful?" At that moment, her grandmother was finally able to calm down and take a serious look at the exquisite ring in front of her. A warm, benevolent smile blossomed on her face like the spring sun, and she kept nodding in praise, saying, "It's so pretty. This ring is really beautiful. The pink gemstone set in it is crystal clear and sparkling, and it's just perfect for our family." Xiaowan couldn't take her eyes off the ring, which she couldn't get enough of, and her heart was filled with joy. Now that she had received praise from her grandmother, she loved the ring even more and was immersed in a sea of happiness. Huo Siyuan, who was watching silently from the side, couldn't help but smile as broadly as a blooming spring flower at Xiaowan, whose mouth also involuntarily rose up. His eyes revealed a look of full adoration. He couldn't help but praise softly, "My Wanwan really has excellent taste." Chapter 29 Taking a Bath. After dinner, Xiaowan was chatting with her grandmother in the living room, her face beaming with happiness. However, she couldn't help wondering why Huo Siyuan was so idle, sticking to her side all day long, as if he couldn't bear to be apart for even a moment. Grandma Huo looked at Xiaowan with curiosity, and asked with concern in her tone, "Wanwan, you're only 18 years old, aren't you still in school?" Before she finished speaking, she gave her grandson a stern look, her eyes seemingly full of reproach, as if to say, "You old cow, how dare you eat young grass?" Of course, Huo Siyuan saw the look in his grandmother's eyes. "You're the old cow eating young grass, and my wife and I are a perfect match." Indeed, for a girl who is only 18 years old, this age is indeed a bit young. Huo Siyuan silently gazed at his wife, his mouth curling up into a faint smile, but he never spoke. Xiaowan's face was filled with a gentle smile, and she nodded gently, responding softly, "Yes, Grandma, I'm going to college in September." Hearing this, Grandma was suddenly beamed with joy, excitedly saying, "Oh. So, what major are you studying, Wanwan?" Xiaowan smiled sweetly and answered in a clear and pleasant voice, "Grandma, I'm studying design." Grandma was smiled with relief and nodded repeatedly in praise, "The design major is good. You will definitely have a bright future." Saying this, she shook Xiaowan's hand firmly and said with deep meaning, "After you graduate, Yuan can help you." Just then, Huo Siyuan gently placed one hand on Xiaowan's slender waist and said tenderly, "Well, my dear, even if you don't want to work, I will support you." His eyes were full of affection and love, as if Xiaowan was everything in his life. Grandma Huo looked at her grandson, smiling with a worthless look on her face. In her opinion, even if Xiaowan drew a line, her grandson would still praise it to the heavens. Xiaowan glared at Huo Siyuan reproachfully and said coquettishly, "What are you talking about? I am determined to become an outstanding designer." Although her tone was a little angry, her voice was still soft and gentle. She understood Huo Siyuan's concern and love for her, but she hoped to achieve her dreams through her own efforts. Huo Siyuan smiled, stroked Xiaowan's hair gently, and said tenderly, "Yes, yes, my baby can definitely do it." He knew that Xiaowan had firm goals and pursuits, and he was willing to fully support her and accompany her through every stage. Grandma Huo watched the scene with joy in her heart. She had always worried that Huo Siyuan was too indifferent and serious to find a suitable partner. Now, seeing them so affectionate, she felt immeasurably relieved. She smiled and said to Huo Siyuan, "You must treat Wanwan well." Huo Siyuan nodded solemnly, looked deeply at Xiaowan, and said, "Don't worry, Grandma, she is my only treasure. If I'm not good to her, I'm not good to anyone. Don't even say I'm good to her, I give my life for her." His words were full of sincerity and determination, and one could feel his deep love for Xiaowan. A blush rose to Xiaowan's face, and she looked at Huo Siyuan with emotion, her eyes sparkling with happiness. She knew that no matter what difficulties and challenges she encountered in the future, as long as Huo Siyuan was by her side, she would not be afraid. Their love was as warm as the sun, illuminating each other's life paths. Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan, who suddenly looked so deep in love, saying these words, and even threatening to die. As he looked into her big, clear, innocent eyes, like those of a young deer, he slowly lowered his head and gently rested his forehead against her forehead. At that moment, the two were so close together that Xiaowan could even clearly smell the faint sandalwood fragrance emanating from Huo Siyuan's body. She couldn't help but exclaim, "So this is what a fresh and charming fragrance is like." Looking at his young wife up close, Huo Siyuan realized that she was truly beautiful, breathtakingly so. "What are you doing? Don't you have to work?" Xiaowan asked curiously. "Xiaowan, look at the sky, it's dark, how can I go to work?" Huo Siyuan replied with a smile. "Oh, that's right." Xiaowan nodded in realization. Huo Siyuan couldn't help but reach out and gently stroke Xiaowan's nose. Grandma Huo watched all this quietly from the side, her heart full of joy and gratification. She smiled and said, "Okay, Grandma is tired too, it's time to rest. Tonight, Grandma will rest here, but Grandma will definitely not go upstairs and disturb you, you can do whatever you want. But control the strength a little, perhaps I will have my great-grandchild tonight." "Grandma!" Xiaowan blushed as soon as she heard this, and said in a shy voice as she walked up to her. Huo rushed forward to help Huo Grandma go upstairs, but she was stopped by her. Huo Grandma said gently, "There's no need to see me off." After she finished speaking, she gave Huo Siyuan a glare and said in a grumpy tone, "Yuan, you must control yourself tonight." Huo Siyuan looked helpless and could only nod silently to show that he understood. "Okay, Grandma will go back to her room first." Huo Siyuan looked at Xiaowan and supported her as if she were a wounded person. "Night-night, just like Grandma said, let's go to bed too." "Okay," Xiaowan said dreamily. Huo Siyuan put his arm around Xiaowan and slowly walked upstairs, finally stopping in front of the door to the master bedroom on the third floor, which was also Huo Siyuan's room. Xiaowan once again entered this room with its simple and elegant black and white decor, and was gently embraced by Huo Siyuan as she sat on the large bed, which was as dark as ink. She blinked, looked up at Huo Siyuan, and asked softly, "Siyuan, are we going to sleep together tonight?" Huo Siyuan's mouth curled up slightly, a trace of a smile flickered in his eyes, and he asked in return, "Baby, we're husband and wife, do you still want to sleep in separate rooms?" Xiaowan's face flushed slightly, she lowered her head shyly, and whispered, "But this is only the second time we've met, is it going too fast?" How about a few more days, so we can get to know each other a little better? Huo Siyuan reached out and gently lifted Xiaowan's chin, making her look directly into his eyes. He smiled and said, "Baby, we've already had more intimate encounters." Xiaowan nodded, not really understanding, but although she was still a little nervous, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "What does that mean?" He seriously doubted that Huo Siyuan was driving on the highway. Huo Siyuan smiled without saying a word, just looking at Xiaowan adoringly, then stroked her hair gently and whispered, "Be good, you'll understand later. Now, why don't you go take a shower and relax?" Xiaowan looked at Huo Siyuan and then remembered that she hadn't showered yet, so she whispered, "I'll go now then." Xiaowan was a little moved when she heard his words, but she still felt embarrassed, so she quickly jumped off the bed and prepared to get dressed. But she was in such a hurry that she didn't even have time to put on her shoes before running over to the closet. After only taking 2 steps, she was embraced by Huo Siyuan and then put back on the bed to sit down. "Look at you, what's the hurry? You're not even wearing your shoes, you'll catch a cold." Huo Siyuan gently scolded, while picking up the slippers next to him and squatting down to gently put them on for Xiaowan. Xiaowan felt warm and a little shy as she watched Huo Siyuan carefully help her put on her shoes. She whispered to Huo Siyuan, "Siyuan, I can actually put on my own shoes, and I'm not cold, so you don't need to be so nervous." Huo Siyuan looked up and smiled at Xiaowan and said, "It's okay, I like helping you put on your shoes, it makes me feel very happy. I'm even willing to wash your feet. Okay, your shoes are on, go take a bath." He then patted Xiaowan on the shoulder. Xiaowan's face instantly turned red, and she sat by the bed, too shy to move. Huo Siyuan couldn't help but laugh as he watched Xiaowan sitting there motionless. He asked softly, "What's wrong? Why aren't you going to take a bath yet? Do you want me to wash you? If that's what you want, I'd be happy to. After all, it wouldn't be the first time we've done this, and I'm sure I could satisfy you." Xiaowan blushed when she heard what Huo Siyuan said, and glared at him fiercely. "Siyuan, what are you talking about? Really, I don't want your help." After saying that, she quickly got up and walked towards the bathroom. Xiaowan didn't remember very clearly what happened that night, let alone Huo Siyuan helping her take a bath while she was unconscious. Chapter 30 Sleeping Together. Huo Siyuan slowly got up, gently took Xiaowan's hand, and led her slowly towards the bathroom. He had prepared in advance for Xiaowan a set of clean clothes and a complete set of toiletries, neatly placed aside, showing his attentiveness. Then, he personally adjusted the water temperature to ensure that Xiaowan could enjoy a comfortable bathing experience. "Baby, when you're taking a bath, remember to call me if you need anything, and don't take too long, or you'll catch a cold." Huo Siyuan spoke softly and patiently. Xiaowan walked over and took Huo Siyuan's hand, whispering, "I know. He. Then, she laughed happily. Looking at Xiaowan, who was smiling so happily, he felt a sense of happiness that made him feel completely overwhelmed. He hadn't realized before, but doing these things for someone he loved was so happy, and it felt like his heart was filled with happiness. After completing these preparations, he turned and left the bathroom. Although he was reluctant to do so and wanted to bathe his baby himself, he still tried hard to control himself and give Xiaowan plenty of personal space. Xiaowan stood alone in the spacious and bright bathroom, feeling the warm water flow, sprinkling on her skin, as if all her fatigue had been washed away. As the water flowed, her mood gradually calmed down, and involuntarily, the bits and pieces of her life with Huo Siyuan since they met came to mind. Those beautiful memories were like a colorful picture scroll that slowly unfolded in her heart, causing an indescribable feeling of sweetness to well up in her heart. After a moment, Xiaowan finished her shower, changed into a loose and comfortable nightgown, and slowly walked out of the bathroom. She saw Huo Siyuan at a glance, quietly sitting by the bed, as if he had been waiting for a long time. When Huo Siyuan saw Xiaowan walk out of the bathroom, a flash of surprise crossed his eyes. Looking at her in a pink camisole nightdress with a cartoon of Cardcaptor Sakura on it, she was really playful and cute, obedient and quiet. He stood up, walked lightly in front of Xiaowan, smelled the shower gel on her, gently took her hand, and then gently pulled her to the side of the bed and sat her down. The two sat facing each other, and for a moment they fell into silence, with a faint and ambiguous atmosphere in the air. "I'm done." Huo Siyuan's voice was deep. Xiaowan's voice was small. After that, Huo Siyuan got up and walked towards the bathroom. Xiaowan soon heard the sound of running water in the bathroom. Xiaowan, for the first time, was awake and sleeping with the opposite sex, and she was still a little scared. "It's better to hurry up and go to bed and sleep. Yes, if you fall asleep, you won't know anything." Huo Siyuan, who was taking a shower, was in a great mood. The person he liked was now sleeping in his own bed, waiting for him. As he thought about this, his body felt a little taut, so he looked down. After all, it was the first day, so he had to give her some time to get used to it, and he couldn't be too impatient. He had to hold back a bit, buddy. An hour passed. Huo Siyuan wrapped a scarf around his neck, looked around, and saw only a lump in the bed. He smiled wryly, and walked over to the bed. Xiaowan, who was under the quilt, had been tossing and turning in bed for just over an hour, unable to sleep at all. Smelling her quilt and pillow, she could smell the scent of Huo Siyuan all over them. It was a very nice smell, and it felt like she was being held by Huo Siyuan. As she thought about this, her face turned red. She could hear every sound in the room clearly. Soon, she also heard the sound of water in the bathroom, which stopped, followed by the sound of the bathroom door opening. Finally, the sound of Huo Siyuan walking came, and it got louder and louder. Xiaowan immediately closed her eyes and clenched her hands under the covers. Xiaowan didn't know that just now, when she straightened her back, she trembled. The clever Huo Siyuan must have known that his little treasure was definitely not asleep. Huo Siyuan smiled, walked over gently, and lifted the quilt directly to get in. Xiaowan felt the position next to her sink in. Huo Siyuan is heavier than herself, so the depression is deeper. Xiaowan slid over to Huo Siyuan's side lightly and naturally. In this way, she slid into Huo Siyuan's arms. Ah! Xiaowan screamed in surprise. At this moment, Huo Siyuan's raised and split lips really made it difficult to suppress even an AK-47. I thought you were asleep. A low, deep voice came from the top of Xiaowan's head. Xiaowan dared not move, not at all. Xiaowan could really feel that Huo Siyuan's chest was so hot, even though she was wearing pajamas. I, just now, was sleeping. Xiaowan was so hot that she couldn't even speak properly. Hot. Xiaowan spoke in a small voice. Hearing this soft and mellow voice, Huo Siyuan really couldn't hold back anymore, and his whole body was burning. Well. Huo Siyuan only responded with a single word in a deep voice. Are you running a fever? Huo Siyuan listened to his wife's sweet and gentle voice as she said words of concern to him. His own little wife is really so pure. But I like it. Thinking this, he reached over with one hand and put his arm around Xiaowan. He spoke in a deep voice, no. He swallowed, and his sexy Adam's apple rolled up and down. Xiaowan looked at the bare arm that reached from behind her and under her body, and the two hands that were still tightly wrapped around her. Are you not wearing any clothes? Calmly said. You rascal, you go and get dressed. Saying this, her body couldn't help but struggle a little. Huo Siyuan had originally been holding Xiaowan in his arms, and was just holding back. Now the little treasure was still moving around in his arms. Who could stand this? He groaned. Calmly said. Go to sleep. Xiaowan obediently replied. Looking at such a cute Xiaowan, Huo Siyuan couldn't help but bend down and gently kiss her white and rosy forehead. Good night. Xiaowan didn't expect Huo Siyuan to suddenly kiss her and was stunned. Huo Siyuan lay down next to Xiaowan and lay quietly next to her, but his eyes never left Xiaowan. It was the first time Xiaowan had ever been consciously sleeping with a stranger, and she thought she would feel uncomfortable. But she didn't, and she soon fell into a deep sleep. Huo Siyuan also lay in bed, looking at Xiaowan sleeping next to him, far away from him. He shook his head helplessly, kept watching Xiaowan until he heard her even breathing, then sat up and gently embraced her, holding her close. Xiaowan, who had already fallen asleep, felt the heat source and naturally reached out and turned around to hug the heat source. Huo Siyuan was also very satisfied with Xiaowan's embrace, and his mouth unconsciously rose. Every night, you are mine, and you will only be by my side in the future. The two fell asleep quietly like this. The next morning. Sunlight poured through the window and fell on the bed, warming the people. Xiaowan slowly opened her eyes and found that she was being tightly embraced by Huo Siyuan. A blush rose to her face as she gently pushed him, only to find that he was still asleep. One of her hands was wrapped around Huo Siyuan's waist like a vine, and her head was resting on his strong arm, not her own pillow. No wonder she had a splitting headache and almost had a crick in her neck. This arm was even harder than a stone. Xiaowan rolled her eyes and thought to herself, this is the moment. He's not awake yet, so I should sneak back to my side and pretend like none of this ever happened. Let's see if he's awake. She muttered, Huo Siyuan, and waved her little hand in front of Huo Siyuan's face. Xiaowan carefully lifted her hand, which looked like a light butterfly dancing in the air. However, the hand did not fly away, but landed on Huo Siyuan's face like a dragonfly. She gently traced Huo Siyuan's eyebrows, murmuring, "Your eyebrows are really pretty." Then she lightly sketched his nose. "Your nose is like a towering mountain peak, so straight." Then she gently stroked his cheek. "How come you're such a big guy, but your skin is so smooth and delicate, almost as good as mine? This is not good." The little hand continued to slide down, like a naughty little snake, all the way to his Adam's apple, and she giggled mischievously. "This is the first time I've touched an Adam's apple, it's amazing. It moves. I heard that you shouldn't touch a guy's Adam's apple casually." Then, a low voice like a cello came from Xiaowan's head. "Baby, you can't tease a man in the morning like that. If you touch me again, I won't be able to control myself, and you'll be able to experience the consequences for yourself." Huo Siyuan had long since woken up the moment Xiaowan called his name for the first time, but was just pretending to sleep to see what the little guy wanted. Xiaowan was scared by the sound like a startled fawn. The hand that had been moving around mischievously stopped immediately as if under a spell, and she kept her eyes tightly shut and said nothing. Xiaowan had been caught red-handed and had to pretend to be asleep. Huo Siyuan gazed down at Xiaowan, whose eyes were closed, and a smile of fondness could not be suppressed at the corner of his mouth. Xiaowan continued to pretend to be asleep. "Night-night, I know you little lazy cat have already woken up." With his other hand, he wrapped it around Xiaowan's waist like a pair of iron pincers, and placed his chin intimately on the top of Xiaowan's head. Suddenly, he blurted out like a child, "That's good." Hugged tightly in Huo Siyuan's arms, Xiaowan felt as if she was being strangled by a large hand, making it difficult to breathe. "Loosen up a little, I can't breathe." Huo Siyuan immediately became as nervous as an ant on a hot pan. He loosened his grip, lowered his head, and looked worried. "Night-night, how are you feeling now? Are you feeling better?" Breathing weakly in Huo Siyuan's arms, he gently reached out his hand, which was like a spring breeze, gently stroking Xiaowan's chest, slowly rubbing it. "Feeling better?" Xiaowan finally managed to catch his breath, only to realize that one of Huo Siyuan's large hands was placed on his chest like a branding iron. He suddenly felt shy and immediately reached out a hand as if he had been electrocuted and placed it on Huo Siyuan's hand. She tried to move it away, but alas, her strength was as small as a mosquito's, and she could not move it at all. Instead, Huo Siyuan's hand, like a magnet, stuck tightly to her chest. Huo Siyuan had originally planned to put his hand down, but he never expected that the baby's soft, boneless little hand, with just a light touch, would stick tightly to that softness like a magnet. His Adam's apple involuntarily rolled a little. Xiaowan saw that she couldn't lift her hand, and that the more she lifted it, the tighter it gripped. It was as if she was imprisoned by an invisible force. She said, "I'm feeling much better. You should lower your hand first. I need to get up." Huo Siyuan reluctantly lowered his hand, and with extreme gentleness, as if he were handling a rare treasure, helped Xiaowan up.